In a world of ruin, could Naruto survive The Last of Us?
Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Was in The Last of Us movie. Before we start, please go support Dragneel Slayer for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. The world ravaged by the Cordyceps infection. Survivors willing to do anything that would previously have been seen as questionable. Surviving in a world that seeks your death causes distrust to grow and forces you to choose who to trust. The infected have filled the world, forcing people to survive in quarantine zones or on their own, scavenging for resources and allying themselves with people with questionable attitudes. Promising Tess to take Ellie to the Fireflies, Joel risks his life on the promise made to his friend and deceased companion, seeing in the girl a possible cure for the infection that has ravaged the world. Surrounded by infected at one of Lincoln's schools, Joel, Ellie, and Bill are saved by a strange teenager wearing a firefly locket around his neck. From this point on, Naruto joins both of their lives. Prologue. The sky was pitch black and the rain fell heavily on the city, making it impossible to see anything more than their own noses. Strong and angry, the wind whipped the rain around, sending the drops slamming down the abandoned vehicles parked all over the street. The windows, once completely intact, were now shattered, and in those that were complete, they showed some slight damage that left lines on the glass of each vehicle's window, including the front and rear windshields. The dust that had been covering these vehicles had turned into mud with the rain, dirtying the abandoned vehicles. The city was also abandoned. Plants had taken the place formerly occupied by sidewalks or lampposts. Wild, untamed, the plants emerged from between the cracks in the streets or walls, spreading across the length and breadth of the streets or buildings, causing some to partially collapse both from prolonged neglect and from the appearance of the plants, which didn't even seem to go away with that night storm. A storm with thunder that lit up the sky and with sounds that masked other. Much more disturbing, much softer sounds, but which, if the rain and thunder weren't covering them, would make people shiver, and not just from the cold and dampness of the rain. It was at that moment in the night that the thunder briefly fell silent for a few seconds and the rain softened to the point where the drops became mere caresses. In that instant, which lasted barely a minute, a deafening roar filled the night. Shortly before crackling sounds began to be heard, the rain began to fall again, and the thunder lit up the night with a little more force than before, allowing four figures to be glimpsed. They had emerged from one of the buildings and were running up the street, dodging abandoned vehicles and jumping over debris. The four men each carried a large, military-looking, somewhat old backpack filled with pockets, with some barely visible damage to the fabric. They were dressed in dark clothing, a shade of olive or dark military green, and carried firearms in their hands, outside the various holsters they carried. The first of the group, who was in the lead, was a red-haired man with a scruffy beard and dirty hair falling to his shoulders. He was wearing a huge green coat and carrying what appeared to be a sawed-off shotgun in his hands, while on his back he carried a huge military backpack. He stopped when he reached a fork and turned to look at his three companions, taking the opportunity to catch his breath. He wasn't in bad physical shape, but he didn't seem to be in completely optimal shape either, as could be seen from the way he slightly rocked his left arm, as if his shoulder was bothering him. The other three were quick to catch up. The woman with brown hair tied back in a bun was the first to reach him. She was 2 heads shorter than the redhead, with chocolate brown eyes and a dirty heart-shaped face. She was carrying a backpack that bulged slightly more than her, and her hands held a slightly rusty assault rifle, with marks of damage that didn't seem to bother either the woman or the man. Next to arrive were a younger man, probably in his teens, with black hair, gray eyes and pale skin, and a young woman, in her early 20s, with black hair and gray eyes like the boy, but with slightly more tanned skin than him, and a harder, sharper face. The four of them had the luxury of staying there for a few minutes, but they kept an eye on each other's backs and the path they'd come from. The sounds of the night and the storm prevented them from hearing clearly what was happening around them and made it difficult for them to continue moving toward a safer familiar area. Therefore, they had to think carefully about their next move, because if they took a wrong step in that city, it could be their end. It was the red-haired man who first turned his attention back to where they had come from, peering into the darkness, his eyes narrowed. He closed his hands around the sawed-off shotgun and gripped it more firmly than before, as if he had seen something moving behind them, lurking. "We need to meet with Marlene in Boston." The redhead's voice came out much more hoarse, as if his throat had gone completely dry. The man swallowed hard before continuing. "And make sure the shipment can get to the Firefly base, as agreed. We have to deliver the material to her." "Hand over the material." The brown-eyed woman spat. "Do you think we can get out of here? Look, Christopher. This place is full of—" "Stop, don't scream," the young woman hissed, frightened. "You might be able to get them to us. And I still want to live a little longer, don't I, William?" The boy shrugged at what his companion said, but didn't look at her. William, the younger boy, seemed more scared than the girl or the two adults. His pale face was flecked with fresh blood, tiny drops that seemed to have drawn small moles and freckles on his cheeks and nose. Oh. The woman shook her head. You should have left him alone, Anna. Because of your little brother, Fred is dead now. It wasn't her fault, Anna hissed, glaring at the woman. It was her first mission. The four were members of the Fireflies, the rebel group fighting against Fedra and the totalitarian military governments in the quarantine zones. Christopher had been working with them for 2 years, and Anna, the younger girl, had been with them longer, ever since she was a child and escaped from one of the quarantine zones. William, on the other hand, had just joined them, and this was his first mission, his first job, and he saw one of his teammates die when an infected bit him, causing Gwen, the oldest woman in the group, to shoot Fred. Enough, Christopher's voice hardened. This isn't the place for recriminations, Gwen. Or arguments, Anna. He looked at both women before turning his gaze on William. We'll talk later, kid. Now, hold your gun tight and let's go. With a gesture, the four began to move. Christopher decided to take the road on the right. There weren't as many cars and the grass didn't seem to have grown as long as on other streets, so they could move much more quickly than if they had chosen the other street. Both seemed to lead north, right where they needed to go to move toward Boston, where Marlene was supposed to be waiting for them. Christopher took the lead, heading the group as they squeezed through the few vehicles in the area. He now gripped the shotgun much more tightly, his eyes glued to the front of the car. Standing in the middle, the brothers aimed left and right and looked sideways, searching for any sign of movement so they wouldn't be caught off guard by a surprise attack coming out of the alleys and side streets. Finally, Gwen looked back every few steps, holding her weapon and breathing a little heavily from the tension. Her hands didn't seem to be sweating from the rain, but they held the weapon a little too firmly, almost as if it might slip out of her grasp. In that instant, everything happened in a single instant, in a small oversight. Something moved in the shadows, causing an old trash can to crash to the ground, making a shrill sound that made the four of them simultaneously swing their guns toward it. 4 barrels pointed down the dark damp alley, but they saw nothing. Christopher thought it was the wind or the force of the water, which, pushed by the wind, knocked the trash can over, causing the noise. So he slowly lowered his shotgun, exhaling the air held in his mouth, ready to continue north. Then something lunged at him, and he couldn't react in time. It wasn't something that came out of the alley, but something that emerged from between the few vehicles behind them and bit down hard on Christopher's neck, causing a searing pain that made him scream. Ahhh. The creature's teeth tore a huge chunk out of his neck. Christopher saw his own flesh being crushed by the infected before he twisted around and fired directly at his target's head, which exploded and stained his face and clothes with brains and blood. Chrisfoot. Shit. Staggering, Christopher leaned against a rotten bench that gave way under his weight, causing him to fall to his right knee and be forced to support himself on the ground. Tentatively, he felt the wound, the bite, and felt the blood soaking his fingers, the way it trickled down the inside of his clothes and wet his skin. There's nothing you can do, Anna murmured, looking worriedly at Christopher. He's. It doesn't matter, Christopher muttered, forcing himself to stand with a superhuman effort. I have a few hours to get you out of the city. That's what Marlene told me. But Christopher's words died in his throat and his eyes widened. Several infected, like a tide, fell upon his companions and covered them, sinking their teeth into them, devouring them, while the sound of gunfire replaced the thunder that had ceased to roar intensely. It didn't take long for the blood to mix with the water, darkening it and turning its colorless hue into a dark reddish one, as if someone had spilled wine on the water. Sons of bitches. Christopher raised his weapon and fired at 2 infected, sending them several meters back as the shot struck both, separating them from Gwen's corpse. With effort, feeling the wound throb, he guided the weapon directly toward a 3rd infected. Ah. Another infected bit him from behind like the first, causing him to lower his shotgun, and the infected he was aiming at advanced on him, chunks of flesh between its teeth. The man gritted his teeth. Come on, you bastards. But something struck the infected between the eyebrows. The long thin object was embedded in the infected person's forehead, passing through his head from side to side and its tip emerging from the back, completely stained with blood and pieces of bone, hair, flesh and brains. Something fell on a car, causing another metallic crash. Another crack and 2 more infected were brought down with similar elongated objects. One of these was the one biting Christopher, allowing the man to drop to the ground, holding the area of the first bite, which had grown larger when the other infected bit him. Sitting there, he watched as the infected were shot down with barely visible projectiles and, curious, he looked at the one that pierced the head of the infected who attacked him. It was a wooden arrow with a fletching of 3 black feathers, like the very clouds that covered the city. Are you okay? You've been bitten really badly. Christopher stopped looking at the infected and the arrow and looked at the one who had fired them. He was wearing a hood that almost completely hid his face, leaving only a few blonde strands visible, while the lower half of his face was covered by a cloth mask slightly stained with blood. He was a young man, almost 6 feet tall, with a body that wasn't thin, but wasn't fat either. The handle of what looked like a katana could be seen in the quiver on his back, from which the fletchings of several arrows also protruded. "An HG I don't think I'll ever recover, kid." "I see that," the stranger admitted. His eyes moved to the pendant around Christopher's neck. "The fireflies, huh? I don't believe in rebellion or politics, not in a completely free world like this. Fighting like you do is pointless." "You're wrong, kid. The fireflies we're fighting for your freedom." "I'm free now," the young man replied, placing the bow on his back. "I don't need anyone to fight my wars." "Ha. Christopher coughed while laughing, spitting out blood. "Tell that to the infected, brat. They and we can't fight the infection." Christopher pulled out his pendant, having an idea, and handed it to the hooded man. "I don't want your accessory. Give it to Marlene in Boston, will you? I don't do favors or errands." "I'm not so sure if it's the wish of a dead person." The stranger's eyes widened, and shortly after, before he could react, the sound of a gunshot echoed through the street before a loud bang followed. Christopher shot himself. "Idiots," the boy growled, staring at the bodies of the 4 fireflies. He grabbed the edge of his hood and pulled it back, revealing messy blonde hair that swayed in the wind. A sharp face came into view when he pulled down the mask, no baby fat left. Blue eyes shifted, scanning the night. "Why do I have to meet dead idiots?" The boy looked at the pendant and squeezed it. It wasn't just a pendant with the firefly symbol, but a locket with a picture of a girl staring back at him for a few seconds before he instinctively closed it. "The final wish for your daughter?" he murmured, tucking the locket into the folds of his clothes. "Boston, huh? I guess I can change the course a bit." Chapter 1. Lincoln was a small town in Amherst County, Massachusetts, a few miles north of Boston, and like many other towns, it was uninhabited. Its houses were completely empty, their facades worn by time. It had been 20 years since the infection had appeared in the world. Dusty, rusty cars filled its streets, completely abandoned and dilapidated, their windows dirty with dust, if they still had any. Vegetation, as in other parts of the world, had taken over much of the town, taking advantage of any opening it could find. The plants that were already present only grew uncontrollably and occupied the space as quickly as they could, thus giving Lincoln a wild and neglected image. This, combined with the state of its buildings and the absence of living people, turned the small town into a ghost town, just another of hundreds that already were. The Cordyceps infection had reduced the world's population to just a few 100,000 people worldwide, leaving many cities completely empty, abandoned, and overrun by wildlife. The only people who dared to walk these empty streets were those with nothing to lose. With the emergence of the infected, the only people venturing into cities like Lincoln were smugglers, raiders, or strange groups of people looking for a way to survive. Normal people, those with the greatest fear, remained hidden in quarantine zones, protected by the military and monitored so they couldn't escape. Despite the dangers, abandoned cities had the resources necessary for survival, making them perfect places for groups of survivors to settle if they were smart enough to do so and be able to outlast the infected, who would be walking the streets and abandoned buildings, lurking like predators. And not everyone loved the government. Some people still remained in the abandoned cities, and small-town Lincoln was no exception. It still had one living person walking its streets and among its buildings, surviving as the only living person in the small town. Though that had largely been due to his paranoia and his need to survive the infected away from the hands of the government and the military, Lincoln had been riddled with traps in every alley, on every street, on every corner. This person had undermined Lincoln. Lincoln was a small town, but it had a huge number of infected compared to larger cities, making it a perfect place for a careless person to die at the slightest mistake. But this wasn't the case for the only person alive in Lincoln, all thanks to his makeshift traps and paranoia about the government. Bill, the only man and living being left in Lincoln, was a paranoid and reclusive person, becoming a competent scavenger when the Cordyceps epidemic began. This had earned him the enmity of many people and made him the only person anyone could turn to when visiting Lincoln, although Bill always wished people would leave his town and leave him alone, making him seem much more of a recluse than he appeared. He had a strange personality and didn't trust strangers or acquaintances, no matter how long they had worked together. For him, anyone who visited Lincoln was a potential enemy he would eventually have to kill to survive, or at least that was the impression he gave to anyone who knew him. But despite this, he always returned the favors. Being the only person alive in all of Lincoln made Bill the only point all survivors would have to pass through if they were to survive the city. He was the only one who knew where all the traps were set. He was the only one who knew where the largest groups of infected in the city were. And he was the only one who knew where the city's resources were if he hadn't already taken them to survive himself. And that's what a couple of survivors did. Joel Miller and Ellie Williams had been forced to head towards Lincoln with the intention of obtaining a vehicle to take them to the Fireflies after seeing that they were not at the first meeting point in the capital, where Joel should have left Ellie, a teenager, with the rebels, since it was his job to take the girl with them, something he promised his partner before she died, and Joel knew that Bill was the only one who could help them. Since he owed him favors from other jobs they had done together. And they found Bill. The man's traps were scattered all over the city, so strangers could get caught in one and be eaten by the infected, and before going to Lincoln, Joel had always met up with Bill at checkpoints that were closer to Boston, so he never set foot in the small town, and was unaware of all the traps and barricades Bill had set up there, and because of that he ended up hanging from one, watching the infected approach, and forcing Ellie to cut the rope so he could escape. Using his revolver, Joel took down several infected before the girl released him and fell on her own right arm, slightly injuring it in the process and preventing him from shooting an infected that was already on top of him, and that's how they encountered Bill. The man ruthlessly decapitated the infected with a machete and then berated the two of them for destroying his traps to find him. But Joel found fair as they had to disable many of the traps to find him and left a direct path to him without proper defenses, which would give Bill a lot more work and force him to use resources he'd probably want to use elsewhere. After several minutes of discussion, Bill finally forgave Joel, and the three set out to find a battery from a military truck to power one of the city cars. Bill clarified that, after that, all his debts to Joel would be fully settled, and Joel agreed, as handing over a battery in good condition was extremely valuable in this day and age. The three of them dodged the infected and advanced from the church, Bill's warehouse full of weapons, and reached one of the schools in the small town where they took shelter, protecting themselves from the infected who had begun to chase them, coming out of all possible places. Close the doors. Bill's scream echoed over the wails of the infected, who had begun running toward them, chasing them through the school hallways. Joel turned in time to fire a shot directly into one of their faces, knocking him down and sending his body several feet back. He continued on his way, following Ellie and urging her inside what appeared to be the gymnasium. Several wooden crates were scattered around the area, suggesting someone had used the place as a temporary shelter, likely early on in the infection, likely guided by the government and the military. Where do we get out now, damn it? Bill stopped in front of a completely closed door at the other end of the gym and rammed his shoulder into it, finding that the door didn't budge an inch and that they were locked in the gym. Another shot reverberated off the walls, and blood and brains sprayed across the gym floor as the infected man's head burst from the impact of the bullet, almost as if he had been crushed into ripe fruit. But they were still in danger. The infected moved guided by the noise, and the gunshots had caught the attention of everyone surrounding the school and, probably, those several blocks away. To kill an infected with the utmost certainty, one had to use bladed weapons or bows, crossbows, and silencers to avoid giving away one's position and attracting worse creatures, like the mutated infected, who barely suffered any damage from gunfire and became a real danger to any survivors. Both Joel and Bill were aware that having fired the shot would make it much more difficult for them to escape, which became almost impossible when they added that they were locked in a gymnasium, with the only exit blocked and infected people coming down the hallway. They could hear them. Over there. It was Ellie who pointed to the only exit visible to them. A window above some bleachers lightly covered with a dusty blue fabric. Sunlight streamed in faintly, illuminating the gymnasium. There didn't seem to be any infected trying to get in at the window, so it looked like the only viable way out. They had to escape the infected who kept coming in, increasingly irritated than the last time. It's the only way we can escape, Bill growled, turning toward the stands. I'll try to open it as quickly as possible. Joel, take care of these. The order didn't please Joel, who growled through his teeth as he shot another infected directly in the head. It was the best way to kill them. A direct shot to the head, destroying the brain and the cordyceps that controlled the body. He had previously learned that shooting the body or limbs could mean the infected could continue walking, surviving, devouring, and he saw several of his companions die from it. He wouldn't do it. He raised the shotgun and pulled the trigger, watching as the fifth infected person fell to the ground, his head bursting like a melon and blood staining the polished gym floor. If someone had asked him 20 years ago about his participation in a fight against something resembling zombies, Joel would have laughed it off and called the person an idiot for mentioning it. But it seemed the paranoid anarchists fighting governments weren't wrong, and the apocalypse lovers were right. After 20 years in a destroyed world, a simple memory or thought of the past was the most idiotic thing he could think of. Joel took a deep breath and took more shotgun shells from his back pocket, where he'd stashed them. But he discovered, too late, that he only had 3 of the shotgun shells Bill had given him back at the church when they were gathering supplies so they could travel to the battery. I had no ammunition. Shit. He quickly inserted the 3 cartridges, but Joel drew his revolver as he was about to insert the last one. He shot another infected person directly between the eyebrows, causing him to fall on his back. At that moment, the door Bill had tried to open earlier swung open, slamming into the wall on both sides. Joel turned his attention to it, pushing open some bars on the door they'd come through, the only one clear of infected. A huge infected man had opened the door with sheer physical force. He was covered in a strange bumpy skin that occasionally released spores. The infected person was in the fourth stage of the infection, as evidenced by the way his body was covered in bumps, his skin was more hardened, and he was larger and broader than the infected person could have been. He also had greater strength than the other infected people. Joel. Don't just stare at him, damn it. Come on. Joel silently cursed himself and ran towards the dismantled steps Ellie and Bill had used to climb up to the window. But Fatty was faster than Joel expected and rammed into them harder, causing them to creak and give way under the impact of the infected, causing Joel to jump back as he leveled the shotgun at the dust and debris. Come out and let me shoot you in the head. The fatties had a natural defense thanks to the bulges that the infection mutated on their bodies. This gave them greater defense, allowing them to withstand small caliber weapons, so to defeat one, you had to use weapons with greater penetration or explosives. And fire never hurt against these infected, or against any type of infected. Fatty emerged from the rubble, staggering slightly, but focusing his attention solely on Joel, the only one within reach to eat. And he launched himself at him. His footsteps echoed in the gym, reverberating between the four walls, as if someone were constantly pounding the floor. Joel shot. The bullet hit the infected man full on, but it didn't reduce its speed or its power. It began to hit the crates, focused only on the only one who shared that space with it. Joel. Ellie tried to go back in, scared, and Bill grabbed her by the waist, pulling her back. They both watched as the infected continued advancing toward Joel, much angrier than he seemed, upset with the person who shot him. Then, the glass in another window shattered, falling inward, and 2 bullets penetrated Fatty's body, stopping him for a second. And, in that second, the bullets caused a small explosion that made him stagger backward and allowed Joel to free himself from the grasp of the enormous infected. Boo. The glass crunched, and Joel, Ellie, and Bill's attention focused on a new person who had entered through another window, the same one the projectiles had broken. He was almost 6 feet tall with messy blonde hair pointing in different directions. He held a bow in his right hand, while in his left hand, he held another arrow ready to be fired. Get out of the way, old man. The boy raised his bow, and Joel stepped away from Fatty, who had already focused his attention on the boy with the bow. The bowman fired, releasing the arrow with a cracking sound. Swiftly, the projectile penetrated between 2 lumps of the infected man's skin and, shortly after, exploded, causing Fatty's right arm to slough slightly and blood to trickle down the limb. It's too hard, the boy hissed, taking 2 more arrows from his quiver. Get down now. The fatty's left arm moved to try and grab the boy, but he jumped to the right, spinning around. Crouching down, he fired another arrow that exploded before it penetrated the infected skin, causing him to crash into the wall. I can't use larger explosions, he said, looking over Joel's shoulder. Shoot him where the last of my arrows exploded. Pursing his lips, Joel almost did as the boy instructed. He closed his right eye, using his left to view the area hit by the last arrow, and pulled the trigger with his thumb, causing his shotgun to spit out the last of the cartridges and inflict a deep wound on the infected, destroying the area affected by the blast. Now. The boy ran toward the rubble under the window, followed by Joel, and threw his bow through it, jumping out and leaving the gym. He turned and yanked Joel out with a mighty tug, just as the doors opened and the infected flooded into the gym. What who? Not here, idiot, Bill growled. Follow me. The 4 left the school as quickly as they could. They ran through narrow streets, dodging abandoned cars and debris littering the sidewalks, all the while avoiding any encounter with another group of infected. Eventually the group reached a house and Bill pushed them inside, closing it tightly. That was close. I wouldn't recommend. Wow. Calm down, man. Joel held the revolver right in front of the boy's face, an action Bill mimicked. Ellie was pushed behind Joel, but her eyes were fixed on the pendant dangling from around the boy's neck. Who are you? What are you doing in my city, kid? Your city? As far as I know, okay. The boy raised his hands and dropped his quiver and bow, causing a metallic clash as an elongated object emerged from it. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm just looking to get to Boston to see Marlene. The mention of the Firefly leader made Joel's arm tremble slightly and Bill looked at him for a split second. In which split second Naruto reacted. He pushed Joel's arm upwards with his elbow, causing his revolver to fly out and spun on his foot, planting a knee in Bill's stomach, which sent him sitting down, the shotgun resting in his lap. Boy. I don't like being pointed at, man. Joel and Naruto were pointing at each other. The man hadn't seen when the boy had pulled out his Glock, but there it was. Firmly in his hand, arm extended, pointing directly at his head. This closeness allowed him to see what he was wearing. A military green t-shirt over a black short-sleeved shirt covered his torso. Black combat pants matched his black boots, and a holster was strapped to his right leg, also held by a belt with several pockets. She moved her eyes, seeing Naruto's sharp face, his blue eyes like two sapphires, and the pendant with the firefly symbol around his neck, in full view. "Are you a firefly?" "Yeah." Joel lowered his arm, and Naruto followed suit. This action caused Ellie to sigh and Bill to grunt. "Then I can give you Marlene's package." "Package?" Naruto raised an eyebrow. "It's a long story, but I'm looking for Marlene, and from what you mentioned, you are too." He put the gun away. "Now, I think it's time we figure out why and help each other out." Chapter 2. The Dragonflies were a terrorist rebel group that had been born with the intention of fighting against the totalitarian military governments that had been created in the quarantine zones. They also faced off against the members of Frida and against almost anyone who might be restricting people's freedom, even in an apocalyptic world like the one that had been established at the birth of the infection. Laws did not exist, and the survival of the fittest was the natural law that all survivors currently used, but the Dragonflies were unable to see that. The current world could not return to what it had been years ago, no matter how much they fought against the military, Frida, and against anyone who seemed to be the villain. Despite this, some people had faith in the promises that the Dragonflies extended in the quarantine zones, attracting more and more followers. At least until the fight in Boston. As much as the leaders of the rebel group promised freedom and substantial improvements compared to what the government was doing, they were losing members at an accelerated pace, and the group was slowly running out of assets to continue fighting their enemies. And they seemed to have bet everything on a 14-year-old girl. A girl in whom their leader, Marlene, had placed all the hopes not only of the Dragonflies, but of the entire world, for some strange reason that no one seemed to understand at the moment. Naruto knew, on some hunch, that Joel knew this information that Marlene was keeping to herself, and that was the reason why they were looking for the rebels. The four of them were in the dusty living room of one of the many houses in the small town. Bill had taken care of securing the doors and windows and looked at Naruto with some apprehension, remembering how he had easily beaten him and how he had nearly disarmed Joel before nearly shooting him in the head. An action that had caught the two men by surprise. They hadn't met anyone with such great fighting skills, and they themselves had been caught off guard, which had caused the previous scene. Naruto, however, was relaxed. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. His gun was on the table, the magazine to one side, and the chamber drowned upright, pointing skyward, thus assuring Bill and Joel that he wasn't going to shoot them. But he wasn't the only one who had left his weapons. Joel had left his revolver to one side, with all 6 rounds out, and Bill had placed his shotgun at the other end of the table, with all the cartridges stacked in a small pile. The only one who hadn't left anything was Ellie. She wasn't armed, and Naruto didn't see any potential danger in her when he remembered how she reacted in the previous confrontation. Neither of them had mentioned the fight at the entrance to the house, nor the confrontation in the gym against the infected, so neither Joel nor Bill had properly thanked the boy. In fact, their eyes still seemed to shine with a certain caution and resentment, as if they were waiting for some movement from him. But Naruto couldn't blame them. In an apocalyptic world, trust is the least important thing. No one should be trusting anyone, not even a little 15-year-old girl. At the thought of the girl, Naruto looked at her out of the corner of his eye. Thin, with reddish hair tied in a ponytail, dirty skin and green eyes that looked at him with some interest and caution, like a scared kitten. After looking at the girl, he shifted his gaze to Bill. He had slicked back gray hair and a trimmed beard that matched his hair color. The wrinkles on his forehead were noticeable, and his small eyes regarded him much more cautiously than the girl's, suggesting the man was far more suspicious than Ellie, far more dangerous. One false move, and Bill would likely shoot him in the back without any hard feelings or remorse haunting him in his sleep. A distrustful, paranoid man. Joel's hair was shorter than Bill's, but the same grayish color as Bill's. His beard was thicker, and his face had many more cuts and small burns from being out in the sun too long. If Naruto were comparing the two men, Joel had a better body than Bill, probably thanks to having been constantly on the move for much longer. And that made him more dangerous. Bill was paranoid and suspicious, which made him someone who could stab him in the back if he saw anything strange at any moment. Joel, on the other hand, seemed calmer, more calculating, and seemed like someone who measured his every step, but he wasn't much more confident than Bill. The gaze of both men was distrustful, and they were calculating their movements. It was a completely understandable situation, both given the world they lived in and the situation they'd been through less than half an hour ago, both in the gym and at the entrance to the house. Who would waste resources helping 3 strangers escape from the infected, one of them being Fatty? Only altruists and idiots would do something like that, which made Naruto one of the two in Bill's eyes, who was skeptical and eager to grab his shotgun. Naruto was the first to ease the tension in the room by moving slightly, pushing away from the wall, and letting the men see his height. very close to Joel's, which was surprising considering he was a teenager. What caught Joel's attention was the boy's physical condition. An athletic body, with no signs of malnutrition or dehydration, typical of someone who had eaten properly. He also couldn't see any signs of fat or overweight, so he seemed to have a balanced diet suitable for maintaining a body in such good condition as the one he saw. And this was strange. The quarantine zones didn't provide people with a completely varied or balanced diet, so many showed signs of malnutrition or physical discomfort. They had to live on rations, so eating just the right amount of food was a habit of today's world, and Joel didn't see any signs of that in Naruto, which led him to believe the boy didn't belong in any quarantine zone, much less with the dragonflies. He looked much better than the rebels, much better cared for, and that made him seem completely alien. Thank you. Thank you for helping us at the gym. Ellie broke the tense silence when she saw Naruto move, and seeing that neither Joel nor Bill would speak first, she decided to do so, being sincere with her thanks. If it weren't for the boy, Joel would probably be dead. Yes, thanks. Contrary to the warm Ellie, Bill spoke with a somewhat distrustful tone, and his eyes constantly moved towards the shotgun on the table and the cartridges stacked in the center, between the three weapons, making clear his intention to take it, or, rather, his desire to have it in his hands, probably feeling naked without it. If it weren't for you, I probably would have ended up dead. Naruto's eyes looked at Joel, and he smiled slightly at the man's grateful tone. It's nothing, he muttered, shrugging as if saving people was a regular activity. It was just on my way to Boston. Marlene is no longer in Boston. I was afraid so. I was hoping to find someone who knew where it was and head there. Naruto wasn't lying completely. He was heading to Boston to search for any trace of the Fireflies, and it didn't necessarily have to be traces of Marlene or any member of her command. Any member in the middle or lower echelons was just as good as one of the higher-ups, maybe even better. The people at the bottom feared losing much more than those at the top. There's no Fireflies in Boston, kid, Joel said, staring at him. The man was waiting for any reaction that would give him away, that would make him doubt him, and thus confirm his suspicions. But Naruto remained impassive, with a questioning look. The army was in charge of eliminating any trace and expelling Marlene and her people from the city. That's why I'm here, looking for any trace of her. It was true that he was looking for Marlene, but Joel wasn't being truthful. He'd already come to a conclusion about how to find her and who could help them, but he didn't want to mention it in front of a stranger. Much less if that stranger was looking for the dragonflies and knew about Ellie's existence. Hadn't Marlene told all the members of her group about the girl? That seemed strange to Joel, who narrowed his eyes slightly at Naruto when the thought appeared in his mind, even if it was only for a few seconds, which made the thought completely fleeting, but there it was. Maybe Naruto was lying to him and wasn't one of the Fireflies, and wasn't as old as his brother, so if he was a member, he must have known about Ellie's existence, but he didn't. You don't know about the girl, Joel spoke again, causing Naruto to look at him. He wasn't intimidated by those blue eyes that stared at him like two icy daggers, nor did he even flinch when he saw them darken slightly, perhaps in recognition of what he was trying to do. I'd say your membership in the Dragonflies is recent or very recent. Almost everyone seemed to know about the girl. I'm not part of the core group, Naruto's voice sounded firm, confident, and didn't waver under Joel's scrutiny. I come from another section of the group, one in the south. As you know, the Dragonflies are divided into different cells separate from the command and operate at our own risk. My group was completely wiped out by the army, and I need to know my new location to continue working against the government. That should confirm my reasons for not knowing about her. It was true that the terrorist group operated in cells, making the Dragonflies a very difficult group to completely exterminate. But then why did Marlene seem so desperate when she handed Ellie over and decided to keep the weapons? Joel doubted Naruto was a member of the group and didn't believe the Dragonflies had enough members to form different branches of their group across the country. He also had no way of proving that she was lying and didn't belong to some other branch of the rebels. How did you find out I was in Boston? Every Dragonfly cell has information on the position of the leader, in this case Marlene. My boss had that information in a safe under the floor and I used it to track her. It was some colleagues from another section who sent me on the road to Boston. Naruto's eyes flashed brightly at the half-truth. It had been members of the Dragonflies who had given him the information, but they weren't his comrades and he hadn't obtained that information peacefully. It wasn't even the red-haired man who had given him Marlene's location before he died. Did you come alone? Yes. I don't have a group. Why didn't you stay with the people from the other cell? That's not how it works, Joel. Despite being independent, Marlene is the queen bee of our enormous hive. Once a cell is reduced, the remaining members seek out the leader to reorganize. I suppose you know about the small numbers Marlene has and the losses she's had in Boston, right? I heard something on the way, yes. That's why I must find her. Together we are stronger and I can't allow the leader to die, not in vain. Bill snorted. Another crazy guy. Another one who's been brainwashed by those guys. Shoot him, Joel, and let's keep looking for the battery so you can get out of my town. Joel's face soured slightly before he moved his eyes to Bill. That? Are you an idiot, Bill? The man muttered. Are you going to shoot a teenager? Yes, of course. It's in my city. And I don't want this place filled with fireflies, thank you. Bill's threat made Naruto's lips twist before he let out a loud laugh. Are you crazy, kid? No, Naruto took a deep breath, calming his laughter. I just find your reasoning amusing. But I agree. It would be better to shoot myself and save you all the interrogation, right? Anyway, I'm just a firefly who could sneak you into any position without you getting shot by mistake. Those words made Joel blink a second longer than he should have. That would only happen if you were a firefly. Would you rather risk killing me and Marlene killing you, Joel? I'm insurance for you. The girl is insurance for me. You'd just be another mouth to keep alive. You offend me. I saved your ass back there, he complained, rolling his eyes. Naruto snorted a little loudly and walked over to the table, causing Joel and Bill to move as well. If you don't want me here, I'd better go somewhere else. He picked up the Glock from the table and inserted the magazine, loading the round he had removed from the chamber. He then holstered it in the holster strapped to his leg. Are you going to let him go, Joel? Do you want me to kill him? When has he ever saved my life? Joel and Bill stared at each other intensely, their intentions toward the boy at odds. Finally, after a brief stare down, Bill relented and grunted, taking the shotgun and loading him in the process. Fine. If he shoots you in the back, it's your fault. I'm not guilty. Joel's shoulders slumped briefly. He didn't trust the boy. Every word spoken and every answer heard made his head scream danger. But there was something strange about the boy's confidence that made him want to let him go. Does that mean you won't kill me? It means you're coming with me and Ellie, the man replied, loading the bullets into the chamber of his revolver. And I hope I don't make a mistake about you and have to shoot you before you're older. One false step and you're finished. I understand, Naruto smiled, but it'll be great to have me in your group. Chapter 3. On the dusty table in the living room of the abandoned house, Naruto had taken out all the supplies from the backpack he had with him to do a complete count of what he had. He had used several explosive arrows when he rescued Joel from the infected, and the supply had dropped slightly, leaving him with a couple of arrows left in his backpack, so he had to save those arrows for another time and place. Using them in open field would reduce their effectiveness, and they weren't powerful enough to blow up an entire group of infected chasing them, so they were useless to a certain extent. Next to the arrows were several magazines for the Glock the boy carried in his holster. These were filled with bullets, but there was also a box of 9mm bullets that were perfect for the pistol and for refilling the magazines. Naruto had, from the beginning, been proactive with the supplies he packed in his backpack. Maybe it was crazy to carry a box full of 9mm bullets, but it was much better than filling his pockets with magazines and refilling the 4 he had 5 with the one in the pistol. It was much better than changing magazines every so often, and he doubted those magazines would be easy to find or replace. Ammunition was scarce, and using what little they found in a practical way was important for survival. Naruto had learned this in the worst situations, and since then, he always carried boxes of ammunition in his backpack and had learned to refill his magazines without needing help. Next to the box and the magazines, the boy had placed another spare Glock. Same color, same model and same caliber as the one he carried in his holster, perfect for replacing the one he had if the time came to do so, which could happen in any possible situation in which he was forced to abandon his pistol. But not everything he carried inside his backpack was bullets, arrows, and weapons. A sheathed katana had been attached to the backpack strap at all times, its dark, faded, and weathered handle showing. Some infected were slower than others, and a bladed weapon was the best weapon to avoid attracting unwanted attention. With the improvement of the clickers due to their echolocation, using bladed weapons had become almost mandatory for those leaving the quarantine zones. A sword was useless against a horde, something Naruto and many others knew, but it wasn't useless in a small-scale confrontation with a handful of infected, and it allowed for bullets to be saved and not wasted. Next to the katana, which he had left on the other side of his military backpack, Naruto had placed all the supplies he had with him. Cans of food. Some fresh meat obtained from some animals wrapped in a cloth. And a large bag of beef jerky placed next to military food obtained from one of the quarantine zones. That was all the food I needed. Sitting at the table, Naruto began listing the supplies he had lost on his trip to Boston, so he could replace them and have everything back as it had been before leaving on his trip, and he did so in a timely manner. Bill and Joel were arguing in another room. Bill had proven to be a paranoid, distrustful, and much more reclusive man than he'd initially seemed, complaining about everything and everyone, as if his word and orders were the only ones that served to survive in the city. And, to a certain extent, Naruto was with Bill. The man knew where all the traps had been set and which places were the most dangerous, but that point had been surpassed. They hadn't found the car battery they needed and now they had to find another means of transportation. Better hijack another military truck. That option, Naruto had considered, had been presented to the two adult men, but had been rejected. The military didn't pass near the city due to the massive number of infected and preferred to take a long detour to get to Boston, which was completely understandable. Returning to Boston was completely out of the question for obvious reasons they all shared. And without a vehicle, going in search of the dragonflies was ruled out due to the danger of the trip. Although, Naruto disagreed. Traveling across the United States on foot, given the current state of the world, was becoming one of the most dangerous missions to undertake and was not at all advisable. Various groups of survivors had settled outside the quarantine zones, all of them displaying strange behaviors that even included eating other people, which made them look like cannibals. Add to that the presence of the infected, and the probability of surviving the journey dropped drastically to below 50%. And yet, he had done it. But I guess taking Ellie, being the package, isn't optimal if Marlene wants her alive. Naruto scratched the back of his neck with some uncertainty and proceeded to refill his backpack with supplies while he waited for Joel and Bill. The pair had gone to the other side of the house, but he could hear their muffled screams if he pressed his ear. It seemed Bill was really angry with Joel and wasn't giving the man much of a way out of the argument. Taking a deep breath, Naruto ended up pulling the slide of the Glock back, watching as this part of the gun yielded to his command without even protesting or putting any obstruction to the movement he wanted to perform. To fire the first shot, the shooter had to move the slide rearward the first time with each new magazine. After doing this, the slide moved automatically with each shot without any manipulation, allowing the shooter to focus solely on shooting. It wasn't something learned on the streets or something an ordinary person should know. But Naruto wasn't raised on the streets alone, nor was he a completely ordinary person. With this, the gun is ready for the first shot. He holstered his gun just as Ellie appeared in the living room with a smile. "We found the battery." There seemed to be no lie in the girl's eyes, much less in her slightly genuine smile, which reinforced the brightness of her gaze when Naruto and Ellie looked at each other for a full minute. Naruto admitted that he was happy. He had found, after a long time, someone of a similar age to his, although if he were to believe Joel, Ellie was 2 years younger than him, about 14, while he was almost 17, which he would turn on October 10th. But despite the difference, he was happy. He hadn't interacted with boys or girls his own age since their settlement was completely destroyed, with a handful of survivors either dead or infected by the Cordyceps and becoming even more infected. Really? Slightly skeptical, Naruto raised an eyebrow and waited for Ellie to tell him how they'd obtained the car battery. It wasn't supposed to be in the military truck. Someone had gotten there first and grabbed it before they could. If they'd found it, it meant it was in the garage of that house where Joel and Bill were arguing. Yes. It was in a car in the garage, belonging to a friend of Bill's, I think. The girl shrugged. She hadn't quite understood who Frank was, nor had she paid much attention. Joel and Bill had started arguing shortly after they'd parted ways with Naruto, and she wasn't going to listen too much, so she just searched the garage to see if she could find anything. Praise the gods, Naruto reached out and grabbed the strap of his backpack. So, what are we waiting for? When Naruto and Ellie arrived at the garage, the discussion between Joel and Bill was over and they found both men placing the battery perfectly into the car, as well as leaving some gas cans in the back of the truck in case they ran out of fuel during the trip. "Can any of you get into the driver's seat?" Joel had turned around when he heard the garage door open and looked at both teenagers for a few seconds. "Let Ellie do it," the blonde muttered, tossing his backpack next to the gas cans. "I doubt you want me in the cockpit when this place could be filled with infected at any moment." Naruto, Joel, and Bill worked their way out of the garage, but the vehicle still wouldn't fully start. The battery was working, something Naruto checked before allowing them to back the car out of the garage to try to get it started. "Bill and Naruto, you should push the car while Ellie turns the ignition. When it starts, we'll get in the back and pull far enough away to shift gears." "No, old man. You guys push." Naruto pulled his Glock from his holster, ready to use. "I'll hold off the infected while you do it. I have a better chance of surviving a fight than two old men." Bill snarled at the unveiled insult, but didn't argue and positioned himself behind the car, beginning to push it. Joel, on the other hand, glanced briefly at the boy before following his friend's example and positioning himself beside him to push the truck. Naruto turned around. The sound of the engine would begin to attract infected. Every attempt to start the truck would be another noise that would attract the attention of every infected in the area. It didn't matter if they were big or small. They would all run toward them when the truck finally started and they wouldn't have much time to react. Therefore, it was essential that he stay behind to protect them, something Naruto hadn't said in the best possible way. How could he get Joel to listen to him when he was suspicious? He was already surprised that he'd done so with insults, something reinforced by the gun in his hand, which seemed like a threat. I hate working in a team. The first infected didn't take long to appear. Being in the middle of the road, pushing a heavy vehicle, had made them easy targets for any lurking predator. They became like little fronds to the infected and they pounced on them as if they were easy prey. And shooting was a bigger draw. Naruto wasted no time pulling the trigger, blowing the head off an infected that was heading towards the truck, towards the driver's door where Ellie was, but he hit it a few meters from it and its brains were now scattered on the sidewalk. Taking a deep breath, Naruto spun around and shot 3 more infected before the 4th one charged at him. He pressed the barrel against the infected's throat and pulled the trigger, pushing the Glock upward. The bullet tore through the infected's skull, creating a hole upward, killing him as the bullet split his brain in two. He drew his arm back and pulled back the handle of his katana. It moved at his command, slicing through air and flesh in the process of its circular motion. Resting his right hand on the katana's blade, Naruto fired another bullet at another infected man emerging from a house to the right, killing him before he left the porch. Respite. The katana moved again, slashing down, cutting another infected in two. Blood splattered his clothes and face, but Naruto didn't even flinch. He swung the katana, pierced another infected, and shot a second in the head. He kept breathing. He pressed his lips into a thin line as he drew the blade from yet another infected, now stained with thick, dark, foul-smelling blood and flecks of rotten flesh, but he didn't stop and fired at yet another infected, forcing himself to change magazines immediately. It was like New York City. Dozens of infected, all after him, trying to take some of his flesh. But Naruto didn't let them bite him. He pulled the trigger, swung his katana, and kicked another infected directly to the ground. The blood had been bathing her skin for a while, running down her cheeks and soaking her clothes. Boy. Naruto reacted and shot 3 more infected before jumping into the back of the truck, which soon moved away from the area. He sheathed the katana. "You're completely soaked. Here." Naruto looked at the outstretched arm and the shirt Joel was offering him to wipe off. "Thank you." Keeping silent, she took it and began to clean her face, removing any traces of blood from her skin. It wasn't pleasant and the smell was now permeating her clothes and body. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, either. "How long have you been doing that?" Joel didn't look back or mention it outright, but the boy had left a trail of bodies scattered across the street, dismembered, bloodied, and others with a bullet that shattered their rotting brains. It wasn't something a normal teenager would do, not even at a time like this. Too long. Slumping his shoulders, Naruto placed his katana in his lap to unsheath it. The once dark blade had turned a deep red from the blood and bits of flesh. Without responding to Joel's gaze, he began using the man's t-shirt to clean the blade. "I learned that you either live or die," he murmured, affectionately running the shirt over the page. "And I want to live." Chapter 4. Pittsburgh had not been spared the deterioration of time. Without the prior care of the people who had lived in the city 20 years earlier, the buildings had begun to show imperfections on their facades. Vegetation, just like in Lincoln, had taken over the streets and vehicles were abandoned on the streets, showing the damage caused by the passage of time. Rusted bodies, dust, and completely rotted tires. If any of those cars still worked, it would be lucky for whoever found them, because after 20 years of disuse, the vehicle's batteries would be damaged or depleted from the long period of disuse. Like many cities, Pittsburgh had been under the complete control of the army and Pedra at the beginning of the outbreak, and they remained so for a somewhat prolonged period. However, a lack of food and other supplies caused riots in the city, prompting ordinary people to fight against the army and Pedra agents to take control of the city. This revolt was completely crushed, leaving dozens dead in the streets and dozens more imprisoned and accused of causing the riots, who would soon be executed in public as an example. This caused outrage. The residents of Pittsburgh were tired and hungry due to the lack of food and believed the army was deceiving them and that Fedra was taking their supplies. This wasn't unusual or unrelated to other quarantine areas or cities. People were completely dissatisfied with the ineffectiveness of those who ran the place, those who were supposed to protect them. And the Fireflies used it to their advantage. Pittsburgh was filled with numerous clashes once again, with dozens of wounded and dead, and with the rebels gaining territory from the army, pushing them towards the river, gradually taking over the city in which they had lived and taking some satisfaction from the deaths of soldiers who killed their fellow citizens. Finally, after months of fighting in the city streets, the rebels took control of the city and expelled the army, Pedra, and executed the Fireflies so they could control Pittsburgh themselves without any outside influence, with no one but the city's own inhabitants. Knowing what had happened in Pittsburgh was an advantage in knowing what one might encounter in certain areas of the city. The rebels still lived in Pittsburgh, controlling certain areas of the city that didn't have many infected. But it wouldn't be surprising if they didn't have adequate supplies to continue surviving on their own without the help of another settlement, group, or quarantine zone, and that would have made them dangerous. Were they forcibly taking supplies from other survivors? Were they hunting them? As they approached the city, leaning back in the passenger seat, Naruto asked himself these questions to stay completely alert, focused, and active in case he was stalked by one of these scavengers, these rebels who had become mere vermin. It wouldn't be strange if the rebels now hunted down every outsider who came to Pittsburgh, and it wouldn't be strange if they ate them, turning into mere monsters. Few people had the skills, knowledge, or willpower to try to survive on their own, to farm or hunt for food. But they were living in a devastated world filled with despair and agony, without a shred of hope. They will surely keep watch over the strange ones. Taking hold of the pendant around his neck, Naruto held it tightly as they entered the Pittsburgh city limits, passing the welcome sign. He wasn't surprised to see abandoned vehicles on the shoulders and along the road. However, the number was increasing and seemed to give the impression that a traffic jam had occurred when the citizens tried to evacuate the city 20 years ago at the start of the infection. The cars, once isolated, were beginning to get closer together and multiply. Where Naruto had seen one before, there were now two, and then three or four, and so on, turning the isolated cars into a tide of rusted metal, dust, and tires completely rotted by time. Slamming on the brakes, Joel was forced to stop the truck, causing Naruto to drop the pendant and Ellie to nearly crash into the back of the blonde seat. They'd encountered a traffic jam. Hundreds of abandoned cars, their doors open and badly parked, obstructing their progress along the highway that crossed the city. They would have to find another way through the city and avoid any outbreaks of infected or hunters around Pittsburgh, which made the maneuver completely risky. But they couldn't stay there, stopped by the traffic jam and inside a van in plain sight. Then, a thought crossed Naruto's mind. What if they used that traffic jam to hunt down the outsiders? There was no doubt that around Pittsburgh there would be scavengers, hunters, and people much crazier than the infected themselves, and there was a blockade on the main road. Naruto had no doubt that these people would know about him and would use it to their advantage to hunt down all those who came into the city. There would be a checkpoint on the side streets. But what could they do? Moving his head from side to side, Naruto searched for any possible signs of an impending assault. However, from the van and at such a great distance, he couldn't see any movement. Not even a bird or wild animal, or an infected person. Nothing. While Naruto was thinking about what to do, Joel spun the truck's steering wheel and drove down the street on the left, leaving the traffic jam behind and entering a much narrower area. There were some light poles that looked like they were about to collapse. Several vehicles were parked on the sidewalks, forcing Joel to keep his hands firmly on the wheel. Chunks of concrete forced him to move slightly every few meters. Noticing that several vehicles were crushed by pieces of the facade of the buildings in worse condition on the street. It was a good area for a robbery. Suddenly, as they reached an intersection, Joel hit the brakes again, although this time with much more care than the first time, so Ellie didn't hit the backrest and Naruto could clearly see what was happening. What's going on? Why are we stopping? Slowly, Ellie peeked over Naruto's back and shoulder to see what was happening, the reason why they were stopping again. Put on your seatbelt. Joel pulled the lever back. Why? He's just a winded man. The man was crawling slowly, step by step, in front of the truck, one hand holding his left side. That area was bandaged, with a red stain soaking the same hand he was holding the wound with. He was dressed in ragged clothes and a cap hid greasy hair that fell over his forehead, with thick strands covering his eyes. Help me. Yeah, I don't think he will, Joel muttered, hitting the gas pedal a little, causing the truck to roll backward. Hold on. We're going to pass him. That guy, Ellie, Naruto had moved his hand to the grip of his Glock, is a hunter, a scavenger. He intends to kill us and take our things. Others are probably watching us from above. So, duck. Take cover. Following Naruto's orders, Ellie went from sitting in the back seat to being completely covered by the passenger seat, hidden behind the backrest, causing no one to be able to see her if they looked from afar, so they could not aim at her or shoot her indirectly, since they would be aiming at Joel and Naruto respectively. You know they're going to shoot you, right? Sure. Joel put it in first gear and accelerated. The truck quickly reacted and was thrown forward, causing the injured man to jump to the side to avoid being hit. Shoot them. Shoot them. The scream was left behind, but the shot soon followed the man's order, so Naruto leaned down and Joel just took his eyes out over the dashboard. The bullets first hit the truck's body, causing sparks to fly as metal hit metal. One of the shots hit one of the front tires and several others hit the front windshield, causing Joel to steer with some force. They crashed into what looked like a store. They crashed through the window, knocked over several shelves, and finally stopped when Joel stepped on the front, but they already had several shelves on top of the hood and the front of the truck was wrecked. Metal dented and lifted. The headlights were completely smashed. Get out. Now. Under fire from the Pittsburgh attackers, Naruto pushed out the passenger door with his shoulder and pulled out his Glock at the exact moment a stranger poked his head around the edge of the wall they had broken through. He did not hesitate to shoot. The bullet passed through his head from right to left, exiting through this last hole. Had the man still been alive, his brain would probably have been split in half, but he fell to the ground on his knees, dropping the rifle he was carrying, and finally hitting the glass-strewn floor with his face to prevent himself from getting up. Lowering his weapon, Naruto was able to look out at the street. No one seemed to be stalking them, but gunshots continued to occur every few seconds, and the assailants' voices continued to emerge between shots, communicating with each other. They were preparing an assault. There must be several, Joel admitted, grabbing the shotgun from the back and his own backpack. If we don't leave, they'll follow us. We must move forward. Naruto glanced over his shoulder at Joel for a moment. The man was urging Ellie through a gap in the tent wall that was the perfect size for a child or a late-growing teenager, but not an adult. This won't be the only confrontation with these guys. They'll be controlling the entire city, every important point. To leave Pittsburgh, we'll need to cross the bridge, and they've undoubtedly got it under control to prevent escapes. He walked to the back and grabbed his own backpack, yanking it off with a sharp jerk. He dragged along with it his sword, bow, and arrows, which were securely fastened inside by the backpack zipper. There are more guys, and they'll follow us, the boy assured, putting his Glock back in its holster. I'm going to distract them, okay? I'll follow you when I get rid of them and create false leads. Joel's eyes narrowed briefly, but when he looked at Naruto's face, he saw no hesitation, not even a hint of fear of death. All he saw was a deep determination that seemed to carry him through to the end. I won't convince you that it's stupid, will I? No, you're not going to make him old. Keep this just in case. From his backpack, Naruto pulled out a pair of gas masks that were more modern than Joel's. The man accepted them, putting one in his backpack and passing it to Ellie. Don't worry about me, shorty, Naruto said to Ellie, giving her a thumbs up. I'll follow you in a moment. Ellie nodded at Naruto's words, even though she didn't agree with his plan. What if it went wrong and he ended up dead or, worse, infected with Cordyceps? But it didn't seem like anything she said would deter him from what he was about to do. Don't be long, okay? Sure, shorty. Naruto watched as Ellie disappeared and, shortly after, as Joel escaped from the store, leaving him completely alone, filling him with a somewhat comfortable silence. But the silence did not last. Look and see if there's anyone left inside. Mickey is dead. He ducked behind a thick column and heard boots crunching on glass, telling him the robbers were entering the store through the broken window, leaving his partner Mickey behind. There are two of them. I only hear 2 pairs of feet, 2 steps. His hand fell directly toward the Glock. He felt the cold metal warming his hand, as if asking him to close his fingers around the grip. Why not? If he pulled out the Glock, he'd kill friends in an instant, though his friends wouldn't be long in showing up at the store. Naruto let out a breath and pulled his hand back. One of the attackers was walking toward him. He heard his footsteps, his breathing, and the way he moved the gun in his hands with some hesitation, as if unsure of what he was doing. He looked to his right and stepped back a little from the edge. The barrel of the gun was slowly emerging from the side, and its owner would soon appear. I can't see anything, Daniel. From the other side of the store, his companion was also walking, looking for any sign of the strangers. He peered behind shelves, overturned furniture or the store counter, but he didn't find either of the two who had come in the truck. Where could they have come from? At that moment, the man heard something crash into a shelf on the side where Daniel was walking and turned to that side, aiming the shotgun. Daniel. The chair hit his knees and destabilized him, causing him to pull the trigger of his shotgun and destroy several magazines. Shit. At that moment, Naruto knocked the man down by jumping over one of the shelves and stood over him, pressing the shotgun directly against his throat, preventing him from saying any words, which would surely be insults towards him or promises of death. But he didn't let up, not even when he saw the fear in her eyes. Maintaining pressure with his left hand, Naruto brought his right hand back. He felt the curved handle of his knife and closed his hand around it, but it gave the man time to move, causing him to momentarily lose his balance. But strength, precision, and no hesitation, Naruto plunged the knife into his left temple until he saw the glow of life disappear from the man's eyes. "Fuck," he muttered, pulling the knife back. The blade was stained with fresh blood. Bits of bone and flesh clung to it when he withdrew it, making it that much more sinister. You couldn't keep quiet, could you? Another crack made Naruto jump and leave the man's body. Several shots ripped through the ground next to the man's head, leaving 2 smoking holes. "Get out of there, boy, and maybe you'll still be alive." And shit. The knife flew straight for the man's throat, effectively shutting down any response he had for Naruto. He leaped over the counter just as another assailant turned to shoot him, and he knocked him down with his knee, breaking his nose and, presumably, his teeth from the force of the impact, which caused the man to fall onto his own back. He took the knife from the man who promised to stay alive and dropped it on his knees. "So, how many of you are there?" Quickly, Naruto placed the knife under the fourth man's disoriented companion. "Fuck you." "Yes, your answer doesn't matter." "No, 4. Slowly, Naruto stood up. He put away his knife, its blade now clean again, and looked outside. It didn't seem like a large group, but it wouldn't be surprising if it was a patrol to monitor outsiders entering Pittsburgh, and his companions probably already knew. Shit. Looks like we're not going to be able to get to Jackson smoothly. Goodbye to my vacation. Chapter 5. Blood was scattered among the rubble and dust. Several bodies lay scattered around the room. Some leaning against the cracked walls, others sprawled beside the pillars that still held the building upright, always in their own pools of blood. There was no trace of infection, and the causes of death varied. Gunshots. Blows with blunt objects. Clean cuts in vital points or cuts that severed parts of their bodies. They were different wounds. Different causes of death. None of these people were alive or even breathing. They died fighting. Next to a pile of debris and blood were several bullet casings of various calibers. Some appeared to belong to a 9mm, but others were larger or wider than 9mm, and not all were similar. They varied in length, thickness, and size, indicating the use of several different firearms. The waste of ammunition. These weapons, however, weren't lying on the ground or next to their owners. They had all been piled up in a dark metallic mountain that was engulfed in flames, engulfed in an intense blaze. The smoke had condensed there, rising to the ceiling and forming a dense gray layer. This being its limit, it spread to the glassless windows and open doors, using them as an escape route. This allowed for somewhat normal breathing, although the smell of smoke was intense. If the fire spread too far, the building would begin to burn completely, and no one would be able to stop it. It's not like anyone thought about controlling it. The old side door of the building was pushed open. It was the old emergency exit, once used to leave the building in similar situations, and someone had reused it. Naruto gasped, taking in a huge amount of oxygen, and enjoyed the air hitting his face, swaying his hair. He ran a hand over his face and looked out at the city from the emergency stairs. It was neglected, in ruins. The cities that had become quarantine zones looked better, more humanized. Pittsburgh had been reclaimed by nature, at least in part. Glancing down, Naruto began to descend the stairs. Like the door, it was rusted, a dark shade that looked black but wasn't, and he could feel the rust sticking to his hands. He knew that by the time he hit the ground, his hands would be blackened. From the bottom step, Naruto leaped up and pulled a knife from his belt, crouching behind a battered old Chevrolet. He poked his head over the top of the vehicle and scanned the street with a glance. Several infected people walked between the cars. They walked erratically, shuffling their feet and moving with difficulty, as if they had difficulty moving their lower limbs. And there weren't many. Carefully, Naruto tried to creep between the cars, following in the footsteps of the infected. It wasn't the same as following in the footsteps of a living person, since they had no pattern, were unpredictable, and much more dangerous. Any slight noise would end with Naruto dead. I have to get to the bridge and find Joel and Ellie. But to do that, I have to finish these off. He'd been through this 1,000 times before. It was just a matter of sticking the knife in, ending what the infection started. Naruto stabbed the first infected person in the neck, plunging the knife deep inside. The rotten flesh was too soft, and blood soon gushed from the wound, staining his hand. He didn't care. Naruto dragged the infected person and dropped him on top of a second infected person. He took advantage of the opportunity to impale the latter through the temple. It was direct and without flinching. The daughter broke the bone and pierced what remained of the brain in a second. Just a blink of an eye, less than a second. He closed his hand around the handle and pulled out the knife, watching as both infected fell on top of each other. But Naruto didn't blink. He was aiming for the bridge. It, however, was on the other side of the city. Many hours away on foot. Naruto leaned against the car and threw a bottle. As soon as it hit the ground, it shattered, and the infected in the area rushed toward it. He pulled out an arrow and took up his bow without moving. He had them within range. He just needed to tighten the string a little and… The explosion was not high, but it was powerful enough to engulf the infected in flames and debris, leaving them dismembered and scattering their body parts all over the ground. It wasn't smart, but Naruto was no longer behind the car waiting to see who would investigate. Ran. His legs took enormous strides. The air in his chest began to fail him, and his breathing became labored. But Naruto didn't stop and charged another infected, stabbing it in the eye with an arrow. Leap. Naruto closed his hand and pushed himself up at the same moment another explosion rang out. That's where he knocked down the infected, stabbing him in the eye with the arrow. That must have caught some attention, he said to himself, hidden behind the window through which he had entered the building. From there, unseen by the infected or the attackers, Naruto scanned the street thoroughly. He had traveled a good distance, but he had caught the attention of both the infected and the living. That was his plan. With the recent explosions, the infected in the area would go snooping around, trying to discover their next prey. But it didn't just apply to the infected. Every living thing within a mile radius would come to see what had happened, including the attackers. The crash of glass made him turn around. Naruto launched himself at the door the instant it opened, shoving it hard and knocking the person on the other side to the ground. He pulled out his Glock and fired through the rotten wood, causing bursts of splinters. Luckily, he was wearing a silencer. Naruto left the room, stepping over the body he'd shot, and continued down the hallway. He needed to get to the other side and jump out the window or take the stairs. It didn't matter which way, but he was going to get out of the building one way or another, leaving a trail of bodies behind. Two men rushed out to meet him. They were as surprised as Naruto, but the blonde didn't stop. He raised his Glock firmly and shot one of them directly in the right shoulder, causing him to fall backward, his dominant arm useless due to the gunshot wound. He charged the other with force, like a rugby player going after his opponent. He threw him several meters backward, onto his back. He had two options. Either keep running forward or finish the man off. But he didn't have time to make a decision, and several shots hit the wall next to his head. He darted into another room and slammed the door shut as he returned fire. He had once again drawn attention to himself, which was not very encouraging, much less likely to allow him to escape the scene without injury. Naruto ran his left hand over his chest, brushing back his hair. He counted the seconds until the men burst into the room. He could hear them approaching, gathering around and plotting to arrest him or kill him. He was leaning more toward the latter. There is no time. The window was completely clear of glass, but Naruto ran his left hand, wrapped in a cloth, over it to remove any fragments that might cause injury. He did so meticulously, as if someone weren't about to kill him by breaking down the door. He turned around. Gripping the Glock firmly, he fired at the door as he jumped onto its back. Another would have killed himself. Buck. Naruto rolled onto his back and jumped off the roof of the truck, feeling his left shoulder hurt a little. It seemed like he had landed more on his left shoulder than his entire back, which intensified the pain in that area. Luckily, it wasn't broken. Without looking back, knowing they would be watching him, Naruto ran between the cars. As he did so, he dropped the empty clip and swapped it for another. He had lost one of his precious clips, something he would have to find again in the future. He always carried his own clips, and what he swapped were the bullets. There. Between those cars. In reaction to the shout, he spun around and stopped dead in his tracks. He aimed, squinting slightly, and fired, knocking down another of the attackers and piercing his right eye. They shot back. Naruto jumped behind a van. The shots pierced the windows, hit the old rusted body, and punctured the tires, causing the vehicle to slump slightly, crushing the mangled tires and making a slight metallic clicking noise, like someone breaking a piece of metal. Behind that van. He took a deep breath and relaxed his muscles. He needed to replenish his mind with oxygen, get his neurons working so he could escape the situation he found himself in. The only problem he saw was the amount of time he had. Naruto didn't know Joel, much less Ellie, so he didn't know which path they had taken to get to the bridge. The only thing he was sure of was that they would have to fight like he was doing to arrive completely unharmed. If they were alive. Shaking his head, denying that dark thought, Naruto rummaged around and pulled out the locket he wore as a pendant. He opened it, seeing a photo of a little girl, the daughter of the man he'd killed a while back, the one who'd begged him to return it to his daughter, a daughter who was already dead, who had always been. He closed the locket tightly and took 2 arrows from his backpack, knocking them firmly into the ground. Then he took a deep breath and ran outside, hearing the shots and feeling the projectiles chasing him to shoot. And they didn't give it to him. Naruto skidded and shot at his pursuers, leaping over the field of an old fort and taking cover behind the abandoned car. It was dusty like the others, but perhaps a little thicker. The explosion and the screams were drowned out by another series of explosions that followed the first, turning the road into a blazing hell. It was your mistake, idiots. He dropped his weight to his feet, holstered his Glock, and ran forward a few seconds before the fort protecting him exploded as well. The raiders and scavengers hadn't been smart enough to follow Naruto down a street filled with vehicles filled with flammable gasoline or diesel that would explode at the slightest spark. But that information was on Naruto's mind, and that was the reason he'd fired the explosive arrows. There wasn't a huge chance the cars would explode one after the other, and he relied solely on blind faith in his luck, a luck that kept him alive, and that had struck again, causing 3 consecutive explosions and a sea of flames that engulfed his pursuers. Naruto, however, didn't stop or look back. He wasn't going to waste precious seconds looking behind him, in case he was being chased. He kept his eyes focused ahead, minimizing anything to the side and maximizing everything right in front of him. It was complete tunnel vision. His body then reacted and he stopped braking, using his heels to do so. They hurt slightly, but he turned and, using the knife, drove the infected man who had tried to bite him in the jugular, destroying his neck. He didn't make it, luckily. He yanked the knife and threw it at another infected, piercing his right eye and jumped, grabbing the knife by the handle again with a ruthless jerk. Naruto didn't know if the infected felt pain or were aware of what they were doing, so he couldn't be delicate when his life was in danger, and to him they were like the guys who were chasing him to kill him. They were his prey. He wiped the knife on his trouser leg and stood up, looking toward a sign indicating the bridge was ahead, about 200 meters. But it was a long, dangerous 200 meters, fraught with danger that could end up killing him if he got carried away. I was in the financial district. Naruto put the knife away and crouched, his Glock once again in his hands and the silencer attached to the barrel. He wasn't as stupid as the other survivors, and he wouldn't openly fire unless it was part of his plan, which was far from his plan at the moment. He walked between some cars and hid behind a scaffolding. He raised his head over the edge and looked at the bodies of the dead hunters. There were enough of them to have been an open confrontation, and there didn't seem to be any shell casings scattered about. The confrontation was silent and cautious, and Naruto knew immediately that Joel and Ellie were in the financial district, probably heading toward the bridge. And something's chasing them, huh? Using the scaffolding as support, Naruto jumped onto it and crouched behind some pallets, taking cover in case he was seen. But the area was completely clear, with only the inert corpses strewn about, which made him wonder and come to the conclusion that they were chasing Joel and Ellie. And the vehicle follows them. Naruto looked at the vehicle tracks and analyzed them. Cars weren't his strong suit, but it was clear that it wasn't a normal vehicle, and that it weighed more than a private car. So, a bucking military vehicle, Naruto muttered, letting out a resigned sigh. Now I'm going to have to save them from a military vehicle. Do you want me dead, God? Resigned, Naruto took the ammunition from the dead hunters and stuffed it into his backpack. He took an M16 rifle from another of the corpses and followed the vehicle's trail. Naruto had no doubt that it would lead him to Joel and Ellie. Chapter 6. The sun had finally set below the horizon. Its last thin rays were fading, and night spread like a blanket across the sky, enveloping Pittsburgh in a dark sky filled with tiny, flickering points of light, and faint cloud formations appeared where the sun had disappeared, obscuring all its light. Slowly, the moon began to peek out, replacing the sun, revealing more and more of its whitish, shimmering surface. The darkness and the night were perfect for the infected, especially the clickers. But they weren't the only ones moving in the night, and the only light came from the stars and the moon, which shone with its thin arms on everything below it. 4 figures had managed to move to the makeshift iron gates the hunters had placed to prevent their prey from escaping. I was standing beneath their feet, staring at the rusted iron and peeling paint. They weren't sliding or automatic doors. They were enormous iron frames, pieces of shipping containers that had been cut and used as makeshift gates, attached to dense concrete walls that had risen over the years, as well as medium-sized platforms for lookouts that were now uninhabited, with lifeless bodies lying at the foot of the wall. To leave Pittsburgh, tourists had to cross the uninhabited bridge, the only viable exit from the city, and without a continuous presence, they had to cross the uninhabited bridge, the only viable exit from the city. The hunters already knew this. After expelling Fedra and the military, they had been charged with raising those walls. Posting guards high up to prevent escape. They had to clear out any prey that might fall into their clutches. And they set up rotating guard groups for night shifts. They forced anyone who wanted to flee to work hard to escape, to think about how to avoid them and reach the bridge. Few would have considered a head-on confrontation, launching an attack against them to take the bridge and flee the city. That would cause casualties on both sides, and the tourists would always have less support than the hunters themselves, something the latter knew only too well. Taking the bridge directly would cost blood, lives, and already scarce ammunition. Despite these setbacks, Joel had made the decision to take the front of the bridge, which would have involved a confrontation with the guards who were waiting for them, keeping the entrance fully protected. But it wasn't enough for Joel and Henry to shoot the lookouts and take the front much more easily than the hunters would have expected. Henry and his younger brother Sam had recently joined Joel and Ellie as they searched for a way out of Pittsburgh. The two pairs had formed a temporary alliance to evade the hunters, the Humvee pursuing them, and the infected hiding in the dark areas of the city. The two brothers had fled their quarantine zone and were looking for a new home with their Hartford companions, but were ambushed by hunters as they entered Pittsburgh in search of supplies. This forced them to split up and agree on a rendezvous point outside the city, away from the hunters, so they could continue their journey. This was the story that Henry, the older brother, told Joel to convince him of the temporary alliance. Joel had initially hesitated to lend a hand to strangers. What if they were led into a trap? What if they were killed? They had lost Naruto when Joel agreed to leave him behind to protect Ellie, which had turned out to be a mistake for them. If the boy were on their side, he wouldn't be so afraid of Henry's reactions or those of his companions. He didn't doubt that these companions existed, but what he feared was whether they were really companions. What if they were other hunters? What if it was all just an act? Joel twirled his doubts around in his head like a centrifuge, keeping them all to himself. They had already reached the bridge. Naruto wasn't with them, probably dead despite his surprising ability to survive. He couldn't stop. The light touch from Ellie brought Joel out of his reverie. The man cleared his throat, massaged the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, and took 2 long strides directly toward the makeshift bridge door, grabbing the edge of one side with a firm grip. The door, a huge piece of rusted iron, weighed several dozen kilos. Adding to this the pressure exerted by the concrete, this made it difficult to open easily. It wasn't rotten wood or cheap aluminum. It was a piece of a container that had been used as a door. Both Joel and Henry braced themselves and bent their legs slightly. Opening their mouths slightly, just enough to breathe deeply, they pulled on both sides, causing a massive screech that could have been heard hundreds of meters away, alerting infected and humans alike. But they had succeeded. The gates were open for them, and on the other side awaited them a short walk to a second gate, very similar to the one they had opened. But it wouldn't be difficult for them anymore. By passing through the first one, they would be away from the hunter's eyes and protected from the infected behind them. At that precise moment, a spotlight appeared on the right side of the street, illuminating almost the entire street. Preceding this sudden flash of light, the sound of tires on asphalt grew louder and louder, and it didn't take long to reveal its owner. The hunter's Humvee. Joel pulled Ellie, and Henry did the same with Sam. Both adults slammed the door shut and barricaded it, blocking the Humvee's path and preventing them from following. Although it wasn't something that could help them much. The Humvee would soon ram the doors, probably knocking them down with a single blow or a couple of blows, after checking to see if the door was closed. Joel had no doubt they would. One of the vehicle's occupants would get out, check if the door was locked, and when they saw that it was, they would break it down. Here they are. The shot rang out, silencing the words of someone on the other side of the door, probably one of the Humvee occupants. Ellie, Sam, and Henry stared at Joel, who had shot the man on top of a truck, killing him with a single shot to his head. Let's go. He tucked the revolver into the back of his worn jeans and ran toward the truck. The top of a stepladder was still perched on the edge, tilted slightly to the right, but they couldn't use it because it wasn't long enough. Joel stopped and bent his leg slightly, placing both hands in a bowl shape, interlacing the fingers of both hands. It would be the fulcrum, and Henry understood this almost without Joel having to say anything. He walked toward Joel and placed his right foot first on the fulcrum, and then, as Joel raised it, he pushed himself toward the edge of the truck, using the piece of ladder to do so. He gripped it with his toes and pulled himself up until he was at the top, on the roof. Come on, kid. Next up was Sam, Henry's little brother. That was much easier than pushing Henry. Sam weighed much less than his brother, who was waiting for him at arm's length on the roof of the truck. When Joel pushed him up, Henry grabbed him and pulled him toward him, placing him on the roof next to him. Come on, come on. They didn't have unlimited time to reach the other side of the truck, thus bypassing the second door. The Humvee's lights had become smaller, indicating that the driver had reversed and that they would attempt to ram the door. Ellie didn't wait for another command and jumped toward Joel, using her hands as leverage. The girl jumped and Henry caught her with his left hand, pulling her along just as he had done earlier with his little brother. Come on, Joel. The gunshots made Henry and Sam flinch, but not Ellie. The girl looked toward the door just as a second round of gunfire rang out. Henry. Help me. A third burst of gunfire. No, Henry had started to shake his head and began taking steps back. We're leaving. Come on, Sam. What? Ellie turned around. You can't. Yes, I can. Come on, Sam. The two brothers ran away, sprinting toward the truck. Ellie lost sight of them when they jumped out, falling heavily into the driver's cab, and because of the darkness, she couldn't see any more of them. Finally, the first door gave way, catching Joel and Ellie off guard. The Humvee revealed itself, shining its bright light on them both, causing them to briefly squint for a few seconds. They were trapped. The Humvee was moving slowly, and Joel didn't know how to react, what to do. He briefly glanced to his right, toward Ellie. She could save herself by running after Henry and Sam. She could take shelter with them, be in their care, but he would die. At least Ellie would be safe. The Humvee's headlights shattered, and the hunter holding the M240GB machine gun mounted on the vehicle dropped it in shock, recoiling backward, nearly falling off the top of the military vehicle. The bullet, hidden in the darkness, struck the man's neck just on the left side and was lodged through and through his throat, causing him to choke on blood. I couldn't take the machine gun again. What's going on? All four doors of the Humvee opened. Joel couldn't wait. He pulled out his revolver and fired at the passenger door, hitting the man as he was getting out of the car, killing him almost instantly. Another shot struck the former driver directly in the side. By the faint light from the campfire flames and the moon, Ellie could see it was a long wooden arrow with dark feathers at the opposite end. Naruto. Joel couldn't react to the girl's scream. He shot the other man getting out behind the co-pilot, and at the same time, another arrow pierced the last hunter's left eye, causing him to fall against the back seat of the Humvee. That's when a figure fell from the top of the building to Joel and Ellie's right, from one of the windows. It did so abruptly, rather roughly, and with no grace in its movements. But its face and hair weren't hidden. "I followed your trail through the financial district," the boy declared, putting away the arrow he was about to use so he wouldn't lose it. "Well, yours and theirs." Naruto pointed at the dead occupants of the Humvee. "Were you the one with the explosions?" Joel's question was straightforward. Both he and Ellie had heard 2 explosions after leaving him with the hunters, and Joel assumed the boy had fallen into a trap and died, taking some infected or hunters with him. "Yes, it was me," Naruto admitted. "I used explosive arrows to get rid of the infected and hunters who were chasing me. I had a bit of a break when I caused the 2 groups to clash, and I was able to pick up your trail again. Though I have to say it hasn't been easy tracking you down, not here at least." Naruto was used to tracking, to being a hunter after his target. But Pittsburgh had been a tough time for him. The infected lurked around every corner. Hunters appeared at every intersection, searching for the tourists who had escaped from their comrades and were running around the city as if it were their own. Naruto had no doubt those tourists were Joel and Ellie, as well as himself. "I must say I'm glad you're not dead." "I'm glad I'm not too." The boy slung the bow over his shoulder and Joel resumed his previous position. Naruto leaned against Joel and pulled himself up, and with Ellie's help, he was finally able to climb onto the roof of the truck in a single jump. "It's your turn, old man." Joel took a few steps back and ran toward the truck, jumping out just as it was about to crash into the container wall. Naruto reached out, took Joel's hand, and pulled him up, helping him climb in beside them. "Probably more hunters will come, and they won't leave the Humvee unused," the blonde admitted, massaging his own injured shoulder. "It'd be better to head across the bridge before more of those crazies chase us, don't you think?" Joel nodded. The 3 of them ran over the truck and jumped out, leaving behind the closed door, the empty Humvee, and several dead bodies that would alert their comrades. But they didn't turn back or look over their shoulders. They just ran forward, avoiding every abandoned vehicle, every small barricade. They were probably following Henry and his brother Sam, or a path similar to the 2 brothers. But that didn't matter right now. "Oh, good." The first to stop was Joel, followed by Ellie and finally Naruto behind them. "There's a huge hole we can't jump over. We have to jump straight into the river." It was the best option for them. Turning back would take them back to Pittsburgh with its hunters and its infected. "I can't swim." Ellie, however, wasn't sure. "I'm right behind you," Naruto declared, slinging his bow back over his shoulder. "Don't be afraid, just jump." First it was Joel, who did it without any fear. Then it was Ellie, who, trembling, jumped after the man. "I hate cold water." And Naruto followed Ellie. Chapter 7. The water was dark, storm-riddled, and constantly in motion, crashing against the hulls of abandoned boats, rotten from the lack of maintenance they'd received over the years since the start of the infection. The lights belonging to Pittsburgh and the bridge had disappeared into the distance and remained only a memory. Small lights still moved around the structure as if searching for something in the water. Suddenly, far from the bridge, the lights, and the city, something broke the raging river. A figure emerged forcefully, close to the shore, but coughing and walking with some difficulty. His backpack hung only from his right shoulder and was almost destroyed and much emptier than when he entered the city. He stopped upon reaching the shore, leaning back on his legs and coughing hard, vomiting water that came out of his mouth, almost as if it had been forced through. His hair was completely soaked, falling flat over his forehead, with no trace of the unruly blonde strands that usually stood out on his head like a golden crown. After catching his breath, Naruto lifted his face and looked for any sign of Joel and Ellie. They had jumped, almost without thinking, directly into the river from at least 20 meters high, straight into the water, without protection or lifeguards to help them. Ellie didn't like water and had jumped for mere survival. But if Naruto was honest, he hated water much more. What things could be hidden under hundreds of liters, concealed under darkness and without even a small ray of light? The infected were present and could be hiding underwater. Was it crazy? Maybe, but the world had gone to shit because of a parasitic infection, and for him, anything was possible. Despite how soaked he was, Naruto walked over to a piece of wooden boat and leaned against it. He threw his backpack to the ground and took off his green jacket, leaving only his sleeveless shirt as the only clothing covering his torso. Having thrown away his backpack, his belongings had been scattered all over the floor. His spare clothes were completely soaked and, to his eye, much wetter than what he was carrying. The arrows he had left, the ones with explosives, were useless and no better than ordinary arrows, like the others he had carried. However, he was lucky that the bullets in his gun hadn't gotten wet and that the gunpowder had been ruined. He still had his katana and military knife, which was a relief to Naruto, but even he knew he couldn't take on an entire horde with a sword and knife, or could he? It was a possibility many people had considered, and one Naruto was considering now. Right now his greatest weapon had been rendered useless. It wasn't just the arrows. His bow was snapped in two, useless, and he couldn't build another one right there, and returning to Pittsburgh was out of the question for the moment. He had no doubt the hunters would be on their toes, much more savage with those who came into their territory because of what they had done to flee the city. Probably even driven completely mad. Poor wretches. Naruto checked his body. He felt both sides, his chest and stomach for any possible wounds. He checked both legs, taking off his boots to look at his feet, and carefully checked every part of his naked body before putting his clothes back on, even though it was completely soaked. I hadn't seen any wounds. He breathed a sigh of relief as he looped the belt around his waist again, making a click as he connected the two ends to the hook. He then adjusted the holster to his leg and slipped the gun into it, feeling the weight of the gun pull his pants down slightly. He had no injuries, but Naruto saw the rips in his jacket, pants, and undershirt, though they were somewhat less visible there. He looked like he'd collided with some rocks, being carried along by the water unkindly. He was lucky he hadn't been seriously injured or ended up dead, his neck snapped by the force of the water hitting him against some broken rock. He had been fortunate to be alive and unharmed. Naruto bent down and began gathering whatever might still be useful from his backpack. He put the compass in his left pants pocket after checking if it was working. He hung the only gas mask he owned on the left side of his belt, feeling it hit his thigh as he reached for his katana, which he slung over his back. He grabbed the protein bars he was carrying, as well as the beef jerky, and retrieved every last one of the magazines, as well as the flashlight, which was a few feet away from his tattered backpack, next to a completely soaked map of the United States. He gathered everything he could use and stood up, hearing shouts not far from where he was. They sounded like angry, furious shouts from an older man. Joel. Naruto recognized Joel's angry shouts. He'd heard them before, when Bill and Joel argued over what to do with him and whether he should accompany them through the city. But as he strained his ears, he caught another male voice, a little quieter but not a child's. Was he arguing with someone? Was Ellie in danger? Naruto stroked the grip of his pistol and walked toward the sound of the voices, circling the edge of the wrecked wooden boat. There were 4 people. 2 adults and 2 children. Naruto recognized 2 of them immediately, but he hadn't seen the other 2. However, he quickly understood that the children were siblings and had met Joel and Ellie when he wasn't with them. That was what he saw, a few feet away from the 4, watching the movements of the older boy, who seemed to be gesticulating and a little embarrassed, as if he had done something Joel might hold against him. But what could that be? Maybe they had tried to rob them when they were unconscious from falling into the river. Naruto didn't hear the conversation, which was abruptly cut off when he finally approached the 4, resting his right hand on the grip of his pistol. His presence must have made the older boy nervous because he pointed the gun at him and Naruto stopped, raising his right eyebrow. That gesture lasted as long as Ellie stood between them, shielding him from the weapon pointed at him. Naruto thanked her in complete silence, but kept his hand on the handle of his own weapon and his eyes fixed on the older brother. "He's our partner." Ellie stood firm in front of him, and Naruto could see how Joel seemed to want to take his own revolver, and confusion filled the face of the older brother, who looked from one to the other, before looking at his own younger brother, who seemed a little scared by the conflict he was witnessing, and was hiding behind his brother's leg, clinging to the fabric of his pants. "Anyway," Naruto interjected, taking his hand off his gun, which seemed to relax the older boy, "who are you guys? I know you're from Pittsburgh because I came with them all the way here." "It's Henry," Ellie pointed to the older brother, "and Sam. Their 2 brothers Joel and I met in the city while we were hiding from hunters. They did the same thing. We helped each other survive. Until they abandoned you," Naruto cut in, looking directly at Henry. The boy had a guilty glint in his dark eyes. That guilt intensified when he looked away, probably ashamed of what he'd done. "Was it to protect your brother?" The blonde's blue eyes moved towards little Sam, who hid a little further behind his brother, undoubtedly frightened by the look he was giving him and by the size difference, as well as the weapons he carried. But Naruto didn't trust Sam's eyes or aptitude. How many children could try to stab him if he trusted their angelic faces? The current world was one where survival prevailed, not trust in others or their appearance, the face they gave for the first impression. He had seen children kill adults for provisions to survive, even he was one of those children when his settlement was destroyed. Maybe Ellie sensed his thoughts, because she grabbed his wrist and Naruto blinked, feeling the warmth of her fingers gently caressing his skin, a light touch that woke him up. "Are you okay?" "The river. I hate water," he muttered, shaking his head and taking a step back. "I don't like water." That little lie wouldn't have stuck with people who were constantly watching him, looking for lies. But no one was looking for lies in his face or his gaze, which allowed Naruto to return a look of false calm that matched the relaxed expression he had on the two brothers. Although it seemed Joel didn't quite believe his gaze or his serene demeanor, which was entirely plausible. Joel was older, more experienced, and had survived in that world for 20 years. Joel, for Naruto, was the epitome of a true survivor. Like many, the man was forced to do things he never would have done if society had remained healthy and strong, which was now only a memory. They had to survive, and Joel had done it, something admirable. Of course it was to protect my brother. Henry exploded, staring at Naruto with his dark eyes. There was no hesitation or fear, not even shame. Any trace of it simply vanished, leaving only a resolute resolve, a completely ironclad one that left no room for hesitation or fear. The boy was willing to fight for his brother, to shoot him, and Naruto deduced it just by looking into his eyes. He didn't need anything else, not even reading his posture, his body language. The boy's dark eyes alone told him exactly what Henry would do. Okay, he slowly moved his hand away from the grip of the Glock. We can stay calm, okay? Conciliatory, Naruto relaxed his posture further, giving the boy a reassuring smile. Henry lowered his gun and tucked it into the back of his pants, nodding at the blonde in agreement. With that, the tension between the two faded, and even Joel seemed calmer as the tension eased, easing the atmosphere. Naruto, the boy extended his hand toward Henry, the same one he'd almost used to reach for his gun. It's a pleasure. Henry, Naruto shook his hand, nodding, and the blonde smiled. Same here. Where were you going? Naruto looked at Joel, expecting a sincere answer. He glanced sideways at the older brother, hoping to see some kind of annoyed reaction from him. However, the brothers seemed to have accepted him into the group without any problems. But who accepted someone without seeing what they really wanted? To the radio tower. Let's see if we see Tommy there, Henry's companions. Naruto nodded at the answer, but found it unlikely that Tommy or anyone else was still at the radio tower. The hunters would have surely taken action, and the infected were all over the area, albeit widely scattered. What were the chances that someone was there, that it was Joel's brother? The odds were incredibly slim, so Naruto didn't have high expectations. I need to dry off, he admitted with a tired smile. I'll walk you guys out and see who's there. Chapter 8. The watchtower was empty, but there were signs that people had been there before them. Various crumpled containers could be seen, a water bottle with a dark liquid inside, some crushed cigarettes at the entrance to the room, and a cot in another room, as well as a bed in a third. There was a map hanging on the wall, just above a rickety, rusty refrigerator that no longer sizzled steadily. On a table against the wall, directly opposite an old, worn sofa, was an old communication system, dusty and cobwebbed between the small devices that still made small sounds, as if someone was trying to contact the place. But no one was there to answer. Neither Tommy nor Henry and Sam's companions were there when the five of them burst into the place, puffing a little from having run to the tower. They took a general look around, checking each room, but there was no one there, and it was clear that the place had been abandoned for days or weeks, at least, giving signs that no one had been there in the last few days, dashing Joel's hopes of finding his brother there. Naruto walked over to the communications equipment and left his backpack, discarded and still slightly soaked, on the abandoned sofa. He took the backrest, dragged the chair over, and sat down, brushing the dust off with his forearm, not caring that cobwebs, dust, and a few small insects clung to his skin. His eyes and attention were focused on the equipment, which produced faint lights that flickered sparsely, discordantly. As soon as one went off, another would appear, and so on. It wasn't a sign that it was working, but the boy thought it was an indication that it might. He stretched out his arms and cracked his fingers. Behind him, Joel and Ellie were unpacking, searching for supplies, settling in next to Henry and Sam for the night. A night without being chased, without being hunted. It was a dream, but they could spend a few hours without hunters or infected. Naruto placed both hands on the table, noticing that the wood was splintered, a little rotten. It made a slight crack when he pressed it, and it seemed as if he used just enough force, it might collapse, taking the equipment with it, so he gave up testing how far he could push the abandoned piece of furniture. Instead, he examined the equipment. It was an old radio system that allowed communication with other nearby devices tuned to the same frequency and allowed a long range, though not excessively so. If Naruto had to pick a distance, he'd say at least a kilometer in all directions. Beyond that distance, the signal would abruptly end, but it was enough to coordinate teammates in case of possible attacks and patrols they were conducting. Surely the Fireflies had used a tower when they were there, before being expelled by the military. It's an old position, no doubt, but it's no longer part of the Fireflies' plans. Abandoned, with no trace of human presence for days, with dust and cobwebs covering the communications equipment like soft cloth. Naruto didn't need to be a genius to deduce that the place had been completely abandoned and that no one considered it a useful outpost anymore. They were safe from anyone showing up intending to claim it as their own, although they would have to keep searching for Joel's brother. It's best to move forward in the morning. Naruto stood up and abandoned the communications equipment, though not before cutting the cables, destroying it. They didn't need the equipment. They were all in that room. But someone could use it against them, search the place, and coordinate a team to hunt them down. And he couldn't allow that. Neither he nor his companions could afford it. And the best thing to do was to destroy it, though not completely. Someone who knew about electricity and wiring could repair it, of that Naruto was absolutely sure. He could do it himself. She picked up a ruined backpack and left her things on the couch. Afterward, while Sam and Ellie played, she walked straight across the room, looking for another backpack. Hers would soon be on its last legs. She could already tell one of the straps was much looser, and when she looked, she saw the seams were torn. She had to replace it, although it wouldn't be an easy task. Finding another backpack like hers was difficult, and finding a backpack was already difficult, but she tried anyway, so she could learn about the place. The watchtower had been converted, or rather, had been converted into a habitable home, a staging area for any patrol team or survivor, although the latter was done indirectly. It had a large living room, where a round wooden table was accompanied by 2 chairs, a bit wobbly and broken, but upon entering the door, you couldn't tell they were. To the right was the room where Ellie and Henry were, and to the left, at the far end, were the communications equipment and the old sofa. Just to the left, in a small kitchen, was the refrigerator Naruto had noticed upon entering, soundless, rusty, and rickety. There was nothing else in sight besides the shabby cot next to the table with the communications equipment. All the remaining trash was scattered around the room, and Joel had begun to get rid of it, stuffing it into a bag with the help of Henry, who kept looking at him suspiciously. It was a normal feeling. Naruto was wary of Henry and was alert to the boy's every move. No matter how much someone was accompanied by his younger brother, Naruto doubted this world had kept him sane. He wasn't, never had been after. The intrusive thought made him stop and lean against the kitchen doorframe. He squeezed his eyes shut and breathed deeply, feeling his lungs fill with oxygen directly, powerfully, replenishing it for a few seconds. He picked up a firefly locket and looked again at the photo of that little girl a little older than Ellie. They looked alike. Red hair, green eyes, but their faces were different. Seeing that little girl's face brought back memories of the red-haired man who died, the one he'd killed keeping him from becoming infected. It had been a while, a few months, since he thought about him, though he was still on his mind. That was his locket, the one he was supposed to deliver to Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, along with a note. Problematic. Naruto tucked the locket under his tank top and pulled himself together, pushing himself up with his hands and using the doorframe for support. "Boy, are you okay?" Joel had noticed Naruto fainting, nearly falling to the ground after the stumble. He had sighed when he saw him holding onto the doorframe, but he was worried nonetheless. He kept watching, seeing Naruto look at the locket with a strange look before putting it back, then standing up with a vigorous push. But Joel was worried. "Are you tired?" he asked, taking Naruto by the shoulder. "Or sick? The river was rough, and you could probably catch a cold. You spent too much time wet." "I don't get sick. Never." Naruto shook his head, but allowed Joel to guide him to the couch. "I haven't been sick in 17 years, as far as I can remember. I've never had the flu, a fever, a runny nose, or any symptoms of a cold. I've always been fine." He sat down on the couch. Henry had cleared his things from the furniture, placing them next to his backpack on one of the chairs. "Get some rest," the boy murmured. "You've never had a cold, but Pittsburgh knocks anyone out. I'll see if I can find some medicine." Naruto didn't recover and simply closed his eyes, leaning his head back. He didn't feel sick, just terribly tired, lacking the energy to take another step. When was the last time he slept a full day? Since leaving home, he'd been wandering, surviving. Rest took a backseat, an unimportant one, and he only walked, ran, and shot to survive. His life was about survival, searching for food, killing the infected who were chasing him. Had his body completely reached its limit? Was this a wake-up call to stop wandering, to finally rest? He breathed in and out. "What's wrong with Naruto?" Ellie's voice sounded worried. She'd been playing with Sam when she heard the commotion and Joel talking to Naruto. So she left the room, followed by Sam, and watched as Naruto fell onto the couch, helped by Joel and Henry to get completely comfortable. "He's tired." Joel looked at the boy before answering Ellie, showing a slight frown. "You haven't been bitten, have you, kid?" Concern mixed with fear. Naruto shook his head, not responding. He was calm, relaxed, and didn't want to disturb that small peace, that relaxing moment. He hadn't been bitten, otherwise he wouldn't have felt it. Any bite can feel it, and the wound is clearly visible. "No, I haven't been bitten," he repeated, now staring directly at the ceiling. I'm far from infected, I assure you. Joel nodded, convinced by the boy's words, and walked back to the round table, leaving the three youngest children on the couch. Sam had sat on the far left side of the sofa, while Ellie sat on the right, her legs tucked up. Henry's little brother was playing with a doll, and that made Naruto smile, feeling a huge sensation in his chest. Are you sure you're okay, Naruto? Yes, Shorty, he moved his eyes to Ellie. I can assure you that I'm fine, 100%. It's just accumulated fatigue. I haven't rested this well in months, believe me. Naruto wasn't lying. He hadn't rested in months, hadn't sat down anywhere and closed his eyes, even on the floor. That simple act had caused his body to grind to a halt, drained of fuel to keep moving forward. His head was numb, and his eyes could barely focus on a single point, darting between Ellie, Henry, his doll, and the communications equipment. He was trying to stay somewhat focused. He wasn't sleepy, but his mind was disconnected from his body, bringing disjointed memories together, as if they were part of a gentle drizzle in his head. It was also relaxing, even though it felt vulnerable. Naruto, Ellie's voice broke the silence again, causing the boy to grunt slightly as his only response, which made the girl laugh. Where are you from? Your name isn't from here, that's for sure, although I can't say you're not American either. Very blonde and blue-eyed, for an Asian. Naruto Uzumaki is an out-of-the-book name, I assure you. Naruto allowed himself to laugh, but in a genuine way. He'd forgotten the sound of his own laughter, whether real or forced. How long had it been since he'd laughed, since anyone had spoken to him so casually? I'm Asian, he admitted, looking at the ceiling. He could see the paint chips. Some cracks had appeared, like veins, running along the ceiling, indicating how poorly maintained it was. It wasn't surprising. Survivor maintain a building. People will always choose the former, always. My mother is Japanese, and so is my father, although my paternal grandparents have American roots. He pursed his lips slightly, but Ellie didn't notice. I guess I picked up those traits from the family. Ellie nodded at the explanation, convinced by her friend's words. She hadn't felt like he was lying to her, although she did notice how his voice tensed slightly when he mentioned her parents, which made her think they might be dead or infected. Unfortunately, Ellie felt that this was true. Otherwise, why would Naruto be with them, away from his family? No one in their right mind would abandon their family in a world like this. Maybe he had no choice. She sighed softly so that Naruto wouldn't hear her and got up from the couch. Okay. He smiled at the older boy. Come on Sam. Let's let Naruto rest. A snort escaped him and he watched them walk away, running into the room just as Joel walked toward him with a cup in his hands. It was an iron cup like those used in the Old West with a steaming, seeping liquid. Naruto sat up, or rather, struggled to and bent down, resting on his knees. He accepted the cup with a smile, seeing that Joel was carrying another and Henry was walking toward them with a third. Cafe. Naruto inhaled the aroma. Coffee wasn't abundant these days and only the elderly remembered having even a cup of coffee. 20 years had passed since the start of the infection and no child, teenager or young adult born at that time had ever tasted coffee. He, on the other hand. My parents had a lot of coffee and tea, he admitted, taking a sip and smiling. They worked hard to maintain it for the neighborhood we were in. So I'm used to this taste. I missed it a little, I admit. Who taught you how to use the sword? Henry's eyes were fixed on the katana. There were no decorations on the scabbard or the unsheathed blade, but it emanated a sense of strength that even he could feel. My mother. She was a fencer, a real swordswoman. From what she told me, my grandfather was a swordsmith, forging them and being a master swordsman. He knew how to use them. He taught my mother. Naruto reached out and gently took the katana from Henry, who had picked it up from the chair. This sword is from my family. I think it dates back to the feudal era. The Uzumaki were a clan of samurai who served the emperor. And he gave them this nameless sword, without the seal of the master smith. All I know is that it wasn't forged by my ancestors. Naruto closed his hand around the katana's handle and pulled it back, revealing the deep dark gray blade, 75 centimeters long from handle to tip. There was no trace of blood or skin. Naruto had always made sure to keep it completely clean and ready to use whenever necessary. Another habit his mother instilled in him. I don't know anything about swords, Joel admitted, but I can look beautiful, if I do say so myself. It is. Maybe back when the society was operating, this sword could have been worth $500,000. It's at least 5 centuries old, if my mother's stories are true. But when it comes to the past, no one can know what is real or not in the stories we are told. The click came from the katana's sheath. I would have loved to have met your grandfather, Henry murmured. The stories of our elders are lost. I would have liked to meet him too, Naruto slowly placed the katana back in its place. I have to live with the memories my mother gave me of him. But I'm not sorry or sad, even though it hurts, I admitted. It's for my family that I live on. Let's leave the sad stuff behind, Joel grunted, shaking his head. Sarah's memories had begun to flood back, like a cascading waterfall. Joel wanted to stop her, and the best thing was to stop Naruto from talking about his grandfather or his parents. Are you better now that you've had caffeine? Caffeine doesn't affect me, the blonde assured him, giving a bright foxy smile, but it's given me a bit of energy. I think sitting, after months, is what's caused my body to reach its limit slightly. That's why it shut down. Sorry if I scared you, Joel. I'm glad you're feeling better, Joel took another sip of his coffee, enjoying the taste. And the fact that you didn't get bitten keeps me from shooting you with that arrogant grin. Ahahaha. I don't have an arrogant smile. Joel raised his right eyebrow. Let me doubt it, boy. Arrogant? Henry blinked. He hadn't known Naruto for long. Of the trio, Joel and Ellie were the ones he knew best, having survived Pittsburgh with the men escaped the hunters and infected. Is he arrogant? He doesn't seem like it to me. At first glance, Naruto is a charmer. Understand. But at the same time, he's arrogant. He trusts his abilities more than anything around him. And I can attest that he's too good for this world, if you'll pardon the compliment, Naruto snarled at the man's point. He fought off infected so we could escape Lincoln without wounds or bites. He fought off hunters and infected to allow us to flee Pittsburgh, all by himself, without help, and he found us in the end. He fought with a bow and arrows, barely using his pistol. Maybe it's not arrogance, but he's overconfident, perhaps extremely so, in himself and his abilities. They're just skills I acquired to survive, Naruto muttered, a little embarrassed by Joel's words. My mother taught me a huge portion of them. The rest, I acquired by surviving on the streets, fighting against the corrupted world and the infected. He took the last sip of his coffee. From then on, I just kept growing, learning and absorbing everything I could, becoming better. I didn't have the chance to rest, not even to find a safe place. Resting like this is a luxury. He stopped his rant, letting out a sigh. He'd gotten a little too emotional, letting out some of his pent-up feelings. Joel had made him talk, breaking the dam a little. The constant thought of his sister was digging deeper, and the memory of the words of the man he killed, the one who gave him the locket, were increasingly weighing on his shoulders. The coffee gave him energy, but talking about his parents and himself energized him much more than coffee or sitting on the couch. Your mother is a great woman, boy. Yes, it was, he admitted, nodding. And I'm going to honor everything he taught me and my family. A sudden shout broke the silence that had settled between the three. Joel and Henry moved first. Naruto took a little longer, struggling with his physical exhaustion, which his mind hadn't recognized. Ellie ran out of the room and launched herself at Naruto, who caught her, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her behind him. An echo of footsteps made her look towards the open door of the room, opening her eyes. But who spoke? It was Henry. Oh, no. Sam. Chapter 9. When you kill a person, you don't worry about burying them. You just leave them there, where they died, to be eaten by crows and vultures, completely forgotten. But when you kill someone you know, out of a greater need, you don't abandon the body, nor do you allow the crows and vultures to devour their flesh. Naruto had already buried his older sister, his mother and his father, along with close relatives, 3 people very close to him. Despite not knowing Henry and Sam very well, he had no problem burying them. His conscience wouldn't allow him to abandon them, nor the frightened embrace of Ellie, who had clung to him, frightened by the changes in Sam, the only boy close to her age she had ever known, apart from him. But the hardest part had been seeing Henry, his despair and his reaction to what had happened. It was a normal reaction to the action he'd taken, to the sight of his little brother being turned into an infected person. Naruto couldn't judge him or reprimand him for going into a frenzy that led to his death. Who else could endure a similar situation? Who, with a sane mind, could continue walking through the world as if nothing had happened? He plunged the shovel down again, leaving it stuck at the head of Henry's grave. He looked at it with regret, iron fingers gripping the shaft of the tool, nails digging into the wood. Naruto remembered another similar situation, 7 years ago, when the enormous shovel had been heavy and difficult to use, lifting it only a few inches with the collected earth acting as a counterweight, forcing him to stagger, so he could throw it at the makeshift coffins. He used the old refrigerator to bury Henry, covering his body with one of the blankets from the cot, using tape to keep it from being exposed. For little Sam, he had built a small coffin, also covering his body with another blanket, though slashing it with the blade of his katana, allowing him to use the fabric to encase the tiny body, leaving no space visible to worms. Although they would be devoured. Naruto left the shovel there, after placing 2 crosses, one on each of the graves, and walked away. He didn't know Henry or little Sam well enough to leave an epithet on those makeshift graves. He could deduce that Henry was protective, willing, and brave by the way he protected his brother, putting him before Joel, Ellie, or himself. He could also deduce that Sam was a charming, curious boy who loved his older brother above all else. Both brothers were too good for a world in constant change. A world full of horrors, monsters that look like people, and deceptions that could end their lives. Naruto himself didn't know how he was still alive after 7 years working only for his own survival. Perhaps Henry was one of those who didn't lose hope, one of those who didn't sink into darkness, but only if Sam was okay. Sam was his light, his spotlight, and the nail that Henry clung to with all his might until it finally broke, leading them both to the void. Thinking about Henry and Sam like that, as he walked back with Joel and Ellie, made him remember his older sister, his mother, and his father. All three had died long ago, his sister being the closest in time. Mito had been the last of his family alive, the last to embrace him before leaving him. Though she didn't abandon him, not for pleasure or liking, at least. Naruto couldn't believe that his sister would prefer death, that she would prefer to leave the world and abandon him. They had promised to always be together after what happened to their parents, and David had taken her from him. "I'm sorry, sister. I can't." He squeezed his eyes shut, holding back tears. He looked over his shoulder at where he had buried Henry and Sam. The siblings had reminded him of him and his sister. They too traveled the country looking for a new home until they found one, for a time, with David's group. The man was kind to them, all facade, a mask he built to lure them into his trap. Like a spider, David entangled them in his webs, restricting their movements. It was suffocating, but it was the only place they could live, where they could hide from the infected, the military, and the bad people, even though they were surrounded by them the whole time. The past had weighed heavily on him. Naruto felt his steps heavy, his lungs sluggish, and his eyes clouded with memories he'd kept locked away in his head. The faces of his sister and parents flashed past him with each step he took toward Ellie and Joel, seeing them as if in a movie. He also saw David's face, then that of the man he killed before arriving in Boston, the promise he'd made to him. "Are you sure you can keep going, kid?" Joel frowned at Naruto. He'd noticed Naruto's skin had turned wider, sickly, and his gaze was a little glassy, as if he wasn't looking at them, as if he weren't in the present. He worried that the boy was sick, with a fever, or that he'd been bitten by an infected person. Although, if it was the latter, the infection should have hit him hours ago. Naruto stopped. "Don't worry," he murmured, pulling the strap of his backpack tight, slinging it completely over his back. Using some thread from a torn t-shirt, he reconstructed the backpack's handle and was able to use it again, with no external damage. "We can't be late. Jackson isn't right next door, Joel. We have to go meet your brother and try to locate the fireflies." Joel's brother was the only one who could tell them where the fireflies might be, where they were hiding from the military and their other enemies. They couldn't locate them the easy way, and it didn't even occur to them to try. The government was actively pursuing the terrorists, even with their current weakness. The military and the fireflies were constantly fighting, with the latter steadily losing ground. Naruto knew that, to Marlene, Ellie was a key asset. Otherwise, she wouldn't have risked giving her to Joel, which made the girl something truly important. "Your health is more important," Ellie admonished, tugging at Naruto's sleeve. "You have a horrible face." "It's just tiredness," he muttered, freeing himself from the girl's grasp. "Don't worry so much about me, okay? This is nothing. If we keep chattering, it'll get dark." She started walking. Joel sighed heavily and pushed Ellie lightly, signaling for the girl to start walking. But Ellie frowned and started walking, behind Joel and Naruto, who was in front. She began to watch him, Naruto, constantly, worried. Since the night before Henry and Sam, Naruto had started acting erratic, clumsy, and sick, as well as very tired. That couldn't be normal, not for her at least, but Joel wasn't stopping the boy, and she just started watching him constantly. They had almost a month ahead of them. Jackson County, where Tommy was located in Wyoming, about 1,575 miles from Pittsburgh, and they no longer had the car to travel that distance, so they would have to walk. They would walk through woods and roads. They would struggle with vegetation and potholes, as well as uneven ground. No one, not even Ellie, believed they wouldn't have trouble with the infected. There would probably be some hiding in the woods or on the roads, in abandoned cars on the shoulders. It would be a dangerous journey, with no opportunity to turn back or flee once they started. Naruto was determined to reach Jackson, so he took the lead, serving as the small group's guide, scout, and lookout, always with his bow in hand. After a few hours of travel, Joel took up his rearguard position, his pistol out of his pocket, leaving Ellie in the middle, her revolver in her backpack. Joel didn't quite know why he let Naruto go first, when he was the adult. A 17-year-old boy was taking charge of them, protecting them, and willing to give his life as their guide and scout. He was trusting a mere child when he was the adult of the group, when he should be the one taking the boy's place and protecting them both. But Naruto was stubborn. "Stop worrying, Joel," she said when they stopped, 3 days into their journey. "I can carry you. I'm experienced in tracking and scouting, believe me. Who survived Pittsburgh without getting bitten? This is only a little tougher because we have almost a month to get there. I'll take care of protecting you." Since Henry and Sam's deaths, something had changed in Naruto. Joel noticed. The tone with which he said he would protect them was one of regret, not for protecting them, but for something he hadn't managed to do. It wasn't just his pale face that worried him anymore, but his obsession with being the one who would lead them to Tommy, almost as if it were his duty. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Joel muttered on the 10th day of the trip. "If you keep this up, you're going to end up getting sick, even though you never get sick." Joel. "Ellie. Can you help me with the firewood?" Naruto, "Rest in the sleeping bag. That's an order. I shouldn't let a brat take charge, not when he's sick." Joel pushed Naruto into the sleeping bag, leaving him lying there, wrapped up. Autumn was starting in earnest, with constant heavy rains and bad weather always accompanying the days, and that didn't help anyone who was sick. Joel watched as Naruto got into the sleeping bag and nodded as he wrapped himself completely around his head and closed his eyes to sleep. Something has changed in Naruto. Ellie was the one who broke the silence once the fire was lit and they were safe in an old gas station. Naruto was snoring softly. They could hear him and see how the sleeping bag moved slightly up and down, following the boy's breathing. Something came over him after he left the tombs. Joel sighed, shaking his head and taking a sip from his water bottle. "I don't know anything about Naruto, and I'm not going to push it, but he could be suffering from PTSD, a repressed kind. I'm no expert, but seeing him overexert himself tells me he's trying to avoid something that happened to him, something involving people." He stopped, aware that he was talking to Ellie. "Don't even think about mentioning anything, kiddo. We could be in deep shit if we're not careful. Have you kept an eye on him?" "Of course. You don't even have to look too hard." The trio resumed their journey at dawn the next day, abandoning the old gas station and taking the supplies they found there. They were already closer to Jackson, according to the map they found covered in dust and under several oil cans. Naruto took out an old compass, his father's, and used it to guide himself and his companions toward Jackson from the gas station. His father had taught him to navigate using tree moss, the stars, the moon, and the sun, in addition to the compass. Jackson was to the west, so they had to continue in that direction without stopping or straying too far, which was difficult. On several occasions, they encountered infected and some bandits, the latter eager to take everything they had. But they managed to get rid of them. Naruto tried to wound the bandits, understanding that they were trying to survive, but he didn't allow that with the infected. With them, it was either die or live, and Naruto always chose to live, as did Joel and Ellie. They had to stay alive. They wanted to stay alive. "We're almost there." Naruto walked, using all the strength he had, up the slope filled with natural steps that were spaced in strange ways, which could cause injury. Joel and Ellie followed him, and when they reached the top of the hill, they looked at the dam in front of them. It belonged to Jackson, so they were close to where Tommy was. They were one step away from finding out where the fireflies were, where Marlene was. Marlene. He reached under the cloth and grabbed the locket, remembering that little girl's face. She was like Ellie, though only in her hair and eyes, and something else if his father was right. And that meant they were wrong, they made a mistake. "Let's go," Joel started walking down, straight toward the entrance. "Let's find my brother." Naruto tucked the locket under his shirt and followed Ellie, who had started walking behind Joel, taking small but steady steps. The girl was trying not to fall and hurt herself, which was fine. "I'll help you." "Naruto." The boy grabbed her by the waist and lifted her up, walking with her the last few steps. When they were down, near the door, he set her down, which earned him a punch in the shoulder. "Also. Stop being idiots, kids." He started it. Joel shook his head and touched the wire fence. He was about to push, looking for a gap to get in, when he felt them being watched. The next second, he heard several guns being raised. "I wouldn't do it if I were you." The woman walked among the men and women pointing at them. She was blonde, with gray eyes, and her hair swept back. There was dirt on her face, though not noticeable, as well as minor burns from working in the sun. "Are you bandits?" "I hope not. I wouldn't do it if I were you, boy." One of the men pointed the barrel of his shotgun directly at Naruto, stopping his movement. "TCH. Joel." One of the men lowered his gun slightly, looking at Joel in surprise. A smile appeared on his face shortly after. "It's you, Joel." Joel blinked at the man walking toward him and smiled when he recognized him. "Tommy." The brothers hugged each other after years without seeing each other. They had found Jackson and, by extension, Tommy. Chapter 10. The North Teton Dam was in good condition, being used as the Jackson County power plant. It was the place where the three had arrived. Where Tommy had greeted and invited them in, introducing them to Maria, his wife and leader of that group. At least, Naruto thought Maria was the boss, even over Joel's brother, judging by the way she directed the men. With just one glance, combined with the fact that she had ordered the guns to be lowered earlier, anyone could see the same thing he had seen. The people obeyed Maria's words without question, taking them as an order. and no one reproached, complained, or fought to keep pointing them, which was appreciated. Naruto had almost killed the man who had pointed the barrel at him, and that would have likely ended in a confrontation and the deaths of several of Jackson's residents. They are doing a good job. The people who had come to the Jackson community had done a great job with the dam and the power plant. They had built walls, fixed fences, and placed gates wherever necessary, protecting the plant from potential attackers or the infected, ensuring that the infection wouldn't be a problem for the community's inhabitants. And that was an enormous undertaking, one to admire and respect. No one built a city because Maria had built a city in a destroyed world. Not in the real world, at least, though Naruto doubted they were, but he admitted to holding on to a glimmer of hope, even if it was just a spark. Maria and Tommy gave the trio a tour of the plant, introducing them to some of the men and women who worked there and telling them how they had built the community. No one was idling, or sleeping on the job. Even the youngest members were working, laying bricks or checking machinery, as well as keeping watch from the watchtowers. The couple finally, after the initial tour, led the group to Maria's office for a private conversation. Tommy wanted and needed to know how his brother had been. The Miller brothers hadn't seen each other for years, ever since a disagreement that had affected the two men, one they didn't seem to want to rehash due to the enormous affection they had for each other and the length of their time apart. At first, Naruto noticed a certain resentment between the brothers, as if something had happened between them, leading him to think they had a disagreement. Perhaps it was because of Tommy's time with the Fireflies. Or was it for some other reason? Naruto wasn't going to investigate too much, not when he saw that the look had been merely a fleeting gesture and that affection and caring had grown between them again, although neither man said anything beyond that look. Here. This will help. Joel told me you've been tired, and while we're talking, I'd like to get to know you a little. Tommy will no doubt learn about you through Joel. The boy accepted the cup of tea from Maria's hands and gave a small grateful nod. He soon discovered it wasn't just tea, though, spitting some out and coughing. Hahaha. Not everyone likes this kind of tea, Naruto. Can I call you Naruto? Yes. No problem. I'm not one for formalities, he admitted, giving a small smile. I never liked formal treatment, not even in my community or with my parents. Even my mother was worse at it than I was. Maria leaned on the small table while Naruto leaned back in the chair, holding the cup of black tea. He doubted it was black tea, but since he'd never seen anything like it, he decided it was black tea. Traveling from Boston to Pittsburgh and then to Jackson. That's half a continent away, isn't it? How's it going? How do you know Joel and Ellie? Ugh, questions. Hahaha. Maria, I joined Joel and Ellie to find the Fireflies, just like them. I'm a member of the terrorist group that has plagued the country with its attacks on the government. Something I think Joel has forgotten and Ellie prefers to omit. He placed the teacup on the small table next to Maria's left hand and leaned back in his chair. His companions forgot to mention to Henry and Sam that he was a Firefly, which he always had been, though that was just a mask, of course. He had no affiliation with the group, but that had been his cover since he met Joel and Ellie, and he was still inside that mask. Abandoning it now made no sense. And he knew that with Maria, he had to be honest, or rather, pretend to be honest. How many would support them if they knew of their mission, their real objective behind that cover? Naruto was taking a risk, walking on thin, creaking ice, and he went ahead with it after mentioning it to the woman. Firefly? That's right. I'm a member of the terrorist group. I ran into Joel and Ellie in Lincoln when I was looking for Marlene in Boston. They were the ones who told me she wasn't there anymore, that she'd moved on after her defeat by the military. As you can understand, I wasn't going to continue on to Boston. My best option was to stay with Joel and Ellie. The girl has a bit of a crush on you. She was the one who kept her eyes on you when I took you for this chat. Are you sure you just see it as a pass at your boss? Maria's eyes turned neutral, almost emotionless, waiting for the boy's response. Naruto would have to say the right words, the answer she wanted. She could see how the boy was thinking, and Maria didn't flinch, not even when she considered stopping him and sending him to some hole. She wasn't a fan of the Fireflies. They created chaos, brought death, and empty promises. People like them were plentiful anywhere in the world. At first, yes, Naruto finally admitted. Afterwards, I just kept going because I wanted to. I'd say my goal isn't Marlene anymore, but rather preventing Ellie or Joel from suffering any kind of mishap. I wouldn't want them to die, not when they're so good to me. Maria nodded, but didn't say anything for a moment. Naruto took the cup of black tea and took a huge sip, leaving only the rim of the cup with the dregs. You seem sincere, but I sense you're looking for more than just protecting them. When Ellie seemed concerned about me pushing you away, I decided to watch you a little more than usual, even with Tommy's promise that you were good. I can trust Joel and the girl from time to time, but your pale seemed to be stumbling when you got here. Haha. Joel and Ellie are pretty annoying about that, to be honest. I don't need another person worrying about me, he murmured. I'm just tired. A few days of good sleep when this is over will give me the recovery I need." A sigh escaped the woman's mouth. Maria crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow, fixing her analytical gaze on the teenager in front of her. Should she believe him? No. Naruto's face was pale, with glassy eyes moving a little nervously, as if he didn't want to be scrutinized by her, as if he didn't want them to find something in him, whatever was exhausting him. Maria had to admit she was worried, at least a little, about the boy. Outwardly, he seemed fine, but he was uncoordinated physically, and simple tea wouldn't help him fully recover. He needed a doctor. "I'll call the doctor." "No, it's not necessary," the boy denied. "I appreciate it, Maria, but I'm really fine. A rest, without thinking about infected people and bandits, is all I need." Naruto knew he couldn't convince Maria, unlike Joel and Ellie, that he was okay. Tommy's wife seemed genuinely determined to force him to take bed rest, even if it was against his will. She was a stubborn woman, intent on making him see that he was wrong. He appreciated that concern, truly, but he didn't need it. Not now, not at this time. He could take care of himself, like he had for the past 7 years. He hadn't fallen ill, not once. This wasn't going to be the time. Instinctively, he stroked the locket. This caught Maria's eye, though she didn't respond to the gesture, and she looked back at the boy. His blue eyes were shining with a certain intensity again, and his face seemed a little less pale, with a bit more color than it had been a second ago. She sighed, fed up with the teenager's youthful behavior, and pushed back from the small table she'd been leaning on. She hated hormones, how young people believed themselves to be invincible. She didn't know Naruto well enough to know whether or not he was telling her the truth or to stop him and force him to rest. "I'll give you some medicine." Maria walked to the door and opened it. "Eric. Get me the first aid kit." Medicines were precious gold, something too important to waste. Naruto tried to stand up to stop her, but Maria pushed him back into the chair and leaned back on the table, staring at him intently. "I'll at least make sure you recover or gain some strength, kid. I won't let you leave here without medication that can help you, understand? Otherwise, I'll remove you from the group and you'll stay with us until you regain your strength. Choose what you want. Stay with Joel and Ellie, with medication, or be removed from them." "I guess my words about wanting both of your protection have reached your heart, huh?" Naruto laughed dryly, nodding stubbornly. It was better to follow Joel and Ellie on medication than to be separated from them and lose Marlene. "Okay, Maria. I'll take your medication, and Joel will make sure I take it, I promise. Would that be enough for you to let me go with them?" "Not too much, but I'll take it. I hope neither you nor Joel fool me, kid. I wouldn't like to know you've broken your promise." "The Uzumaki never break promises, Sachi." A shiver ran through Naruto's body, though Maria couldn't feel it. A strange chill, a sensation that made his hair stand on end, made him breathe deeply. That phrase, fondly stored in one of his many memories, gave him those sensations, almost as if a spirit had touched him. "I promise you." Swallowing hard, Naruto accepted responsibility for his words. "I'll take the medication. Joel will make sure I take it and I won't break my promise." Maria looked at the boy, assessing him, searching for any trace of deception. She looked directly into his blue eyes, his body language. She read the atmosphere and waited for any grimace that would tell her he was lying. Naruto didn't move, didn't make any gestures, didn't even blink or change the brightness of his eyes. The door opened and Eric, a big man with a broad back, enormous arms, and a lumberjack beard, handed Maria the first aid kit. "Thank you, Eric." The man nodded slowly, looked at Naruto with small beetle-like eyes, and left the room. When the door closed, Maria searched the medicine cabinet and tossed the boy several medications. "I'll take your word for it. I hope you don't break it." Naruto put the medicines back in his backpack, which he had left on the floor, and looked back at Maria. Now the woman seemed a little more relaxed, a little calmer and more willing, which told Naruto that she was much more receptive to his words, to any answer, whether it was true or false, that he gave her. "Thank you, Maria. Don't give them to me. By the way, Tommy will tell Joel and Ellie, but I'd like you to." The creaking of steps preceded the door's abrupt opening. Eric showed his round, flushed face. He was panting, as if he'd just run into it. Bandits. Bandits again. Chapter 11. The Jackson community was a town, in every sense of the word. Set back a few miles from the power plant, Jackson was surrounded by a high wall, with thick gates, various houses, a tavern, running water, medicine, a school and electricity. This electricity came from the Jackson County power plant, using turbines to create power from the hydroelectric power of the North Teton, thus making Jackson a full-fledged town, one of the few that remained unsupervised by the military or Fedra, who were often present in every community or quarantine zone across the country after the Cordyceps outbreak began. This was not the case in Jackson. People living in Jackson had held countless jobs before the outbreak or had learned from community elders in order to keep the community running smoothly in the hope that society would return once the outbreak was over. For this reason, the power plant was of interest to bandits who constantly attacked it with the intention of taking it over. If they succeeded in cutting off the electricity, Jackson would lose the only thing that made it different from other communities, and chaos could spread throughout the town, creating many problems for both children and adults. Maria and Tommy, as well as the workers at the power plant, were not willing to allow bandits, who were not willing to live with them, to destroy everything they had worked for, everything they had built. Eric tossed a shotgun toward Naruto, who caught it in midair and pulled, hearing the classic click as he pulled the slide back in one fluid motion, taking advantage of the fact that he had caught the weapon midair. He had never used a shotgun. The Glock, the bow, and the katana were his weapons, along with a serrated military knife that he carried on occasion, hidden in his ankle. Do you know how to use a shotgun? Yes, I know how to use a shotgun. Naruto grabbed her with both hands and followed Maria out of her office, raising the barrel of his gun as he left the building. If bandits were raiding the hydroelectric power plant, it meant they were going after the generators. He would go after the generators. He would destroy the generators, cutting off the power to the community, and then he would go after the workers. When he cut the power, the lights would go out, which meant the bandits, if they were smart, had prepared for a dark fight. What they hadn't counted on was that he was an expert at fighting in the dark, without a flashlight. His eyes were accustomed to low light or complete darkness. He had forced himself to do it. As he turned toward the generator building, Naruto instinctively pulled the shotgun's trigger, shooting one of the bandits directly in the chest. The man flew backward a few meters, crashing into several crates, and lay there, inert, blood staining his tattered clothes. One shot. He ran. He took several strides and jumped behind some pallets, taking cover from the gunfire. Two bandits pulled the triggers of their guns, unleashing a volley of bullets at the pallets, causing splinters of wood to fly like confetti. The moment Naruto heard the click of the guns as they tried to fire and found no ammunition, he reared up and shot both of them, directly in the chest like the first bandit. They didn't react in time, and the boy fired both shots in quick succession. The two men were thrown backward, abandoning their position at the entrance door, falling onto the wet ground, rolling down the small slope, and staining their clothes with mud. Naruto pulled the slide of the gun and chambered 3 rounds as he walked toward the door. He'd lost Eric, the gentle-faced giant, and Maria. The woman had probably gone looking for Tommy and Joel, so he was the one who went off track. Although he followed his instinct. He walked to the door and pushed it open with his shoulder, pointing the barrel of the gun straight ahead. He could see and hear the generators, clicking steadily, working to generate power for Jackson. Taking a breath, feeling some dust enter his nostrils, Naruto entered the generator room, walking slowly, sweeping with the weapon, looking for the bandits who would be there. Naruto knew they had come to destroy the generators. It wasn't just his intuition anymore. He had killed 2 bandits at the entrance, who might have been the lookouts who should have warned their companions. The boy knew the bandits had been warned, and plenty of them. The hail of gunfire from both sides would have alerted them that he was moving toward the generators and would soon enter the place. I would destroy all the generators, starting with the one furthest from the door. He felt the cold metal of the gun as his finger gently caressed the trigger, pressing it slightly. He leaned on the butt of the gun and released the pressure. Another shot, a jet of gunpowder, flew out and struck another bandit in the right arm, causing an explosion of blood, skin, bone, and muscle that stained the already filthy living room floor. He walked, taking cover behind a pillar. The bandits regrouped, took cover, and began firing. The bullets hit the metal, causing sparks and small clangs, as well as incessant clangs that echoed around the room in a furious, ever-increasing echo. Naruto looked up at the ceiling. He could hear the bandits shifting positions. The bandits taking cover and letting other comrades fire, forcing him to stay there, protected by the pillar. They made the hail of bullets an insurmountable wall for a human, for someone who could die. Perhaps some infected might survive, but not him. He was a human. Slowly, Naruto bent down and reached for his back pocket. Without searching too hard, he felt the ring of one of the hand grenades. He had saved it for certain occasions and had taken it from his backpack when he left Maria's office. "I'm sorry." He pulled the ring and launched it low along the ground, directly toward the bandits' legs. Many flinched, frightened, but a couple who weren't covered were thrown into the air when the grenade exploded, sending smoke, debris, and blood showering down. Naruto took advantage of that curtain. He gripped the Glock in his right hand and held the shotgun in his left. He walked, firing toward the bandits, knocking them down, killing them, with confident steps, feeling the bullets grazing his body, feeling how he could die if he took a wrong step. Stupid boy. Naruto deflected the bandit's blow with his forearm, forcing the man to fall forward. He pressed the barrel of the gun against the man's temple and pulled the trigger, feeling the blood stain his face in warm drops that made him not even blink. Matadlo. He jumped, taking cover behind several metal crates. He replaced the Glock in its holster, with only a couple of bullets left in the magazine, and pulled back the shotgun slide. Naruto took a deep breath, feeling his lungs swell with air, refreshing him. His head didn't hurt. His sister was gone, replaced by a need to survive that filled him like a shot of adrenaline, putting all his senses on edge. Let's go now. Naruto spun and fired, knocking down another bandit as the shot struck his knee. The man fell forward, hitting his face directly on the ground, causing a bloody crunch as his teeth collided with the concrete. HMPH. He raised his gun and shot another bandit directly at his right shoulder. This caused the man to miss and fall backward, his shoulder shattered, bloody, and with blood running down his limb and onto his hand. He hadn't hit the man's shoulder directly. Naruto took several cartridges and reloaded the shotgun, hidden among the metal crates filled with tools and objects the workers used to repair and tune the generators. He could hear the bullets ricocheting, seeking to explode his flesh, seeking to kill him. Only 2 remain. The boy straightened, sitting behind the metal crates, and stepped out when the gunfire stopped. He didn't fire at the men. He saw the 2 bandits reloading their weapons, looking at him with some surprise, unease, and confusion. Naruto ran toward them and ducked, evading the butt of the first one's gun, hitting him with an elbow directly in the stomach. He stretched out his arms, swinging his shotgun, and slammed the butt of the weapon into the second man's face. A crunch followed the impact, and the bandit's nose was shattered, with blood oozing from both nostrils, staining his upper lip. Buck. Naruto slammed his fist directly into the first one's face and turned around, placing the barrel of the Glock under the second one's chin, lifting his face from his chin. The bandit with the smashed nose grunted as he felt the cold metal make contact with his skin and stood, staring at the teenager with fury in his dark eyes. It's nothing personal, Naruto struck the Glock's trigger with his finger. Any more and the shot would have blown his head off. But you decided to try this on a slightly bad day for me. On any other day, I probably wouldn't be so cruel. Buck off, brat. Good manners. Click. Oh, there are no bullets. The man tried to move, but Naruto knocked him down and hit him with the butt of his gun, leaving him lying on the ground, completely unconscious, but breathing. You could see it in the way his chest moved, but you could easily check it by placing 2 fingers under his nose. He was definitely breathing. Naruto changed the magazine in his Glock and holstered it, standing up just as Maria appeared, followed by Eric, Tommy, and several more of Jackson's men, all with guns. Naruto. He stood over the last of the bandits for a few more seconds. He spat to the side and turned, confronting the Jackson leader, her husband, and a handful of other men and women from the community, who were staring at him in a certain amazement. Did you do this? Naruto shrugged, stepping over the bandit, slinging the shotgun Eric had given him over his shoulder. He walked over to Jackson's people, receiving a silent reception. He said nothing, not even looking back at Tommy or his wife, though Maria's focus was on the defeated bandits. He took the shotgun down and placed it in Eric's giant's hands, pushing it firmly against his chest, returning the man a calm smile. Here, he said, withdrawing his hand and placing the weapon in Eric's lap. I won't be needing it anymore. I prefer my bow, my sword, and my Glock, if I'm honest, but thanks for lending it to me, Eric. Naruto walked through Jackson's crowd, turning his back on them, and left the room in complete silence, leaving them there still staring at his work. Did he do this? Alone? One of the men spoke, his eyes wide, his gun shaking in his hands. It seems so. Joel wasn't here, and neither was Ellie, Tommy replied, staring at the scene with a frown, sensing something was off about the place. A kid, is he capable of this? No one answered him. Tommy snorted and shook his head, searching for a way to answer himself, while at the same time hoping someone would answer him, help him understand what he was seeing, rationalize the scene that his eyes saw, but that his head couldn't comprehend as a reality. The boy is a survivor, a better one than anyone, Maria's voice startled her husband and those with him. The woman turned, looking at them all. He spent so much time surviving, that now the only thing that keeps him sane is surviving. Chapter 12. The clouds had barely waned the next day. They still covered the sky, and a slightly cooler air rocked the tree branches as if caressing them, as if delicate fingers were moving them with great care. Sitting on the cot in the room Maria had provided for him, Naruto stared at his bare feet, his boots placed close together next to the door. He rocked them back and forth, even though his bare feet could touch the ground. He was tall enough, of course, but he stood with his back against the wall, feeling the cold of the dirty concrete against his bare skin. He slept without a shirt, without pajamas covering his torso, his scars. He dragged himself to the edge of the bed, his feet already touching the cold gray floor, and stood up, revealing his back. It wasn't a massive back, but it was defined, with muscles that bulged whenever he performed any upper body movement, whether it was just moving one of his arms or a simple shrug. The muscles weren't the only things marked and drawn with meticulous precision on his back, nor were they the only thing a person would notice. They weren't small, but varied in size and shape, as well as the area affected. At least 100 scars were etched into that skin, marked in different ways, with varying depths and disparate designs. One appeared to be a burn, located in the lumbar region, on the right side. Another looked like a wound from a serrated knife, military or hunting, just below the back of the shoulder, as if someone had tried to pierce his lung. That back bore 100 scars, drawn into the skin and marked as a constant reminder, a constant lamentation. They were a curse no one should bear, no one should ever suffer. Naruto picked up the shirt one Tommy had given him and put it on, covering those scars. He didn't look at them. He didn't stroke them or check if they were still there. He'd long since stopped examining his back, searching to see if they'd disappeared and if they were just part of his nightmare. He had accepted them, partially, as part of his body, but he didn't let anyone see or touch them. He kept them with him, hidden under his clothes, under layers and layers of clothing to protect them, to hide them from prying eyes. He tucked the edges of his t-shirt into his pants and took the short-sleeved black button-down shirt and put it on over his dark green t-shirt. He could have passed for a member of the Fireflies, wearing that military-inspired color scheme. The Queen of the Fireflies. Naruto picked up the locket from the edge of the desk and looked at it, swaying back and forth slightly in the wind. It had the terrorist symbol engraved into the metal, an everlasting symbol that would never be erased. Naruto wouldn't let anyone forget it, much less himself. His eyes darkened for a brief moment before he hung the locket around his neck, hiding it beneath his shirt, feeling the cold metal pressed against his chest, making him feel the locket with every step he took, with every advance he made. Marlene. He took his pistol from the holster on the chair and hung it on the right side of his waist, with the magazines on the left side. Maria had given him some extra magazines and a belt with pockets to store them on the left side. He looked much more like a soldier now than he did before he met Joel and Ellie, before traveling to Boston in search of the Firefly terrorists. Naruto, dressed in with his accessories, looked at himself in the cracked mirror in his room. It returned a slightly dark gaze, but much calmer than one might expect. A slightly pale face looked at him, suspicious, waiting for any gesture or movement. Waiting for the mask to finally crack. He ran his hand through his golden hair, brushing it back with a little water, watching the unruly strands move in the different directions he'd expected. His hair was untamable, wild, and there was no way to comb it, no way to fix it, no matter how hard he tried. It was an inheritance from his father. The knock on the door made Naruto turn away from the mirror and sink, aware of how long he'd been staring at that broken mirror. He took a deep breath, checked he had his gun, and walked, in 2 strides, directly toward the door. Joel was on the other side when he opened it, looking a little tired, with slight dark circles under his face. Naruto thought the man had aged, probably from the long cross-country trip and the stress of the fights they'd had against bandits and the infected. Seeing this, the boy wondered if it wouldn't be better if Tommy ended up taking Ellie to the Fireflies, if it wouldn't be better for himself if that happened. I don't want to kill him. You seem to be looking better, kid. The lips curved, drawing a smile on Joel's mouth, to which Naruto responded with one of his own, as he closed the door to the room, walking to the man's side. The restful sleep, without the stress of being chased, has given me back my energy, he admitted, digging his hands into his pockets, erasing the dark thoughts from his mind, saving them for when he had to destroy that bridge. Shall we go talk to Tommy? Yes. He has information about the Fireflies, about where Marlene might be, now that she's fled Boston with her tail between her legs, Joel said, his face and tone of voice serious. I tried to get Tommy to take Ellie with them, but I couldn't. I argued with her, and we made up. Naruto raised his right eyebrow, appearing surprised by this revelation. He had considered Tommy as a possible guide to the Fireflies, a change Naruto himself wanted for the group, a change he needed, but he hadn't expected Joel himself to propose this to his brother, causing him to clash with Ellie. To him, Joel and Ellie were very close, albeit in their own strange way. I'm sorry I wanted to leave you, Joel continued, giving a slightly forced, apologetic smile. The 3 of us will finish the trip together. Tommy will show us where Marlene might be, and we'll put all this behind us. Out of inertia, Naruto nodded at Joel's words, still surprised to learn that. Why didn't Joel keep it to himself? The man had always been reserved, hiding much of his feelings, his physical exhaustion. Why did he have to start making things more complicated for him now? Naruto cursed himself internally, but didn't say anything for a few minutes as they walked toward Maria's office, where she and Tommy, as well as Ellie, were waiting for them. Why do you complicate everything, God? The 2 finally arrived at Maria's office. The room was still as Naruto remembered it. A small table serving as a desk on the other side, under a series of small windows. Bookshelves were positioned on either side of the back wall, like firm guards for the desk, filled with old, slightly dusty books. Naruto believed some of those books would fall apart if he took them off their shelves with a simple touch of his hands. Maria and Tommy were already inside, on Maria's table, looking at a map spread out on it that represented the entire country, the entire United States. Some phrases, some lines, and some sticky notes were placed on some locations, indicated by thin pen lines leading to them. Were they resource locations? Areas where they could hunt? Where there were resources? Or maybe they were locations where the fireflies would be. Naruto took in every location, every well-placed sticky note or written note about a location on the map, and memorized them completely, storing them in his mind in case he ever needed them, in case he could help Maria and Tommy look for supplies for Jackson as payment for their hospitality, for the resources they put toward his care, as well as the medication they gave him, the same ones he pretended to be taking. Naruto. Joel. Maria was the first to notice them, looking up from the map and giving them a smile. Good morning. Good morning, Maria. You look better, Naruto. Good morning. Yes, I'm feeling much better after a few restorative hours of rest. Maria scrutinized Naruto's face, looking for any possible signs of lying. She did so for a few seconds, while both Naruto and Joel greeted Tommy, who had already noticed his brother and the boy's presence. She nodded in satisfaction, her lips curving into a calm smile. I'm glad to hear it. Ellie's with the horses, gathering supplies for your trip to the university in eastern Colorado, Tommy reported, tapping a finger on one of the marked areas on the immense map, pressing it down rather firmly. The university science building is where the fireflies are, where Marlene and her group have retreated. A university? Specifically the science building. Naruto leaned over to look at the area Tommy was pointing at, skeptical of what the man was telling him. I didn't see Marlene with any scientific looks or interest. I don't know Marlene's objectives, Tommy admitted, removing his hand from the map. She never shared that information with me. Despite being a firefly, I was never in her inner circle of trust. The queen has her favorites, Joel snorted, making Naruto smile. It's better than nothing. Joel, like Naruto, was upset by the terrorist group's location, but he didn't ask or question why they were there. However, it seemed that overthrowing the government was no longer his sole objective, his sole mission to rebuild society. He was doing or searching for something that involved science to put an end to their plans. She always had them, Tommy admitted dryly. Some of them have died, like Christopher, a red-haired man. He was in Marlene's inner circle before someone shot him in the head, supposedly from being bitten. If we're lucky, the circle will be destroyed, Naruto pointed out, unfazed. If Marlene doesn't have any lieutenants, it means we'll be dealing with her directly. That woman doesn't shy away from conversations, Joel said. The only conversation he'd had with Marlene was about taking care of Ellie, and it was Tess who had talked her through it, reaching the agreement. Although the weapons were of little value to him anymore. Ellie is important to her, so she'll talk to us directly, and you can give her the information you need, kid. Meeting the queen is an honor, Tommy continued. If you're from another cell, then she'll send you wherever you're needed for her work. Naruto brought his hand to the back of his neck, massaging it lightly. With each step he took, the ice became thinner and thinner, to the point where a single step could make him sink completely, drowning in his own web of lies. He didn't show those feelings, though, just shrugged, looking directly at Tommy. Honor or not, I have to give you the information. It's the only reason I've continued the trip. Although my interest is no longer in working with them, I suppose. I value my rebuilt peace of mind too much. Maria gave a small smile. Tommy did too, but his was broader than his wife's. Joel didn't say anything or make the slightest gesture at those words, although he looked more relaxed, his shoulders less tense. So, I guess we could treat you to Jackson when you're done. Naruto gave a wide smile. Absolutely, Maria. I'd be happy to stop by Jackson to help you with the community. You've done so much for me, and I plan to give back, even if you tell me no, and that I shouldn't. He anticipated Maria and Tommy's words, reading their body language. It's the least I can and will do for you, for Jackson. We've prepared 2 horses for you, Tommy said, shaking his head and changing the subject, though pleased with the boy's words. Since there are 3 of us, I think it's best. We also prepared more supplies, counting on you to use your bow, Naruto. Thanks, Tommy. Ellie did it, he replied, giving the boy a smile. She packed your backpack carefully, choosing what you would wear and what you would bring if you packed it yourself. Then I'll thank her. Naruto walked over and hugged Maria at the same time Joel squeezed his brother's hand. Afterward, Naruto took Tommy's hand and Joel hugged Maria. Tommy took advantage and pulled Naruto towards him to speak to him alone, to whisper in his ear. Take care of my brother, Naruto. I'm glad you want to escape the fireflies, but Marlene is dangerous. Take care, all 3 of you, but keep an eye on my brother. Naruto nodded silently, though with other thoughts in his head, spinning like in a completely raging sea. He was planning to kill Joel, not protect him. The clouds had barely waned the next day. They still covered the sky, and a slightly cooler air rocked the tree branches as if caressing them, as if delicate fingers were moving them with great care. Sitting on the cot in the room Maria had provided for him, Naruto stared at his bare feet, his boots placed close together next to the door. He rocked them back and forth, even though his bare feet could touch the ground. He was tall enough, of course, but he stood with his back against the wall, feeling the cold of the dirty concrete against his bare skin. He slept without a shirt, without pajamas covering his torso, his scars. He dragged himself to the edge of the bed, his feet already touching the cold gray floor, and stood up, revealing his back. It wasn't a massive back, but it was defined, with muscles that bulged whenever he performed any upper body movement, whether it was just moving one of his arms or a simple shrug. The muscles weren't the only things marked and drawn with meticulous precision on his back, nor were they the only thing a person would notice. They weren't small, but varied in size and shape, as well as the area affected. At least 100 scars were etched into that skin, marked in different ways, with varying depths and disparate designs. One appeared to be a burn, located in the lumbar region, on the right side. Another looked like a wound from a serrated knife, military or hunting, just below the back of the shoulder, as if someone had tried to pierce his lung. That back bore 100 scars, drawn into the skin and marked as a constant reminder, a constant lamentation. They were a curse no one should bear, no one should ever suffer. Naruto picked up the shirt, one Tommy had given him, and put it on, covering those scars. He didn't look at them. He didn't stroke them or check if they were still there. He'd long since stopped examining his back, searching to see if they'd disappeared and if they were just part of his nightmare. He had accepted them, partially, as part of his body, but he didn't let anyone see or touch them. He kept them with him, hidden under his clothes, under layers and layers of clothing to protect them, to hide them from prying eyes. He tucked the edges of his t-shirt into his pants and took the short-sleeved black button-down shirt and put it on over his dark green t-shirt. He could have passed for a member of the Fireflies, wearing that military-inspired color scheme. The Queen of the Fireflies. Naruto picked up the locket from the edge of the desk and looked at it, swaying back and forth slightly in the wind. It had the terrorist symbol engraved into the metal, an everlasting symbol that would never be erased. Naruto wouldn't let anyone forget it, much less himself. His eyes darkened for a brief moment before he hung the locket around his neck, hiding it beneath his shirt, feeling the cold metal pressed against his chest, making him feel the locket with every step he took, with every advance he made. Marlene. He took his pistol from the holster on the chair and hung it on the right side of his waist, with the magazines on the left side. Maria had given him some extra magazines and a belt with pockets to store them on the left side. He looked much more like a soldier now than he did before he met Joel and Ellie, before traveling to Boston in search of the Firefly terrorists. Naruto, dressed and with his accessories, looked at himself in the cracked mirror in his room. It returned a slightly dark gaze, but much calmer than one might expect. A slightly pale face looked at him, suspicious, waiting for any gesture or movement. Waiting for the mask to finally crack. He ran his hand through his golden hair, brushing it back with a little water, watching the unruly strands move in the different directions he'd expected. His hair was untamable, wild, and there was no way to comb it, no way to fix it, no matter how hard he tried. It was an inheritance from his father. The knock on the door made Naruto turn away from the mirror and sink, aware of how long he'd been staring at that broken mirror. He took a deep breath, checked he had his gun, and walked, in 2 strides, directly toward the door. Joel was on the other side when he opened it, looking a little tired, with slight dark circles under his face. Naruto thought the man had aged, probably from the long cross-country trip and the stress of the fights they'd had against bandits and the infected. Seeing this, the boy wondered if it wouldn't be better if Tommy ended up taking Ellie to the Fireflies, if it wouldn't be better for himself if that happened. I don't want to kill him. You seem to be looking better, kid. The lips curved, drawing a smile on Joel's mouth, to which Naruto responded with one of his own, as he closed the door to the room, walking to the man's side. The restful sleep, without the stress of being chased, has given me back my energy, he admitted, digging his hands into his pockets, erasing the dark thoughts from his mind, saving them for when he had to destroy that bridge. Shall we go talk to Tommy? Yes. He has information about the Fireflies, about where Marlene might be, now that she's fled Boston with her tail between her legs, Joel said, his face and tone of voice serious. I tried to get Tommy to take Ellie with him, but I couldn't. I argued with her, and we made up. Naruto raised his right eyebrow, appearing surprised by this revelation. He had considered Tommy as a possible guide to the Fireflies, a change Naruto himself wanted for the group, a change he needed, but he hadn't expected Joel himself to propose this to his brother, causing him to clash with Ellie. To him, Joel and Ellie were very close, albeit in their own strange way. I'm sorry I wanted to leave you, Joel continued, giving a slightly forced, apologetic smile. The 3 of us will finish the trip together. Tommy will show us where Marlene might be, and we'll put all this behind us. Out of inertia, Naruto nodded at Joel's words, still surprised to learn that. Why didn't Joel keep it to himself? The man had always been reserved, hiding much of his feelings, his physical exhaustion. Why did he have to start making things more complicated for him now? Naruto cursed himself internally, but didn't say anything for a few minutes as they walked toward Maria's office, where she and Tommy, as well as Ellie, were waiting for them. Why do you complicate everything, God? The two finally arrived at Maria's office. The room was still as Naruto remembered it. A small table serving as a desk on the other side, under a series of small windows. Bookshelves were positioned on either side of the back wall, like firm guards for the desk, filled with old, slightly dusty books. Naruto believed some of those books would fall apart if he took them off their shelves with a simple touch of his hands. Maria and Tommy were already inside, on Maria's table, looking at a map spread out on it that represented the entire country, the entire United States. Some phrases, some lines, and some sticky notes were placed on some locations, indicated by thin pen lines leading to them. Were they resource locations? Areas where they could hunt? Where there were resources? Or maybe they were locations where the fireflies would be. Naruto took in every location, every well-placed sticky note or written note about a location on the map, and memorized them completely, storing them in his mind in case he ever needed them, in case he could help Maria and Tommy look for supplies for Jackson as payment for their hospitality, for the resources they put toward his care, as well as the medication they gave him, the same ones he pretended to be taking. Naruto. Joel. Maria was the first to notice them, looking up from the map and giving them a smile. Good morning. Good morning, Maria. You look better, Naruto. Good morning. Yes, I'm feeling much better after a few restorative hours of rest. Maria scrutinized Naruto's face, looking for any possible signs of lying. She did so for a few seconds, while both Naruto and Joel greeted Tommy, who had already noticed his brother and the boy's presence. She nodded in satisfaction, her lips curving into a calm smile. I'm glad to hear it. Ellie's with the horses, gathering supplies for your trip to the university in eastern Colorado, Tommy reported, tapping a finger on one of the marked areas on the immense map, pressing it down rather firmly. The university science building is where the fireflies are, where Marlene and her group have retreated. The university? Specifically the science building. Naruto leaned over to look at the area Tommy was pointing at, skeptical of what the man was telling him. I didn't see Marlene with any scientific looks or interest. I don't know Marlene's objectives, Tommy admitted, removing his hand from the map. She never shared that information with me. Despite being a firefly, I was never in her inner circle of trust. The queen has her favorites, Joel snorted, making Naruto smile. It's better than nothing. Joel, like Naruto, was upset by the terrorist group's location, but he didn't ask or question why they were there. However, it seemed that overthrowing the government was no longer his sole objective, his sole mission to rebuild society. He was doing or searching for something that involved science to put an end to their plans. She always had them, Tommy admitted dryly. Some of them have died, like Christopher, a red-haired man. He was in Marlene's inner circle before someone shot him in the head, supposedly from being bitten. If we're lucky, the circle will be destroyed, Naruto pointed out, unfazed. If Marlene doesn't have any lieutenants, it means we'll be dealing with her directly. That woman doesn't shy away from conversations, Joel said. The only conversation he'd had with Marlene was about taking care of Ellie, and it was Tess who had talked her through it, reaching the agreement. Although the weapons were of little value to him anymore. Ellie is important to her, so she'll talk to us directly, and you can give her the information you need, kid. Meeting the queen is an honor, Tommy continued. If you're from another cell, then she'll send you wherever you're needed for her work. Naruto brought his hand to the back of his neck, massaging it lightly. With each step he took, the ice became thinner and thinner, to the point where a single step could make him sink completely, drowning in his own web of lies. He didn't show those feelings, though, just shrugged, looking directly at Tommy. Honor or not, I have to give you the information. It's the only reason I've continued the trip. Although my interest is no longer in working with them, I suppose. I value my rebuilt peace of mind too much. Maria gave a small smile. Tommy did too, but his was broader than his wife's. Joel didn't say anything or make the slightest gesture at those words, although he looked more relaxed, his shoulders less tense. So, I guess we could treat you to Jackson when you're done. Naruto gave a wide smile. Absolutely, Maria. I'd be happy to stop by Jackson to help you with the community. You've done so much for me, and I plan to give back, even if you tell me no, and that I shouldn't. He anticipated Maria and Tommy's words, reading their body language. It's the least I can and will do for you, for Jackson. We've prepared 2 horses for you, Tommy said, shaking his head and changing the subject, though pleased with the boy's words. Since there are 3 of us, I think it's best. We also prepared more supplies, counting on you to use your bow, Naruto. Thanks, Tommy. Ellie did it, he replied, giving the boy a smile. She packed your backpack carefully, choosing what you would wear and what you would bring if you packed it yourself. Then I'll thank her. Naruto walked over and hugged Maria at the same time Joel squeezed his brother's hand. Afterward, Naruto took Tommy's hand and Joel hugged Maria. Tommy took advantage and pulled Naruto towards him to speak to him alone, to whisper in his ear. "Take care of my brother, Naruto. I'm glad you want to escape the fireflies, but Marlene is dangerous. Take care, all three of you, but keep an eye on my brother." Naruto nodded silently, though with other thoughts in his head, spinning like in a completely raging sea. He was planning to kill Joel, not protect him. Chapter 13. From Jackson, it took the trio a month to reach Colorado State University, a mostly uneventful journey. The three of them advanced on horseback, quietly but steadily, passing completely empty roads, silent forests, and a few abandoned towns, save for the ever-present presence of the infected. The rain was no longer a companion, disappearing as they rode steadily toward the university, but the sky remained a grayish-whitish hue, as if it might snow at any moment. Autumn had been wet and cold, slowly giving way to winter with each passing day. Naruto, Joel, and Ellie were forced, as they traveled to college, to increase the amount of clothing they carried. Tommy and Maria had given them a few jackets and sweaters, which protected them from the cold and wetness when they covered their bodies with the thick clothing. They also prevented them from getting sick from the cold or the constant changes in temperature, in addition to the storms that accompanied them the entire time. Despite the difficulties and detours they encountered on their journey to the university, the three finally arrived at Colorado State University after just over a month, riding 2 horses. Naruto and Ellie riding a beautiful reddish-coated mare, and Joel riding a sturdy dark-coated horse. Joel carried with him the supplies and provisions they had been provided in Jackson, piled in backpacks that sat on the back of the horse's saddle, as well as some supplies that both horses carried in their saddlebags in case they needed them. Naruto had never ridden a horse before the reins of that mare were placed in his hand. The animal had looked up at him with its large dark eyes, innocent, accepting him as its rider. Naruto had petted it, and the mare gladly accepted the touch, rubbing against his chest when he stopped. This is how Naruto mounted his first horse, being in charge of leading the animal, with Ellie riding right behind him, holding onto his waist. "It looks like a giant mirror." Joel's voice broke the silence that had fallen as they stopped in front of the university gate. He had looked at the main campus building, thinking it was an immense mirror before them. In fact, it did look like a mirror. The name, illegible, was on the sign above the gates, its letters missing or rusted with time. "It's very quiet here," Naruto said, patting the right side of the mare's neck, earning a soft whinny from the animal. "Too quiet for a place full of fireflies, much less with Marlene in the science building." The few plants they saw had grown wild, taking over the asphalt space, creating cracks in the ground, and eating into the foundations of buildings. There weren't many plants, but the ones that were there were wild, unless they were near a building. These seemed to have been trimmed, lightly tended, and maintained with a certain amount of love, indicating that someone had been at the university not too long ago, probably the fireflies or some other survivor of the outbreak. "I'll take a loop around campus." Joel dismounted his horse, Callus, and pushed the gate inward. A squeak accompanied the movement, as well as a slight creak from the rusty hinges, which didn't seem too happy with the sudden movement. "Keep each other in sight. Stay by Naruto's side, Ellie." "Understood." Joel looked at them for a few brief moments before nodding and walking inside, intending to turn on the generators and open the university gates. Ellie jumped off the rump and landed on her feet. She walked briskly and opened the gate, allowing Naruto to guide both animals into the fields. It was surprising how the rusty gate was still standing, although a little loose. The university buildings, at least the first few they saw, weren't in very good condition. The facade of the university was faded, the white parts no longer so white, stained with dirt or blood in some cases. Naruto looked toward one building, scanning the dusty windows, searching for any possible movement inside or around it, but his eyes picked up nothing, not even the slightest rustle of leaves or grass. "Be quiet," he said, circling the mare and taking the bow he'd attached to the saddle, along with the arrows. "I don't think Marlene and her people are still around. If I had to put my hand on the fire, I'd say it's been a while since anyone alive has been to the university." Tommy had pointed out the university as the place where Marlene and her group were, secretly working on some project involving scientists, so they talked. But how long had that been? Tommy hadn't seen Marlene or spoken to her in a while, and the fireflies were being hunted down, pressured by the army and Fedra until they were wiped out. They couldn't stay in one place for too long, as if they weren't terrorists. Naruto didn't think they were still there, much less that they would welcome them with open arms. Some kind of fight, perhaps the presence of soldiers, would have made them flee the place to continue their research elsewhere. Will the investigations be bearing fruit, anyway? Skeptical, Naruto didn't believe in the plans or research Marlene was doing, probably related to curing the infection. It didn't take a genius to figure out what Marlene was researching, given how quickly she was working. He still lacked his main asset, his prized commodity. Trying to find a cure is a waste of time. He placed his right hand on the handle of his weapon and scanned the surrounding buildings. Naruto scanned every window he saw, looking for movement, whether it was a firefly, an infected person, or something else lurking in the shadows. At the same time, he kept an eye on Ellie, who was fascinated by the campus map and university brochures. His parents went to college. His mother always showed him hidden photos of her and his father graduating from the University of Washington and seemed to have dedicated their lives to science, at least before the outbreak and the infection. The lab coats they used, Naruto left them abandoned in his old shelter, where he and his sister lived for a while before being welcomed into that man's community. David. She clenched her teeth slightly, making the line of her jaw sharpen. She'd sworn not to think about him or her past, but it was impossible, even after 7 years of leaving everything behind, to have survived on her own. It was a nightmare, one that was hidden. Will Joel be okay? Sure. Joel has survived for 20 years, and I don't think moving around here will be a problem for him, Naruto admitted, now looking at Ellie. She seemed worried, her brow furrowed slightly, causing small wrinkles to appear on her forehead. You should stop worrying so much, Ellie. We've been through a lot of things and we've come this far. Joel won't let anything get him down, believe me. Besides, at any sign of danger, I'd help him. It was after those words of encouragement that she allowed herself to smile, to twist her lips slightly to give a genuine smile, or as close to a genuine one as she could manage. She hadn't smiled since her sister's death 7 years ago, and now she was forcing a smile for Ellie, so she wouldn't worry about Joel or them. But of course, he hid his true feelings about Joel behind that mask. Naruto liked the man, admired him, but he also worried about him. He wasn't sure what he'd do with Ellie or him after arriving with Marlene. Would he just leave them with her? Would he just hand Ellie over outright after what they'd been through? Marlene was going to use Ellie as a guinea pig, Naruto knew that. Maybe he didn't know all the details, everything Marlene was doing, but if Ellie was immune to the infection, why would a terrorist group like the Fireflies want her? Naruto could see Marlene's plan, how she was plotting everything to try to save the world by inventing a cure. And, of course, that would end Ellie's life, her future, and her choices as a person. Well. Ellie wasn't convinced, at least not too convinced, by Naruto's words. She was still worried about Joel's well-being and the possible accidents he might have walking alone in that place. Perhaps there were bandits hiding somewhere. The memory of how she killed a man to save him made her frown even more. After several minutes, Joel finally emerged. The university gate seemed wide open and the man looked agitated, a little sweaty and panting, gun in hand. I didn't see any fireflies, but I did see a lot of infected, he announced, walking toward the two teenagers. We can continue toward the science building now. He took Callus's reins from Naruto, who nodded at the man. The three of them set off again across the university campus, following the map toward the science building. There was no point in checking any other buildings if the fireflies were there. It would be a waste of time and resources. Naruto didn't think anything good would come from investigating the other buildings, which could lead to them facing off against infected, wasting ammo, or getting injured trying to get past them. Banners from the terrorist group, as well as drawings of the Firefly from Marlene's group, were scattered throughout the university. Barricades placed behind strategically locked gates forced the trio to take long detours, but they finally arrived at the university's science building, which looked abandoned. Unlike the other buildings, this one was in better condition, much more well-maintained, but just as quiet as the rest, and there was no Firefly inside, at least at first glance. Naruto and Joel tied up both horses and climbed the small staircase to the door of the building, through which they passed silently, lighting their lanterns. Ellie rode between the two. Joel led the group and Naruto walked last, constantly looking back, making sure no one was following them. They found scattered bodies of what appeared to be fireflies, all lying on the ground, with stab or gunshot wounds. Some appeared to have been bitten, and one had its head severed from its body, likely due to a confrontation with an advanced stage infected person. There were no signs of anyone alive in the building, and that hope was dwindling with every step they took, with every room they searched for Marlene or their inner critic. Naruto took advantage and picked up some yellow documents and shone the flashlight on them, moving his eyes along the lines printed on the paper. They've been testing on monkeys, looking for a cure for the infection, he said loudly, so that Joel and Ellie could hear them. Marlene is looking for a cure to cure us of the infection, and she's been working secretly from here. It doesn't seem to have made much progress, Joel murmured, flipping through other folders. They had arrived at a large classroom, with a blackboard covered in scribbles half erased by time. The body of a scientist lay next to the professor's lectern, his neck ripped open. Though it seems the university was the Fireflies' permanent home for a bit too long. Eyes. Ellie held up another folder, waving it frantically to get both of their attention. Naruto stopped reading the reports, stuffing some papers into his backpack, and followed Joel. It looks like Marlene's at St. Mary's Hospital in Salt Lake, Utah. They've moved all of their surgeries there. Maybe it's the Firefly's permanent base, Joel murmured, taking the leaves. It's a huge oversight that they left this out in the open. The army might already be on its way, or has already gone there, to confront them. In any case, it's our last card. We'll have to go there, whether we like it or not. Joel tore off a map that the terrorist group had posted with notes and put it in his backpack, a little wrinkled and tight. Let's go then, he said, nodding slightly to Ellie and Naruto. The sooner we get out of here, the sooner we can get to the hospital. They walked out of the hall and continued down the hallway toward the stairs leading down to the entrance, the only ones without a barricade that made them turn around and walk through the entire building. They had had to navigate several stairs, as well as jammed doors, to reach that floor. At that moment, a cracking sound alerted them, but it was too late. A man threw himself at Joel, pushing him, and they both fell through the window with a crunch of broken glass, a scream, and the loud whinnying of horses. Joel. Ellie looked out the window and saw a jagged crowbar had pierced Joel, seriously wounding him. The man who attacked him was already getting to his feet, dragging his leg. When he pulled out a machete, an arrow pierced his throat. Pick up Joel. Naruto had knocked the second arrow and turned around, releasing the string and allowing the bullet to hit a second bandit in the knee, causing him to fall face first to the ground. I'll follow you. But. Go. A third bandit grabbed Naruto and shoved him against a door, forcing it open, and they both tumbled into the room. The bow flew out of the boy's hands, hurtling several feet away. Boy. It's been a long time. Naruto threw his body back, dodging the axe. He stumbled, hit the desk, and jumped, hearing the two-handed axe split the wood. The bandit ripped the axe open, sending splinters flying, and looked at Naruto mockingly, with some satisfaction. Their gray and blue eyes met for a few seconds. 7 years, the man said, and I still remember those disgusting, intense blue eyes. David will be pleased to see your head. Chapter 14. Blood trickled down the right side of his face, from the cut on his right eyebrow. He was forced to slightly close his eye, pressing his eyelid tightly to keep out any blood. This limited his vision to one side and forced him to protect his right side more than his left, which was his only weak point at that moment, his vulnerability. He held the military knife in reverse, tipped down, the fingers of his left hand tightly gripping the handle. He noticed how the leather yielded with some ease, molding itself to his fingers with ease. The knife felt like an extension of his arm. Every movement was fluid and precise, like those of an expert. Naruto squared his shoulders, cornered against the desk. More bandits had entered the room, covering his only exit. Behind him, a brick wall prevented him from escaping unless he planted an explosive charge or fired an explosive arrow. Both of these arrows were attached to the mare's saddle at the entrance to the building, far enough away that he wished he had them with him, attached to his backpack. Using the edge of his right hand, he wiped the blood from his face, allowing him to open his eye a little, barely forming a slit, feeling the skin pulling. He couldn't force it, or the wound would widen, and blood would run like a river down his face, leaving him completely blind. These guys are David's. David had been a middle-aged man who had taken him and his sister in after the death of their mother, the disappearance of their father, and the complete collapse of the community they'd lived in for as long as Naruto could remember. He had always shown himself to be a kind man, willing to help, guide, and train them so they would be able to survive in that world. And they believed him. They believed in the false kindness David showed them, while hiding his darkest motives behind the kind mask he constantly displayed, the same mask that bore that almost fatherly smile, in an attempt to be their paternal figure and guide in that situation. It was Naruto's mistake not to judge the man well, not to see through the smile and the mask that, for a year, kept them completely deceived, in complete ignorance of what their group was doing, of what David wanted from them, of what he wanted from his sister. Seeing Garrick, one of David's most loyal men, in that place, made Naruto's anger rise, and he clutched the knife like it was a burning nail, the last fulcrum he had to keep himself sane. He couldn't tell if Ellie had jumped out the window, escaping the place with Joel. He couldn't see if they were okay, or if they were taken by those men and brought to David, which would be the end of both of them. Naruto tried to reach for the pistol grip, but one of Garrick's companions lunged at him, causing him to step aside. Out of inertia, he swung the knife, impaling the man's right hand, which was holding a bat surrounded by barbed wire. He let out a nearly heart-rending scream and dropped the weapon, which Naruto caught. He swung the bat, and the spikes ripped through his face, destroying the man's nose at the same time, throwing him backward onto his back, his face a bloody mess. He swung the weapon lightly, splattering drops of blood onto the filthy floor. Naruto stood there, not taking a step forward, not advancing toward the group of men who had surrounded Garrick. Garrick looked at him, still mockingly, holding the fire axe firmly in both hands. Naruto could see the blade covered in dried blood, with what looked like small pieces of skin clinging to the blade. He inhaled fully, causing his shoulders to rise, his chest to swell slightly. Naruto exhaled a huge breath, expelling it forcefully, keeping his eyes fixed only on Garrick, on the man who had held him down, while his sister was brutally injured. He gripped the knife and bat tighter, raising his face, looking up as if he were an aristocrat, someone with power who looked down on the common people. He even allowed himself to snort. Two more men moved toward him, encouraged by what they saw or felt was a mockery. Naruto moved at the same time, swinging the bat at the first bandit's legs, knocking him down. Ducking down to swing at the man's legs, saved him from the machete's slash, and gave him the opportunity to slam his knife into the second man's instep as he brought the bat down and smashed the first man's face. The machete-wielding man screamed, furious and in pain. He swung the rusty blade toward his target, but Naruto parried the blow with his knife, causing the man to flinch, stomping hard with his injured foot. Naruto seized that moment, swinging the bat and slamming it into the bandit's left ribs, knocking him back against the table, slicing through his clothing and skin, and crushing his ribs with a blow directed toward that area. He gripped the bat and knife firmly. He stood slowly, eyes fixed on Garrick, urging him to come for him. He wanted him to lunge at him. He wanted, madly, for Garrick to move, to attack him again, to try to cut him with that fireman's axe he'd used to injure other people. The provocation didn't go unnoticed by Garrick, who smiled wolfishly, like a predator. Standing 6 feet 10 tall, with a broad back and a strong arm, Garrick pushed aside his men and trudged toward the boy, dragging his axe along, causing a squeaky hissing sound straight out of a horror movie. However, Garrick saw no fear in the blue eyes staring back at him, much less indecision. They were there, staring at him with a cold, almost icy fire, like two daggers aimed only at him, looking at no one else. At that instant, the big man realized that Naruto's right eye was already completely open, aside from the blood and the wound on his eyebrow. This brought a wider, predatory grin to his lips, pleased at being able to destroy the boy in his full, unimpaired physical state. He wanted to tear him apart while kicking constantly. He took the axe, raised it, and swung it in a powerful, horizontal slash that would split a person in two with a single blow if it hit them. Naruto rolled off the table, landing on the other side, just avoiding being split in two. But the axe didn't stop. Instead, it reversed direction, bringing the table down completely vertically, and Garrick split it in two with a brutal, almost ear-piercing crunch, with more splinters floating through the air, between the two of them like a curtain. To smash that table, the strength Garrick had deployed must have been almost superhuman, worthy of a small giant. Perhaps the man's size, or his muscles, were to blame for that tremendous strength. Naruto didn't know if that was the case, but he didn't give it much thought either. For the second time, he reached for his pistol, but Garrick attacked him again, this time with greater speed. His knife flew out, and the bat split in two, splintering into his left forearm, causing him to press his lips together as they sank into his skin, tearing at him. Garrick raised his axe again and attacked, stomping down. The blade came down hard and fast, straight for Naruto's right shoulder. The boy jumped to the left, and the axe hit the ground, bouncing off and causing the man to stumble. He capitalized on this. Naruto lunged, pushing off with his left foot, and shoulder bumped into Garrick, pushing him back a couple of steps. He moved his hand and Garrick moved the axe. Blood splattered onto the floor, slowly soaking into the fabric. A red stain gradually appeared, spreading across the fabric. The axe was raised. Naruto had pulled a butterfly knife from the back of his waist and plunged a blade into Garrick's right side, just as Garrick raised the axe over his head to strike him again. Ah! He dropped the knife into the body of the 2-meter-tall man and jumped back, dodging the subsequent slash that followed the groan of the bandit who, with bloodshot eyes, had launched with devastating force, seeking to cut Naruto. Naruto skidded backward, leaving 2 meters between himself and Garrick. The man had grabbed the knife and ruthlessly ripped it out, splattering more blood onto the ground, his lips clenched against the excruciating pain he felt through the wound. Arrogant little brat, Garrick heaved the axe with effort, under the gaze of his men, under Naruto's silent stare. I'm going to take your head, even if it's the last thing I do. Through sheer strength, Garrick held the axe tightly, ignoring the wound that was widening in his side from overexertion. Naruto wasn't alarmed by this, nor did he move from where he stood. He had no weapons at hand, having used the butterfly knife with that maneuver. He could have used his pistol, but Garrick would attack him. But would it be as fast as before? David will soon be with you, he declared, caressing the grip of his pistol. I can attest to that, Garrick. This is your sad fate, karma returning all the pain caused, all that destroyed trust. Monster. Bucking brat. The shot rang out around the room. The bandit's eyes widened. The bullet passed cleanly through Garrick's left chest, exiting the other side and leaving a 9mm hole at the impact point. The man fell to his knees, the dry sound of the axe hitting the ground accompanying him. Slowly, silence spread, swallowing up the sounds of fighting that had been present for the past few seconds. Naruto holstered his pistol and bent down, picking up the fire axe Garrick had been using. It was, at least by eye, a meter long, so it had to be used with two hands to deliver powerful slashes. If used one-handed, the blows would be unbalanced, not cutting perfectly through the target, be it a door or a person. He rocked her until she rested on his shoulder, looking up at the remaining bandits. They were all from David's community. They were all monsters who had destroyed other people's trust, crushing the lives of many survivors. 7 years ago, I escaped from all of you. David, Garrick, James, and all those guys who destroyed my sister's life, he murmured coldly. He lowered the axe, which hit the ground hard. As fate would have it, you've remained alive, with nothing to destroy you, to teach you what you deserve. And it doesn't seem fair to all those people you've murdered. I can accept that you survive, that you do what you do, but you did it to my sister. I'm selfish, I know, and God will send me to hell. I'm not a good, kind, or gentle guy. Selfish, a survivor, proud. You can define me however you want, but good and kind aren't on the list. I'll go to hell for ending your life, for staining my hands with your blood. I accepted. The axe swung, slashing at the first bandit who lunged at it. She pushed him, the force of the movement ripping open his belly and slamming him into a pile of crates. But first I'll send you all down there. Chapter 15. The freezing cold of winter replaced the chilly dampness of autumn, with chilly winds that turned years red and constant snowfall that created a thick layer of snow up to the knees, hampering movement and forcing people to take shelter. It was also a time when the infected entered a mild lethargy, frozen by the cold and snow, often completely buried beneath meters and meters of snow. At other times, it was common to see the blue limbs of the infected poking out, like flowers, from beneath the snow, completely frozen and inert. Living people and animals took shelter, covering themselves with thick layers of clothing, with fires and, if possible, hot water, although these were only available to humans. Animals, not being forced into such comforts and having grown up in hostile environments, quickly learned to adapt to adverse climates, seeking food and shelter in unexpected places. Many of them, anticipating climate changes, created food reserves in their shelters to get through the long winter, which seemed much harsher that year, with more intense snowfall. Since the outbreak and spread of the infection, the world had become much less polluted, more controlled by nature rather than humans. Technological advances were forgotten. Vehicle use was completely restricted to a select few, those lucky enough to have fuel and a working car. Pollution had plummeted, with the closure of large corporations and the decline of cities. Communities like Jackson were generally located in areas with water and some form of renewable energy, such as wind or hydropower, so nature itself was not used to sustain the settlement. It's not that there were many settlements. Generally, groups of survivors were nomadic, moving from one place to another in order to obtain supplies, to stay alive until after winter and the snowfall, which forced survivors to act in different ways to obtain food. Fishing, hunting, or gathering fruit became complicated in winter, and if one was outside a quarantine zone, rations were beyond anyone's reach. Despite all that adversity, wrapped in a thick cloak, his face covered with his hood and his hands covered with thick gloves, Naruto walked step by step, moving forward, pulling on the leash he held that connected him to the bridle of his mare. He had named her Beatrice, in memory of an old woman who fed him and cared for him when his mother was ill. He also named her that because of her reddish hue. Beatrice, a 60-year-old woman, still had her reddish hair, the same shade as the animal's coat and with the same intensity, perhaps even more than one would expect at her age. The bow hung from the saddle, as did the quiver of arrows. A deer hung from Beatrice's haunches, tied with thick ropes the boy had picked up at a supply store and used before. The Glock was clipped to the right side of his waistband. He had tucked his military knife, completely clean and sharp, into his left boot, while the butterfly knife was hidden in the back of his waistband. With the clothes he was wearing, reaching the small knife was complicated, difficult. Naruto already knew how to fight, how to wrestle, and dense clothing, while it might protect him, was a problem for mobility. And that was the first thing he would consider. Improving his speed, his agility, and the clothes would be plenty. The face, which was usually left visible, was now covered with a thick black cloth face mask, protecting the lower part of his face up to the middle of his nose, leaving only his blue eyes visible. Combining the mask, the hood and the unusually long hair, plus only his intense blue eyes being visible, Naruto gave the impression of being a predator, a hunter stalking his prey, and probably preparing to look for the next prey. And, in a way, that's how it was. Naruto had been separated from Ellie and Joel at the university because of Garrick's group. That had left him with few options on paper, and all of them required him to be a hunter, tracking down the areas Ellie would have taken Joel to in his current condition, which wasn't too good and would likely require medication to prevent infection, fever, and other symptoms caused by the same injury. Knowing this, he had searched every inch of the university, taking every bottle of medication possible, as well as canned goods that would help them get through part of the winter. He had done this thinking they would be easy to find, not expecting the snowfall to start early that year, much less that it would be so intense and abundant. The footprints, the trail, everything disappeared with the first snowfall, making everything even more complicated. He wasn't a wolf or an animal with a developed sense of smell, capable of following the trails of living people by scent alone, although even the scent would have been lost in the dampness of the freshly fallen snow. But for Naruto, that only made his job a little more difficult. He hoped Ellie had taken Joel far away from the university, many miles away, and hadn't worried about him. Even if they continued the trip, Naruto knew where he had to go. He had stayed close to the university out of pure logic. Joel was seriously injured, barely able to move or return to Jackson, and the university itself was a compromised place, with the bandits' eyes on the site. It was an area surrounded by wolves. The crunching of the snow stopped when the boy did, allowing himself to lift his hood slightly to observe the thick wooden door before him, waiting to be pushed open. He led Beatrice to the stable at the side of the building and began untying the saddle, the buckskin, and the bridle, allowing the mare to walk freely, unencumbered by all the objects. Naruto placed a chair over the fence and picked up the deer, feeling the weight of the animal weighing down his arms. With a loud bang, he dropped it onto the wooden table, which creaked slightly and the legs rocked slightly, scattering some sawdust onto the dirt and straw floor it stood on. Raz sighed heavily, feeling the cold breath leaving his mouth. Surviving in an apocalyptic world didn't offer the comforts of 20 years ago. There were no supermarkets, farms to supply you with meat, no people to sell you eggs, fish, or milk. Instead, everything was based on ration cards, which provided the basics for one person for a week at most, and were payment for work performed in the quarantine zones. People living outside the quarantine zones had to hunt, surviving without even minimal comfort. And only those willing to get their hands dirty were able to stay alive in conditions like that. Naruto was lucky. He and his sister were groomed by their father, who was determined to teach them everything he knew, everything he had learned throughout his life and his military service. Naruto learned everything like a sponge, even better than Mito. He always excelled at surviving, at learning useful things that would keep him alive. Just like using a gun. He wrinkled his nose. He didn't like killing animals, even though it was a necessity. Winter didn't allow for planting or harvesting vegetables. He was stuck with anything he could put in his mouth. Old animals, sick ones that won't make it through the winter. Never hunt a young animal or a mother with her cub. His father always instilled in him, as if hammering the idea into him, like a nail, to only hunt animals that were ready to leave, respecting nature and the cycle of life itself. Naruto did this every time he hunted, seeking out animals that were ready to leave the world, those ready to depart. The fire crackled brightly, the flames dancing beneath the teenager's blue gaze. He had sat in the living room of the cabin, around the fire, staring at the enormous iron pot that was placed over the flames. He was trying to cook the meat, as well as the potatoes he had served with it and the small pieces of carrot he had thrown in, without looking. Naruto had grown accustomed to Ellie's company and Joel's taciturn face. Now, alone again, he felt that weight falling on his body like a drowsiness, a lethargy that lulled him slightly. Was it the winter cold? Or perhaps it was the loneliness that embraced him after months of company. Thoughts and Beatrice were his only company, and thoughts weren't too kind. In fact, Beatrice was the only kind company he had, the one he visited constantly and even slept with. My best friend is a mare. Naruto snorted, laughing dryly as he poured himself some of that improvised stew, which filled his nose with that characteristic smell of cooked meat, potatoes. It could have been a sad image. He dipped the wooden spoon into the small bowl he was holding and brought the meat and potatoes directly to his mouth. They were bland. They lacked salt, a lot of salt, as well as seasonings and a few other accompaniments to give it flavor. Mom cooked better. Naruto dipped the spoon in for the second time, tapping it against the bowl. Even though he didn't like the bland taste, he brought the food back to his mouth, feeling the heat run down his throat and warm his chest, making him sigh. Even Dad cooked better. He thought about his parents, as well as his sister. David had also been a constant reminder, a reminder that the world still had monsters who knew who he was, who were chasing him, who were constantly searching for him. But if David was looking for him, he would also look for Ellie and Joel. Ellie's face, with its green eyes, hadn't left his mind either, nor had his desire to protect her diminished. Would Joel still be thinking of handing her over, of giving her to Marlene? He wanted to think not, but Naruto wasn't sure, and he worried that the scientist's studies on Cordyceps would end with Ellie on a hospital gurney, dressed in a gown, a mere plaything to them. He wrapped his left hand around the locket, feeling the cold metal, noticing the drawing of the terrorist group with his fingertips. The girl's name was Natalie, Christopher's daughter, the man he killed before becoming infected. She was also another girl who ended up in the same hands Ellie was going to, with the same goal. I guess I'll have to wait for the snow to melt, at least a little, Naruto muttered, looking out the living room window. Otherwise, I won't be able to look for any sign, any trail that will lead me to them. Finding Ellie and Joel was complicated, especially if they were hiding from David and his men. On the other hand, finding the latter's men was much simpler. David had never been a man who thought ahead, although he was cautious. Having killed Garrick and the others at the university concealed his involvement in that incident, for which Naruto was grateful. I could go for him silently, like a snake crawling through that thick snow. Voices coming from outside made Naruto hide behind the wall, moving away from the window, although he kept his gaze on it. The group of 4 armed men walked together, with some difficulty. The snow reached almost to their knees, making it difficult for them to walk comfortably. They carried hunting rifles, and Naruto could see the handle of a machete on one of the men's belt, partially hidden by his jacket. I doubt they're all that. If they were, they wouldn't be here. Naruto's eyes narrowed, looking at the individual's weapons. It wasn't unusual for survivors to appear in other groups' areas, but Naruto highly doubted that was exactly the situation. There were 4 men, armed, whispering among themselves, and he hadn't seen a soul around that small farm in weeks, whether they were survivors or infected. "I'm going to look in that barn," said one of the men, separating himself from the group. "I'll see if there's any sign of the girl or the man." Naruto's eyes widened, and he struggled to hold back his hand. He'd been about to grab his Glock and shoot the 4 trackers through the window. They are David's men. The idea settled in his head and didn't disappear. Instead, it grew stronger, much more intense. What group would be looking for a girl and a man, if not David's? Naruto couldn't believe it was all a coincidence that they weren't looking for Ellie and Joel after all. He didn't believe in coincidences, much less that everything was a coincidence. The 3 remaining men walked toward the house, toward the door. Naruto heard the step creak as they stepped on it, with some force. He heard the dry laughter and the way they talked about the girl, about what David seemed to want to do to them. "Here's a deer. That means there's someone in the house. I smell like food, too. Well, let's take them for ourselves." Naruto guided his left hand, wrapping it around the rope that hung down the side of the gate. 3 of the 4 men were already on the porch, silently loading their weapons and preparing to disperse. The 4th man was walking toward them, dragging his weapon, a sly smile on his lips. He pulled the rope. With a metallic clatter, needles and blades rained down on the 3 men on the porch, piercing their limbs and faces, tearing their clothes, and forcing 2 of them to drop their weapons. The 3rd raised his weapon, but Naruto fired a shot through the window in the door, straight into his throat. "Please don't touch the weapons." He grabbed the doorknob and pulled it open. The 4th man had stopped with his foot on the step, staring at him with wide, surprised eyes. "If you make any kind of move, even a stupid feint, then I'll be forced to show you the devil before your time. Although, in this cold, it might be better for you. You, the 4th, put down the hunting rifle. Now." DCH. Following that imperative, the man reluctantly dropped the rifle. "I know you're looking for a man and a girl. I am too," he admitted, stepping onto the porch. The men stepped back, giving him space. "In fact, I know who you're working for, I know what you're capable of. Is David still a con man, a cunning man, and a vile monster? Who are you?" Naruto shot the man, straight in the face, in his right eye. He fell backward, a dark bloody socket adorning his face. "That's not the answer I want," he said. "Is David still that cunning, that sly, that vile monster?" Before they could respond, Naruto knocked down the 4th man, the one with his foot on the step, shooting him straight in the chest. This, of course, made the last of the bandits jump. Yes. We're looking for a girl and a man. They killed friends of ours, members of our community at the university. They hacked them to pieces with an axe." "With an axe?" "A fireman's axe, which was stuck in the last one, in his head." "How do you?" "I killed your friends." Naruto walked forward, forcing the man to leave the porch. "I killed all your friends at university, and all those who came after." He placed the barrel of the gun against the man's chest. "So, knowing who and what I am, will you answer my questions?" Chapter 16. The Silver Lake Resort, with its wooden houses, had become a small, snow-covered area, battered by winter storms, and occupied primarily by a secluded group of survivors. This group had slowly dwindled, plagued by scarce resources and clashes with other survivors of the outbreak, forcing them to take drastic measures in order to survive. These measures made the group members reclusive, cautious, devious, and distrustful, as well as persuasive. They used this persuasive streak, concentrated in words, to convince others to join them, to make the group much stronger than it was, to survive. At least, that was the appearance. Need and lack of resources, coupled with immense desperation in certain situations, turned human beings into despicable beings, something that almost shouldn't exist. Minds fractured, and madness seeped in, turning certain questionable and unethical behaviors into the only thing of value and importance, the only path they needed and found truly sane, even if it wasn't in the eyes of others. The group of survivors at the resort became a real group of survivors, filled with madness and doing whatever was necessary to continue surviving, even if it meant deceiving other survivors to get everything from them, everything they could use to stock up, to continue another week in that world. Ellie had discovered what the group was hiding and what they wanted from her, what they would do to convince her, to use her as another tool for them. That was what David, the group's leader, had told her, showing it to her when he had her held behind bars. He had told her what they did to survive, always turning their backs on him, cutting meat with a knife. Ever since she met him when they hunted the deer and survived some infected, the girl had had a strange feeling about David and his companion, which became a reality. They were members of the group of attackers who ambushed them at the university, the same group that injured Joel and, presumably, killed Naruto. They hadn't heard from the boy for weeks, and Ellie had to take care of Joel because of his wound, being forced to hunt, obtain supplies and medicine to get through the winter, and prevent Joel's wound from getting infected. This had exposed her to David and his partner, whom she'd encountered while hunting. David had tried to persuade her to give them the animal, but she'd resisted by pointing her rifle at them. She couldn't allow them to take the animal and get nothing in return. As fate would have it, Ellie discovered they had the medicine Joel needed and put the animal up for trade. Of course, she realized David wasn't very happy, although he hid it much better than his partner, but they reached an agreement and she got the medicine and they got the animal. But he made a mistake. David's men followed her, tracking her to the cabin complex where she and Joel were hiding. This forced Ellie to lead the men away from Joel to protect him. It didn't go too well, though, and she ended up in a cell, watching David's back and hearing his words when he woke up, feeling his stale breath and his delicate touch. For some reason, David wanted her for himself, and for some other reason, he had kept his companions from attacking her. According to David, there was still hope for her to see things his way, for her to join him and his group to live on. He had even given her food she didn't even touch, pushing it toward the bars with her foot, disgusted by the smell. Seeing David's activities, what he did as if it were something normal, woke her up, building her chance to escape. And she clung to it as if it were a burning nail that had stuck to her hands due to the heat. Or as if it were the last drop of water in a barren and inhospitable desert. She escaped from her cell. She ran through the starry streets between the resort's houses and hid in what appeared to be a huge tavern or bar, behind the counter, crouching so that no one could see or hear her, for she even held her breath. Time stood still for Ellie, holding her breath, hidden behind the bar, crouched, with only the knife that always accompanied her as her only weapon, her only object to defend herself from those who sought her, from those who wanted to harm her. She doubted David would try to convince her now. He wasn't a man who gave 3 chances, who constantly pursued something. David loved her, but Ellie knew she had pressured him with that abrupt escape, hiding from his intense gaze and his rancid breath. Maybe she wasn't sure whether David would seek her out or break up with her, whether he would give her another chance. What she was sure of was that it would be David who would walk through the tavern door, whistling, walking slowly as if he owned the place, as if he already knew where she was, and that she couldn't hide from him, that she couldn't, even if she tried. The dark thoughts came true, and Ellie heard David's boot hit the first wooden plank of the small 3-step staircase that led to the entrance of the tavern. She heard him hiss and scrape the tables he passed with his knife, one larger than Ellie's, one capable of slicing into pieces, and one that would undoubtedly slicing into pieces, into animals. David's footsteps stopped in the middle of the tavern, and a loud thud accompanied the silence of his footsteps, coming from the heavy slash he swung against the table. The knife's blade shattered the wood, creating a fissure through which the edge sank, sending small splinters flying from the movement. David had strength in his dominant arm, something he seemed proud of. Ellie, on the other hand, didn't think she felt proud that her enemy, her kidnapper, could break a wooden table with one blow of his butcher knife. This made her even more frightened, as she huddled together and quietly hid to avoid being seen by the man. But David hadn't moved an inch since he'd walked in. He scanned the empty tables and seats. The kitchen on the other side of the bar. The aisles formed by the arrangement of tables and dusty sofas. He stood there for the next few minutes, as if listening, as if he needed to find the source of some sound he'd picked up, or see if the ghostly movements he'd seen out of the corner of his eye were real. Calmly, David wrapped his fingers around the knife's handle and yanked it out from where it had been stuck, causing a loud crunch to be the only sound heard in the room. "You should stop hiding, lamb," he said, resuming his pacing. He walked very slowly, step by step, looking behind the sofas and under the tables very cautiously. "You can't hide forever. Don't even try. I can smell you." David's voice was much thicker, and Ellie shuddered, gripping the knife tighter now. She closed her eyes, squeezing them shut, and wished David would disappear, that the echoing footsteps and his voice were just a nightmare she'd wake up from, back in the cabin with Joel and Naruto. She missed the teenager, despite her first impressions of him. Naruto was reserved, a liar, and hid things very well, although the gleam in his eyes, which changed depending on what he said, had told her hundreds of times that Naruto was lying to her, though she didn't know about what. He seemed like an honest, kind, and self-sacrificing boy. He did everything he could to reach them in Pittsburgh. He cared for them at university, as well as for Maria and the others in Jackson. He wasn't a cruel boy like David was, and he seemed to have some ethics, like a normal human being. It was too huge a contrast between David and Naruto. "Stop hiding, lamb." Ellie shuddered but tried to calm her mind to suppress the memories. She gripped the knife tightly. She had saved Joel from that hunter in Pittsburgh. This was the same, wasn't it? She would only have to drive the knife deep, wound him in a vital area, and it would all be over, for her and for any future victims in that community. The sound of gunfire silenced David's voice for a few seconds before he laughed dryly, somewhat mockingly. Ellie slowly crept behind the bar. She crouched, her belly hitting her knees. It was the only way she could think of to attack David from behind, to catch him by surprise. And he did. Taking advantage of a moment of silence, broken only by another wave of gunfire, Ellie leaped at David and tried to plunge the knife directly into the man's throat. But he grabbed her arm. David's hand caught the movement of her arm and threw her back against the table. She felt her back hit the board, the air leaving her lungs, leaving her breathless for a few seconds, long enough for David to kick the knife from her hand and catch her neck with iron, dirty fingers, squeezing her throat and forcing her to gasp, trying to find some oxygen. It didn't take long for her eyes to become misty, for tears to trickle down the edges and wet her cheeks. She kicked, but David hit her with a hard slap that heated her cheek, making it throb with pain. Her right ear was ringing, and the stinging didn't take long to make her press her lips together. The metallic taste was already filling her mouth, but she couldn't spit it out. "Stop resisting, Ellie," David murmured, putting his mouth close to the girl's ear. Ellie tried to kick a second time, and another slap, this time on the opposite cheek, made her fall to the ground with a thud. "Stop playing around." Ellie used her arms to drag herself across the dirty wooden floor, feeling her jacket snag on loose nails and splinters. Her hands ached, especially the fingertips. Every inch she dragged, she felt more and more splinters digging into her skin. "Stop playing. Let me go." David grabbed her by the jacket and lifted her up, throwing her against another table. Ellie gritted her teeth, but turned around, throwing a furious punch at the man's face. "Serious mistake. That's not how you hit a man, lamb." David grabbed her again, this time by the hair, and shoved Ellie's face against the table. "You've sprained your wrist, you might even have broken a finger," he pointed out, looking at the teenager's slightly reddened hand. "I'm done playing games, you know. I'm done being nice, of letting you be a black sheep in the flock. I'll have to." Neither of them reacted. Ellie was being held prisoner by David, feeling his breath again in her ear. David had been busy pressing Ellie down against the table, holding her down, and noticed nothing amiss until a hand, as iron as the hardest iron, grabbed him by the back of his jacket, throwing him savagely against a group of stacked crates. "Don't touch her again, you bastard." Ellie's eyes, previously filled with tears of pain, could now be interpreted as tears of joy. She even allowed herself to breathe, crawling off the table and standing behind Naruto's tall body. David sat up and, for the first time, looked at the blue-eyed teenager. He blinked, confused, before breaking into a jaw-dropping laugh. It was a hysterical laugh, as if he'd just heard the best joke of his life or seen something extremely funny with his own eyes. And no, can't be. Breathing heavily, he controlled his laughter, but an amused smile remained on his lips. "Little Naru-chan is here, all grown up, no less," with a predatory gaze. "Are you ready for another lesson?" Silence was the only response. Naruto looked over his shoulder, his gaze warm, at Ellie. "Are you okay, Reed?" He hadn't expected an answer, not after being under the care of David and his men. He'd been surprised to see her alive, with her mind much more sane than her sister's. He thought of Mito, of how David had transformed her and used her as his personal plaything, like a lifeless doll, a shell. "Yeah." The whispered monosyllable. A trembling voice. Eyes clouded with a veil of tears. Naruto took a deep breath and looked directly at David, into his dark eyes, and his smug, mocking smile, filled with the malice his shattered mind imagined. "Are you going to try to redeem yourself, brat?" The arm moved swiftly, the butcher knife completely steady, pointing toward the stomach. The iron chains wrapped around David's arm firmly and, with a wrench, forced the arm to stretch further, completely, to the point of almost breaking. Naruto pulled down hard, and the crunching sound of bones breaking into thousands of fragments filled David's ears. "Agrh. Ellie." Naruto's blue eyes were calm, relaxed. "Come outside, okay?" He released the chains, and David fell to the ground, his knees clutching his broken limb, lifeless. Naruto stood before the man, his back to him, looking only at the girl. "Are you coming back?" "I'm not going to lose you, Reed." Green and Blue looked at each other. Slowly, Ellie stood up and Naruto passed her his own backpack, pushing it against her chest, but gently. "Hahaha. So brotherly. What you couldn't do for your cough." Blood trickled from the shattered nose. David lowered his head, feeling like his nose was crushed, completely destroyed. He felt the warmth of blood on his upper lip, soaking his scruffy beard. Silence. Naruto turned around, standing in front of David. The man was kneeling, his head bowed, blood dripping from his chin. He looked at him like that, downed, hurt, like a wounded dog. "You're not getting out of here," Naruto said, crouching down in front of David. "I'm going to make sure of that, believe me." "You neither." "The others." "All dead, David. None of your companions are breathing right now." The voice turned so cold that steam began to come out of Naruto's mouth and made David shudder despite the pain, and he even raised his face. Serious mistake. Naruto's right hand crushed his nose for the second time, causing him to fall onto his back, now screaming in pain. The skin had wrinkled and cut, and the blood had become more abundant, so much so that the man gurgled, coughing shortly after. "You used my older sister however you wanted, not stopping even when she begged you to." Naruto took the iron chain and began to twist it around his right hand. "Psychologically and physically, you destroyed her to such an extent that she chose to become infected." Another twist. He closed his hand, feeling the cold metal against his flesh. "You used me as a bargaining chip so my sister wouldn't turn on you, so she would be your plaything." Another twist. He squeezed tightly, leaving marks on her pale skin. "I have no good memories of my 10th birthday, beyond the marks on my skin, on my back." "Stop crying, kid. Thanks to me, you became a man. You were able to survive this world." Blood splattered his shirt as he punched him, directly in the face, with his fist wrapped in the iron chain. Naruto didn't flinch or flinch, and punched a second, a third, and a fourth time, shattering David's already damaged face. "You turned me into a monster, David," he hissed, feeling the blood trickle down his fist. His knuckles were raw. Chunks of flesh clung to the iron of the chains, and blood dripped from each iron link. "You made me what I hate most. A merciless monster, a devouring husk of monsters like you." Memories, freed from their dam, flooded back with force. Tears soon began to flow, dripping from thin cheeks to the dusty ground. Naruto kept both hands closed, but only his right hand was encircled by a dark, almost black chain, now stained with blood. "Are you going to cry? Just like you." He didn't even think. His arm moved on its own, faster, stronger, and the chained fist ended up shattering David's teeth, sending him slamming into a table with such force that the man's back buckled under the impact, and a loud crunch followed the sound. "Ah. You won't be able to move. That was your spine breaking on the edge of the table." Naruto walked slowly. David's wide eyes reflected fear, pure terror. "I told you, when I was a child, that I would hunt you down, that I would make you pay for everything. You laughed at me, mocking my skinny, dwarfish appearance. Now, for my sister, for Ellie, I'm going to bury you in the deepest darkness." Chapter 17. The bad memories had vanished in the light of dawn the next day. The storm had subsided, leaving a thick layer of snow covering the ground like a second skin, reaching up to an adult's knees. If a child walked through the snow, they would likely sink under their light weight, disappearing from view or only showing their head above it, their entire body trapped in the snow. The Silver Lake Resort had been completely reduced to ash. Thick columns of black smoke rose into the clear sky from the buildings, which had been completely engulfed by the flames. Every single house, shop, and decorative object had been burned by the fire that started in the resort's bar and restaurant. It had spread, like an immense tide of fire and smoke, until it began to burn other wooden buildings. Shortly after, the entire resort had begun to burn, turning into a massive torch that would likely have been visible from several hundred meters away, even despite the storm that had been raging until a few minutes before. Now, only ashes, embers, and smoke were all that remained of the resort, along with blackened bodies, half hidden by the burned debris, buried under hundreds of pieces of charred wood. Naruto, Joel, and Ellie hadn't just stood by and watched as the complex collapsed, burying the living members of the survivor community who'd been living there. When Naruto emerged from the bar, the fire beginning to grow behind him, he found Joel hugging Ellie. It wasn't long before they fled the area, leaving all of David's companions lying in the snow, injured or dead. At no point did they look back. Joel led the way, firing at anyone who emerged from any of the buildings flanking them. Ellie had positioned herself between the two, head down, feeling Naruto's hand pushing her down. And the blonde teenager positioned himself behind, also firing to the right and left. The trio had finally hidden in a small cabin several miles from the resort, leaving all the survivors of the confrontation with David's community behind. Naruto wasn't going to miss them, and even though he respected human life and only wanted to survive, eliminating David, James, and the other members of their group had been satisfying, even if it didn't fill the void he'd been carrying for 7 years. David and his community had become a scar, a mark on his past that marked the before and after in a surprisingly clear way, almost as if day had been drastically succeeded by night, without the transition to afternoon, and now everything was dark, with the stars and the moon as the only small lights that seemed to flicker, being the good memories of before the darkness, of the intrusive thoughts. Naruto admitted, after David's death at his hands, that he had become what killed his sister. A monster with little compassion, his survival instinct multiplied by 1,000. He had transformed into a beast, someone willing to kill, so that the people important to him survived. He had proven it in Pittsburgh, where he killed a handful of hunters and infected without thinking about whether they would have families. He had proven it by killing those bandits at the dam, while Maria, Tommy, and a handful of members of his community saw him. Now, after the fight at the university and on the ranch, he made it clear with the fight with David that everything he once was, that kind boy, had blurred and disappeared like water through his fingers. Surviving in that world meant doing things that in a normal situation no one would do, no one would even think about. David and his companions did just that, seeking food even from unethical sources, immoral for humans. Naruto knew he was no different from David. He crossed a line, letting himself fall directly into the jaws of the beast, which swallowed him in one bite and made him disappear completely, surrounding him with darkness, pain, and sadness. She cried in front of David, letting out the last feelings she had. "Hey, kid," Joel's voice brought him out of his thoughts, making him look up. "You've been thinking about it since we escaped from that place. Did you know those guys?" After leaving the burning resort in ash, they found that abandoned cabin, with firewood and canned food in a small storage area in the kitchen, as well as thick blankets that looked like they had come from enormous grizzly bears. It wasn't a very large cabin, just over 40 square meters, with a small bed attached to the far right of the cabin, a square table in the center of the living room, and a gas stove on the left side. The fire pit was embedded in the wall, in the center between the bed and the stove, and a medium-sized pile of firewood was just to the left of the fire pit, next to the stove. It seemed to have been a shelter for some survivors or some cabin belonging to a wealthy person, because it was filled with food, medicine, and a hunting rifle hidden under the bed, in an old, splintered wooden trunk, with the initials FGC written on the lid in black ink, now half erased. They were lucky to have found that cabin as a refuge, and that it was abandoned. Although it was even luckier that it hadn't been looted. Perhaps the person or people living there had been using it until recently. Had they become infected? That was one possibility, as was having been killed by David or other bandits like them. "I knew them," the young man admitted, watching the flames dance in the bonfire, moving rhythmically from right to left, as if trying to hypnotize them. "I lived with them from the age of 9 to 10. Ellie was lying in bed, sleeping, exhausted from what had happened at the resort. Naruto and Joel were sitting in front of the fire, watching as the fire consumed the wood they had brought, crackling brightly. They didn't seem like good people. No, they weren't. Naruto kept his eyes fixed on the flames. He was sitting on the ground, his left leg bent, tucked under his right, which was bent at 90 degrees, allowing him to hug her. "David destroyed my sister, my last family after my parents died. He used her, toyed with her, to the point where she chose to become infected. She's still out there, I think, if someone hasn't killed her." Joel didn't respond to Naruto's story. He remained silent, his eyes watching the dancing flames, listening to Ellie's soft snores accompanied by the crackling of the fire, the only two sounds he could hear in there. Even though there was no storm outside, the man couldn't hear anything, not even the crunch of the snow under the added weight. For the first time, he could breathe a little easier. "David and his community shaped my life," Naruto continued, his voice cracking. "And they shaped Ellie's. That's what I know for sure, what's a fact in our history. The only thing that comforts me is knowing that David is dead, and that no one else will suffer for him, that no one else will be used like my sister or broken like me. I regret not having arrived in time for Ellie. She's grateful that you came, that you saved her. I could see it in her eyes when she ran out of the bar toward me. If you hadn't come, I don't know what might have happened or what she might have done. Killing David in that situation would have been very traumatic for her." "David was a living trauma," the teenager muttered. "Ellie was marked, like my sister and me. Maybe she isn't broken like me, or infected like me though, but she has been marked by David for the rest of her life. We can't see it now, but it's there. I can assure you of that as surely as my name is Naruto Uzumaki." Ellie's mind had been affected by her encounter with David, that much Naruto was completely clear about. No one who had encountered the man had ever been completely healed, whether physically or psychologically. David and his actions affected the minds of the people he played with, slowly destroying them until they were no longer themselves. He had seen it before, not just with his sister, and not just with people who disappeared. Many other girls and boys were destroyed, turned into walking husks of their former selves, with no life to live. The brave ones chose death or even becoming infected to stop feeling. Those who couldn't muster the will to flee ended up disappearing overnight. He was a monster erased from the world, one of many that existed now that the rules vanished, like the morning dew. It must have been hard living alone for 7 years. 8. I just turned 18 on October 10th. Joel's lips twisted slightly in a thin smile. Something as small as a birthday had vanished from many people's calendars. Others had marked the dates, seeing those days as the only days where they could indulge in a few luxuries, a small glimmer of light in their lives. Joel had left his birthday forgotten, tucked away in the deepest recesses of his past, from before the outbreak and the quarantine zones. It simply wasn't worth remembering. So, are you of legal age? Yes, if that has any validity in a shitty, broken world like this, Joel. Joel laughed dryly. Before the outbreak, being an adult gave you certain freedoms that a teenager couldn't enjoy. Now, with the world completely destroyed by the outbreak and the infected, in addition to the fall of governments, there were no rules separating people by age. Children had to survive, doing things they shouldn't have to do at their age or in normal situations. Before, when you were of legal age, depending on the country, you could drive, own your first gun, get married, or do hundreds of other things that you couldn't do as a minor or required your parents' signed permission. In the United States, you're legal age at 18, but some things you can do at 16 and others at 21. In other countries, the age for doing those things varies. So, I guess I can drive now. Haha, if we were in a normal world, yes. But I think you've driven before, haven't you? I had to escape a horde of infected, he admitted. I used an old police car to flee the city, dodging abandoned and dilapidated cars, as well as chunks of concrete, potholes, and hundreds of other defects. Surprisingly, I didn't die on my first drive. Naruto didn't want to add that it was shortly after escaping from David, when he could barely reach the car pedals, that he almost fell off a cliff due to his short stature. He should be thankful he'd had his growth spurt, growing enough to be able to drive or do things without asking for help from others. The trip is almost over, Naruto broke the silence again. With his right hand, unseen by Joel, he held the locket hanging around his neck. Once this is over, I think I'll go to Jackson with your brother and his wife. It's the best decision, Joel agreed. I think I'll go to Jackson, too, to live a normal life in a community, away from Fedra or the military. The quarantine zones aren't attractive and, slowly, they're starting to collapse. Naruto nodded, accepting that fact. Quarantine zones were slowly self-destructing. No one could maintain them, and they were a waste of resources unless the military or government in said zone were actually efficient. Even the Boston quarantine zone, which had survived those 20 years, was starting to fall apart, as the Firefly attack had shown. Living in communities like Jackson, I think it's the best. I hope to find some peace. Chapter 18. St. Mary's Hospital had become the Firefly's base of operations after they had occupied the east side of the University of Colorado. The hospital had been completely emptied, with no presence of infected or healthy people, and no trace of the military presence that had existed at other hospitals like St. Mary's, almost as if it had been completely empty, at the mercy of any living and non-living being who wanted to claim it for themselves. And for 10 years, Marlene ran the hospital as her center of operations, far from any quarantine zone or possible hordes of infected that would force them to abandon the hospital, as had happened with the university. To prevent this, Marlene cleaned the surroundings of the hospital and even burned the dead who lay deep within the building, in the sewers, and sealed off all access with iron bars so that no one could enter the hospital from underground. Inside the building, the Fireflies seized all the abandoned medical equipment, as well as generators that would keep the entire area powered. The noise from these devices would likely attract nearby infected, and Marlene immediately fixed this. Ordinary infected couldn't break through an iron fence. They didn't have the strength or the cunning to take it down. It was the fatties who had to be protected by the generators, and they were the first the Fireflies burned, using flamethrowers and shooting them down with assault rifles with armor-piercing bullets. Using each bullet precisely, the fatties were torn apart by continuous fire, both from live rounds and flamethrowers. The latter burned the infected's fungus-ridden skin to near char, causing their armor to become a liability, a weakness the rifle rounds exploited so well that by the time they were done, all the fatties had been eliminated, leaving not a single one alive. Marlene must have been worried about her men, about the mission ahead of them, about her goals as the leader of the group that would save the world, one way or another. The weapons obtained in Boston. The girl her friend had entrusted to her care to protect her, the one who was immune to the infection. With that, the Fireflies had what it took to become heroes, saviors of the world once again. Only this time, Marlene wasn't going to make a mistake. She would tie up all the loose ends. No more feelings, no more weaknesses like last time. Marlene had been worried about Ellie from the moment she left her with Joel and Tess, believing the teenager wouldn't end up returning to her to fulfill her objective. But circumstances had forced her to change her initial plans. Although she hadn't counted on the two smugglers, she couldn't have chosen better people to bring Ellie back to her. The strangest thing for her, when she saw Ellie and Joel again, near the hospital, was Tessa's absence and the presence of a teenager whom her men had to subdue by hitting him on the back of the head, causing him to faint. Was Tess dead? How long had she been dead? Marlene felt nothing for the woman's death. She also felt nothing when her men beat a teenager and Joel. The satisfaction of seeing Ellie in the arms of one of her subordinates, one of her fellow officers, was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that truly mattered to her at any given moment. A year. He had waited almost a year to be able to research Ellie Williams into a cure that would combat the infection until it was completely eradicated. But he knew it would be impossible to rebuild society. The world, after the outbreak, had changed radically, undoing any law, any civic code that had existed before the infection. Governments didn't matter, nor did soldiers. Any badge wouldn't do. The law of the mightiest was what prevailed now, as Marlene knew. She herself had used that law to become the leader of the Fireflies, though she also did it in such a way that her rivals completely disappeared. After all, none of them shared her goals. The moans shook the woman's thoughts away, her face turning into a mask of false complacency. Her eyes sparkled for a moment, but that glow disappeared completely when she watched them both wake up on their respective beds. Everything's okay, Joel. The man put his hand to the back of his neck and grunted, looking annoyed. He sat on the stretcher, massaging the bruised area, and remained seated, regaining consciousness. They had passed through tunnels, through the entire city teeming with infected people. He remembered that well as the blow he received from a man with the butt of his gun. Where are we? Naruto showed no weakness. His voice didn't waver even slightly when he asked, and his blue eyes scanned the room. They'd been taken to a small doctor's office, just large enough for 2 stretchers to be positioned side by side. A poster of the inside of the human body. Some pieces were missing and others were faded, the writing barely visible, but you could make out where it was pointing. Located to Joel's right was a wooden table with several dusty, abandoned vials. Some were faces, with small scratches running down to the bottom of the vials. Others were shattered, as if they had been bitten to tear off a piece. Small crystals, covered in dust, were scattered on the table, forming zigzag lines in the dust. Someone had played with them, perhaps pretending they were cars or license plates. At St. Mary's Hospital, Salt Lake City, Utah, Marlene replied, glancing at the boy for a few seconds. That glance caught the blonde's eye. Brown and blue eyes locked for a few seconds before Marlene broke off the gaze, turning her attention to Joel. We found you at the hospital gates. I'm sorry for what my men did, Joel. They mistook you for bandits, possibly soldiers. It doesn't look so bad, the man muttered, shaking his head. And Ellie? Is she okay? Neither of the adults could notice, but Naruto gripped the edge of the stretcher. His fingers turned into claws, gripping it until his skin turned whiter than it already was from the lack of sunlight. They've already taken her to the operating room for the examination. Marlene moved away from the tables, giving them both room to stand. They'll start soon. We'll wait for her, Joel continued, staring at Marlene. We'll take her when you're done with your tests. We plan to come back too. Marlene shook her head. Don't you understand, Joel? The fact that she's not going to just get up and walk out of the operating room, Naruto snapped, loosening his grip on the table. Just like they did before. With another girl. 2 fireflies grabbed Naruto by the shoulders and threw him against the wall. The taller one, the one who towered over the boy by a few inches, held his forearm under Naruto's chin, right against his neck, applying pressure from that spot to suffocate him. There's no need for us to fight, Marlene said. She shook her head slightly, sending a gesture to her men, and they separated from Naruto, but didn't completely let go. Ellie made her choice when she came here. She'll be the vaccine. Have you asked him? It's not necessary. You will be the daughter of Naruto. Joel raised his hand, stopping him. He sighed in resignation and sat down on the stretcher. I see. You're going to send us some force from the hospital, right? So we don't arrest you. That's exactly what I'll do, Joel. Without weapons, but with your lives completely intact. It's the least I can do for you, since you brought Ellie to us. However, if you wander around here again, my men will kill you. They're equipped, trained, and better than those in Boston. You can consider them our elite. One last glance. One last false gesture. Marlene left the room, leaving Joel and Naruto with their men, who would escort them out of the room, away from Ellie, and without the possibility of stopping her, of making the wrong choice. Loosely. The soldier stepped back after the push. Naruto took a step forward, and the man another, but Joel stopped him with another resigned and tired gesture. Slowly, the man's companion had grasped the grip of his pistol. We're going to take you outside, the tall one declared. So, let's go. Outside the room was a platoon of 8, and counting the 2 inside, that made a total of 10 soldiers who surrounded Joel and Naruto on all sides, weakly pushing them to start walking away from the room, towards the elevator door. Surrounded, Naruto shifted his eyes and examined them all. They carried M16 assault rifles with silencers so as not to attract the attention of the infected. Sig Sauer M18 pistols were tightly protected in their holsters, far to the right side of their bodies. Bulletproof vests covered their torsos, with various pockets, like those of ordinary military personnel. They didn't wear helmets, but the green pants and dark boots made them look too similar to soldiers or Fedra, which indicated that they had taken their equipment. Marlene hadn't lied when she told them they were equipped, armed to the teeth. There wasn't a single member of the Fireflies who wasn't armed. They even carried a military knife on their belt, right behind them, securely fastened by the cords, but not so tight that the soldier couldn't take it in his hand and draw it with one fluid motion. They were ready to fight in every way possible. Up close, they would use a knife. At medium range, they could use a rifle or a pistol. And from a distance, they would use rifles without complications. Marlene had prepared them to fight for a war. Would these soldiers have survived 7 years alone, on their own, learning everything about the modern world so they could grow? Naruto took a deep breath, inhaling as much as possible. It filled his chest with oxygen, making his nostrils fill to the brim. He exhaled through slightly parted lips, causing his shoulders to droop. We'll take them out. Come on. We don't have all day. Naruto was the first to move. Joel then hit a man with his backpack, knocking him down, and leaped over the counter. By the time he was out of cover, the boy had taken a knife and killed 2 of the 10 soldiers, taking a pistol and a rifle, which he used to take down 3 more, while Joel fired his revolver, dispatching the remaining soldiers. Gripping the grip, Naruto pointed the gun at Joel, straight at his face. Joel did the same, not flinching at the sight of the barrel pointed at him. I should kill you, Joel. For wanting to save Ellie. You brought her here. You wanted her dead. The man's eyes widened slightly in understanding. He blinked a couple of times, something that could have cost him his life had he not been standing right in front of Naruto. Then, he slowly lowered the gun, and the boy took the opportunity to place the barrel under his chin, causing Joel to sigh. You want him dead, Joel? I want to save her, kid. If I wanted her dead, I wouldn't have gotten knocked out or shot those guys to protect you. Naruto, I want Ellie. I want her like a daughter, Book. Did you expect me to be with that crazy Marlene? You're supposed to be the Firefly. The Sig Sauer M18 trembled slightly under Joel's chin. Seconds later, the cold sensation of the barrel disappeared and he was able to lower his head slightly, finally taking a deep breath. I was never a Firefly, Joel, he murmured, reaching under his shirt. The locket came to light, now open, revealing the photograph inside. She was one of the immunes Marlene used in her experiments to test her vaccines. She died without having the effect Marlene wanted. She was like Ellie. So? I'll prevent that. Another unnecessary death to save the dead world. And I'll take whoever I want with me. Joel and Naruto stared at each other directly, intensely. There was no resentment in the man's eyes. The cold resolve in the teenagers was all-consuming. The blue glowed cold, like the winter they had both endured months ago, before arriving at the hospital. Joel understood, with that exchange, that he couldn't stop Naruto, even if he wanted to. There was no one in the world who could stop him. Over there. The alarm began to sound throughout the hospital. A red light flooded the place, intense and macabre. Gunshots followed the screams, masking the echo of footsteps. Joel took cover, but Naruto raised the M16. He placed both hands on the weapon, holding it firmly. The butt rested on his right shoulder. His left hand was under the barrel, gripping it tightly. His right hand closed around the grip, one finger on the trigger. Teenagers and children, as well as inexperienced men, would have fired everything. A firm, fearless pull of the trigger would have spent the entire magazine without hesitation, leaving a dozen holes in the walls, the glass, and the stretchers scattered throughout the hallway. Few of the Fireflies would have been injured, much less killed. He moved the arrow, the small lever of the weapon. Let's see how trained they are, he whispered, dropping to his right knee. Burst fire. 3 consecutive bullets. 3 shots in a row. One of the soldiers fell, and the next had to cover himself, holding his right arm. Blood trickled down his limb, seeping through his jacket and dripping from the fingertips of his right hand. He had been wounded in his dominant arm. Naruto took a deep breath and shifted the rifle, firing another 3-shot burst. He aimed for the parts not covered by the vests. Arms, legs, necks, heads, or faces. Any part that wasn't covered, protected, was where he shot, where he aimed. Incapacitate or kill, it didn't matter to him. Ellie. Without a care, the boy pulled out the empty magazine and replaced it with a fresh one. A dozen bodies littered the hallway, staining it with blood that mingled with the dust on the pavement. The red light and the sound of the alarms persisted. Joel, he stood up, snatching several rifle clips from one of the Fireflies. I'll make my way to where Ellie is. You'll need to cover me. I'll keep an eye on the hallways, rooms, and any place where one of Marlene's soldiers might be hiding, but I need you to watch my back. Of course, Joel didn't hesitate in his answer. Billy's shotgun was already in his hands, securely gripped and loaded. "I've also taken your backpack, along with all the weapons you had in it. I'm also carrying the sword." Naruto just nodded but didn't respond. Firmly. He walked step by step down the hallway, dodging the dead soldiers, always with his rifle ready to be used so that the barrel would rise again and spit out another burst of 3 bullets. He hadn't learned that from David, nor from his father or his mother, and the arduous training to understand the behavior of a soldier wasn't something that anyone could easily acquire. Naruto knew that what he was doing, what he did in Jackson, was the fruit of his arduous life, of bleeding from his nails, from his fingers. Learning every step, every stimulus, thought, or action of a soldier. He knew every possible process a soldier's mind could think, and he did it much faster. He could counteract it, act ahead of it as if he were a programmed computer. He had a map in his mind with every move, like a chessboard. He just moved it, tipping it over, so that everything was ready for him to do it. The shots continued, and Naruto didn't tremble, didn't show fear, didn't even blink. He continued walking quickly, but steadily. Step by step, without breathing heavily. He looked around every corner, at every intersection, and kept walking, shooting at every soldier who appeared around a corner or who advanced toward them along the corridor, shooting them back. The bullet grazed his left cheek. Naruto didn't even stop to look at the wound. He felt the blood, warm, oozing from the cut on his face. But he didn't care and simply returned fire, knocking down another of Marlene's men, another firefly. Another victim of his well-aimed shot. "This way, Naruto." The boy stopped after passing a corridor on his right and stepped back after Joel's shout, raising his rifle and pointing it forward. "What's up, Joel?" "This way is the operating room." Naruto looked down the hallway. At the end of it, 2 wooden doors remained closed. Light was visible through the windows, illuminating the hallway slightly and contrasting with the sound and light of the hospital alarms. This might not be the operating room where Ellie was being kept, which would be a complete waste of time. Time they didn't have with them. They were acting against the clock, against time itself. One mistake, no matter how small, would end Ellie's life and theirs with no turning back. He looked back down the hallway in front of him and over his shoulder, behind Joel, behind him. No fireflies were running toward them or firing, disappearing completely from the area. If this was the operating room, why weren't there more guards, more soldiers? It was with that question in mind that Naruto looked at the men he had killed. They were all members of the Fireflies, all wearing bulletproof vests and well armed, but they lay dead near that hallway. "Fine," he agreed, resigned. "Go ahead, Joel." Joel nodded at the boy's request and ran ahead of him. Naruto walked backward, pointing toward the hallway and protecting Joel's back as he ran ahead of him. He walked slowly, careful not to fall on his own back, possibly injuring the back of his head. But he kept his eyes fixed on the entrance to that hallway, where Marlene's soldiers, or Marlene herself, if she had already found out what they had done, could burst in. And Naruto had no doubt that the Firefly Queen was aware of the confrontation between her men and those who had brought Ellie to him. But strength and desperation, Joel pushed both doors, causing them to crash into the walls, causing the windows to shatter. Naruto followed behind him and slung his assault rifle over his back. He took the pistol from his holster and pointed it at the only man in surgical attire in the room. Ellie had been placed on the stretcher, dressed only in a hospital gown. An oxygen mask covered her mouth, likely filling her lungs with anesthesia, sending her into dreamland. She looked like a sweet little girl, a red-haired angel. "I won't let them take her. She's our salvation." The surgeon stepped forward, pointing a scalpel at Naruto and Joel, who pointed their pistols at the man. The 2 nurses stood back, pressed against the table of instruments they planned to use in the operation. "Salvation?" the young man hissed, his lips tightening. "There is no salvation, you stupid idiot. You've already killed other girls." "You can't know that," the man growled. "If we stop trying to save the world, what will we become, boy?" "Step aside," Joel tried to walk toward Ellie, but the man took a step closer, pointing the scalpel at him. "Please. No. I'm not going to let you take her." The sound of a gunshot rang out, intense, sending a chill through the room. The surgeon's voice trailed off, followed by a few grunts of pain, and, choking on his blood, he fell to the floor with a thud, accompanied by the sound of the scalpel falling from his limp, lifeless hand. "I'm going to take Ellie, kid. Cover me." Naruto pointed the gun at the 2 nurses. They were crouching, trembling, staring at their colleague's corpse, blood oozing from where he'd been shot, forming a pool just below his back. They said and did nothing. They stood there in shock, letting Joel pick Ellie up and Naruto aim it at them without having to pull the trigger. "Let's go this way." Joel pushed open the door with his shoulder and ran out of the operating room. The echo of quick, heavy footsteps was getting louder, accompanied by voices. Naruto took one last look at the surgeon and followed Joel out the door, holstered his pistol, and picked up his assault rifle again. Running without looking back. They could hear them being chased. Being fired at. Bullets hitting the walls, the glass, or even the scattered stretchers. Naruto stopped a couple of times and, taking cover, fired at his pursuers, unleashing burst after burst, forcing them to take cover. Occasionally, though it wasn't his primary intention, he managed to hit some of the soldiers, wounding and incapacitating them or knocking them down, which reduced the number of fireflies following them, the number of shots that nearly hit them, the number of bullets that left holes in the walls or shattered the glass. He changed the magazine and followed Joel, who had already advanced far enough. Naruto raised his rifle and shot down 2 more soldiers, shooting them in the legs. He did so without flinching, pulling the trigger as he ran, stepping over the wounded and jumping onto a stretcher. As his feet touched the ground, he grabbed his pistol and fired at 2 more fireflies, shooting them down at the entrance to the corridor they had taken, the one that was supposed to get them out of that place, out of Marlene's clutches. He holstered his pistol and continued. Joel stood at the end of another hallway, pressing the elevator button with his thumb. The light flashed, indicating that it had been pressed correctly and the elevator had been called. But the man kept pressing it insistently, even when the beeping of the doors opening told them he was already there. Naruto pushed Joel inside. He raised his rifle and shot 3 other soldiers, forcing them to take cover, after which the doors closed with a soft click. With his fist, he pressed the button for the top floor, the hospital parking lot. Searching his pockets, Naruto tried to find another magazine for the rifle, but he didn't have any left. He grabbed the lanyard and removed it, leaving it on the elevator floor. He took his backpack from Joel's shoulder and pulled his Glock out, checking it was loaded and had its magazines. "If there are fireflies down there, I'll take care of it," he said, looking at the 2 pistols in his hands. Both were loaded, safety off, ready to fire. "You run and put Ellie in a car. Don't wait for me. Run away from here with her, to Jackson. And don't look back, do you understand, old man?" Joel didn't respond or say anything for a few seconds. The elevator descended slowly. They went from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor and a second later, to the ground floor. "Good luck, kid." "I don't believe in luck." The elevator doors opened and Naruto stepped out first. He looked left and right, aiming a gun in each direction. But the St. Mary's parking lot was completely empty of Firefly members. Only military vehicles, civilian cars, and the occasional ambulance filled the space. Layers of dust could be seen on the vehicles that hadn't been moved for years, accumulating until they formed dense surfaces that someone could even draw on. "Let's take a car," Joel declared, walking toward a vehicle that looked like it had been used. "It'll get us to Jackson faster and put all this behind us." He firmly took Ellie in his arms, passing one of them under his legs, and followed Naruto, who walked in front of them, now with only the Sig Sauer M18 in his right hand, while the Glock was back in its holster, held. They reached the vehicle without anyone appearing in front of them, without anyone shooting at them. Naruto tucked the pistol into the back of his waistband and opened the back door, allowing Joel to leave Ellie lying on the seats, her head resting on her small backpack. "Don't do it." Naruto turned, his fingers brushing the grip of the Sig. "Marlene. She could be our salvation," the woman assured, looking at Joel's revolver as it was pointed at her. "We could save the world, the people who aren't yet infected." "That's not a sure thing, not 100%. And Ellie's choice. What's there to choose? Choose her over everyone else. There's no need to be selfish, kid. The world is in a constant state of collapse. There were no stable governments. The military was an abusive, cruel force that imposed itself on the survivors in the quarantine zones, imparting a military dictatorship. People would do anything to survive, just as David did, setting aside any possible morality, any possible remorse or regret. Surviving was the only thing that mattered. Being selfish was the only thing that could keep a person alive. Naruto knew that, and he knew it all too well, much more than Marlene, much more than Joel. That's why he knew that nothing and no one could save the world, return it to the way it was before. People had grown accustomed, after 20 years, to surviving. Rebuilding society, governments would still force humans to survive, to take everything they needed above all else. A cure? No one wanted it anymore, no one cared. Even if there really was a cure, it wouldn't end the billions of infected people in the world, much less the mentality established after 20 years of no laws. Nobody wanted governments anymore. Nobody needed them. "That won't work," Naruto drew his Sig, pointing it at Marlene. "There is no cure for the world, Marlene, but you can't see that. Without question, you've used many people you thought were immune for your studies, your experiments. Did you ever ask? Did you ever even stop to think? No. You killed another girl, the daughter of a man who wanted your head, and she wanted no part of it. It's for the greater good." The finger squeezed the trigger, and the Sig spat out a bullet, fast and powerful, penetrating the woman's abdomen. Marlene fell to the ground, clutching her injured side, staring wildly at the boy towering over her with those intense blue eyes. You'll never stop looking for her, for any child who's immune, and you'll use them as guinea pigs, he declared, pressing the barrel of the gun against the forehead of the terrorist group's leader. I feel sorry for you. Another shot. Naruto. The boy threw down the gun and turned to Joel, giving him a sad, slightly melancholic smile. I guess Jackson is your stop, huh? I won't go with you. I don't deserve it. I've always been a lone wolf who survived well on his own. This has just been a phase, I guess. Naruto strapped his backpack onto his shoulders. It felt good to feel the weight of his katana, weapons, and supplies again. You should come. It wouldn't be wise, Joel. I'm a monster, he declared, laughing dryly. Naruto shook his head and extended his hand toward the man, who eyed it suspiciously. Tell Ellie it's been good traveling with her with you. But I suppose this is goodbye. See you later. Joel held the boy's hand tightly. It's not goodbye, you understand. Maria and Tommy will want you to come to Jackson, even if it's just for a visit. Naruto snorted. Just for Christmas. That will be enough for you. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.